Chapter 21. Ah! Naruto smirked softly as he held the rubber ball up, one hand above it, one below it, and smirked as it exploded outwards. There, did it. Now show me the next step. Jiraiya peered at the boy's work and then nodded his head before smirking a bit. Not bad, kid. Now do it with only one hand. What? But I did it. Naruto stared back at him, his eyes incredulous. What does it matter how I did it? It means, you're going to master this technique, not figure out how to make it work. Jiraiya nodded his head as another Jiraiya could be seen talking to the group of kins as they walked, while a third spoke with Temari. You've shown you can do it. Now, you just need to get up to the level where you can do it with only one hand. Otherwise, how will you do this? A fully formed Rasengan appeared in each of the man's hands, glowing brightly as he smirked at the expression on Naruto's face. Suddenly, he paused and frowned lightly. You know, now that I think about it, can you pop 2 balloons at once? Naruto stared back at him for a moment, before hanging his head as a loud curse filled the air, along with 2 massive groups of clones. You know what to do. Smiling benignly back at Naruto, Jiraiya nodded his head. Don't worry, you'll thank me for this in the end. He only received a glare in response. Aw. Jiraiya smirked softly as he sipped at his sake while he lazily glanced down his spyglass at some of the nicest views he'd seen in quite some time. Really, with all the shadow clones being thrown about, he wasn't sure why he didn't think of it sooner. Leaving the clones to deal with the kids, teaching them what they needed to know for now while he got to enjoy the finer things in life. Good sake, delightful women, and uninterrupted research. Are you really going to be this lazy? And of course she was going to ruin it. Turning his head, he found Kin, or at least a Kin, perched up on the wall above him, looking down at him with annoyed black eyes. She really was taking entirely too much enjoyment with that technique. Aren't you supposed to be training? The slightest tremor of irritation dripped into his voice as he asked his question. Aren't you supposed to be teaching? Her counter was more rhetorical than anything as she crossed her arms about her chest and glared down at him. Yes, well, there is a thing called shadow clones. Jiraiya noted before immediately regretting it as he saw the way her eyes narrowed even more. I'm aware of that. I'm using them myself. There was a pause before suddenly her voice took on an entirely too sweet tone. Just one question. Do you think the old man only gave me that one scroll? Who knows? Sensei was always a bit odd. Jiraiya waved his hand negligently as he glanced back into his spyglass. Yes, he even could have given me a scroll to have security scrolls commissioned from someone other than you, on every hot springs in Fire Country. Kin nodded her head and smiled sweetly at him. You know, the kinds that would force the steam to obscure anything from a distance, and would make it impossible for someone to hide when they were peeping up close. He wouldn't have. Sensei was a dedicated pervert. Jiraiya stared back at her, aghast. He helped me become the man I am today. Yes, but he also knew he was going to die and knew you might happen to neglect the training you're supposed to be giving. She grinned back at him, viciously. So, he might just have given me that very scroll, signed and sealed and ready to be put into motion just to make sure you did your job. You're bluffing. Jiraiya narrowed his eyes into slits as he stared back at the girl. Oh? Am I? She smiled, sweetly back at him. Jiraiya stared back at her a moment before grumbling lightly. I'm never playing poker with you. I was trained in Odo. Kin shrugged her shoulders a bit. You don't survive for very long if you don't have a good poker face. Fine. He muttered lightly under his breath as he collapsed his spyglass and stuffed it back into his pocket and throwing back the last of the sake. Back to work as it were then. Chop, chop. Kin agreed with a nod and a smirk beneath her mask. You do realize I'm only humoring you, do I don't have to put up with your whining, right? Jiraiya glanced back at Kin. Even if you did have a scroll, you'd never get it past me. If you say so, oh great and knowledgeable Jiraiya, Kin agreed with a nod of her head. Go ahead, keep pushing. See what happens when I decide to push back. Jiraiya glared lightly back at her, before stomping ahead of her with a grunt. Kin merely grinned as she followed after. Aw! A sudden explosion of force sent a gust of wind through the air around them, followed by another, then another, as Naruto's left and right started to swear vehemently. He still doesn't have it down yet? Temari arched a brow as she turned her head towards Jiraiya. It's only been a week since he started the 3rd stage. Jiraiya noted with a shrug of his shoulders. And I keep making him learn to do it without his little tricks as soon as he figures them out. He'd have a bastardized version of it up and running already if I didn't. Not to mention, I'm making him learn how to do 2 at the same time instead of just 1. You sure about that? Temari asked curiously as she glanced over just in time for another explosion to send her hair flying. Yup. Jiraiya nodded his head with a smirk. He was already able to get one up and running until I told him it was nice, now do it without cheating. That must have gone over well. Temari smirked softly as she lightly nodded her head. Indubitably, Jiraiya nodded his head in agreement before smiling pleasantly. About as pleasantly you are when I remind you that you still suck at reading people. Temari flushed brightly as she glared back at the man. Why the hell are you making me learn all this useless crap anyway? I'm a fighter. Because you need to be more than a fighter, Jiraiya stated reprovingly as he shook his head. I don't have time to teach all of you everything I know. Not fast enough. So, I'm teaching each of you a portion of what I know. Shaking his head, he looked away before frowning a bit as Kin suddenly popped up. Looking at her a moment, he tilted his head to the side before twitching slightly. I know you're not finished learning how to write fast enough, so what are you doing here? Just curious, when you gonna start having us learn to use the red stuff? Kin asked with a hungry twinkle in her eyes. When we're not this close to a high concentration of civilian people in territory not tightly controlled by Konoha ninja. Jiraiya stared back at Kin for a moment as if he was speaking to a young child. Because, we all know civilians react so well to the air being filled with demonic chakra. Wait, what? Temari's eyes widened suddenly as she stared back at the two. Demonic chakra? I told you, we get access to Naruto-sama's chakra. Kin stated flatly as she shook her head. What did you think I meant? Chakra. As in normal human chakra, Temari stated back, as her eyes started to flick, slightly wildly around her. Does that mean that, you turned us into Jinchuriki? Jiraiya stared at the girl before snorting loudly as he shook his head and lightly hit the top of her head with a knuckle. Stop being an idiot. That would require her to not automatically trying to find the absolute worst possibilities for her situation. Kin pointed out with a smug smirk on her lips. This from the person with an irrational aversion to sharing, even with herself. Temari noted with slightly narrowed eyes. I simply know my preferences. I want him all to myself. Kin nodded her head and crossed her arms about her chest. Damn it, am I going to have to give you another spanking already? Naruto's voice grumbled as Kin immediately brightened. It hasn't even been a month yet. I think she meant for it be more than a once-in-the-month kinda thing, brat. Jiraiya noted dryly as he shook his head as Kin nodded empathetically. I've been busy. Another Naruto declared defensively before his Rasengan attempts exploded spectacularly. Obviously I've been behaving too well. Kin muttered loud enough for one of the Narutos to hear her. Hey! Don't you even think about it. The Naruto turned around and glared at her, Rasengan swirling in his hands. You don't get to throw tantrums like that. And why not? Kin countered challengingly as she glared back at Naruto. Because I said so. Another voice chimed in from behind her as another Naruto was glaring back at her. But, that's not fair. Kin whined softly as she lightly stomped her foot on the ground. I think this was already covered, previously. Jiraiya noted as he couldn't help but let his lips twitch slightly upwards. I refuse to acknowledge the point. Kin declared primly before blinking when a Naruto turned to Temari. I don't suppose you'd be interested in giving her a spanking? Temari blinked a moment before tilting her head to the side as she considered Kin a moment. Would I be able to gag her? Hey! Sure. Temari wasn't sure which Naruto it came from but nodded her head all the same. I'll consider it. She lightly pursed her lips, tapping them lightly in thought. It would keep her quiet, now wouldn't it? I want him to spank me, though. Kin declared purposely as she gestured at the collected Narutos. I think that was the whole point of him offering it to her. Jiraiya chuckled softly. So it would be, actual punishment? But that defeats the whole point of spankings. Kin's whine only grew in volume as she stared back at the rest of them, aghast. No, that defeats the whole point of spankings encouraging you. Jiraiya chuckled softly as he slowly shook his head. But, we're going to be moving out a bit earlier this time. I've got a lead on Tsunade. Finally. One of the Narutos muttered, just before his unfinished Rasengans exploded with enough force to disperse him. Heh, teach you to run your mouth and stop paying attention. Jiraiya smirked a bit as he glanced between the three. So, send some clones to pack up, we're heading out. Where are we heading? Temari asked, a touch of curiosity dripping into her words as she arched a brow towards Jiraiya. Oh, you'll find out soon enough. Jiraiya chuckled, his eyes dancing lightly. Oh. Temari stared at the way Naruto was practically crowing with glee as they walked through the streets before she turned and looked at Jiraiya. How does he do it? Benton likes him. Jiraiya paused a moment before eyeing the boy critically. Well, actually, all things considered, I think that would be like saying Kin only likes him. Just what I need, even more competition, Kin grumbled audibly next to them. You're seriously taking the whole "I don't want to share Naruto" thing way too far. Temari noted with a frown of disapproval. I will cling to it as long as I can. Kin countered back as she lifted her chin and glared back up at the taller girl. Now, I just have to figure out how to get Naruto-sama to be willing to part with. Instantly, Naruto was hunched forward, his eyes narrowed into slits as he was immediately surrounded by 5 growling clones. I don't think he's interested. Temari noted dryly with a slow shake of her head. I wonder if he realizes that he's going to have to start paying for our clothing, food, and supplies soon. Instantly, Naruto froze, before turning his head towards Temari, eyes wide as he stared back at her. What? How else are we supposed to be paying for everything? Temari snapped back with no small amount of relish in her voice. We don't get to have money, we don't get to make money, and we're completely and totally dependent on you. Which means all those shiny coins. Enjoy them while you can. Horror lanced across Naruto's face as he turned his attention to stare wildly over Jiraiya, who nodded his head with a bemused chuckle. Well, it's not quite that bad, but she does have a point. You have to feed and clothe them. While Temari's vicious smirk only grew, Jiraiya continued. Of course, you'll probably never have to do any kind of cleaning or laundry or anything like that. Hell, as long as you trust them, they'll even have to do the cooking for you. Temari froze before she turned her head and glared a bit back at Jiraiya. But I can already do all of that stuff with shadow clones. Naruto protested a bit, causing Temari's attention to look back at him for a moment before he continued. Besides, can you imagine how bad of a cook she probably is? I am a very good cook, thank you very much. Temari hissed out with a glare. Ask my brother. You probably make him tell you it tastes good. Naruto muttered quietly under his breath as he refused to meet her eyes. Grr. Temari glared back at him with glinting, narrowed eyes. I'll see about getting you in touch with my account manager, brat. Jiraiya smirked a bit as he shook his head. Of course, if you keep pulling stuff like that. Well, we might be able to get Princess back by just getting her that much in debt to you. Huh? Naruto blinked a bit as he turned his head towards Jiraiya in confusion. Tsunade Heim, well, she's got one particularly unflattering but incredibly accurate nickname. He smirked slowly, his eyes starting to twinkle mischievously. She's the legendary sucker. But she can still help bushy brows and everyone, right? Naruto shifted, nervously as he looked anxiously back at Jiraiya. Oh, she's one of a kind, she is. Jiraiya nodded his head as his eyes grew distant. You could look all over the world and you'll never find anyone else like her. What does that make you yake, then? Temari snapped out with narrowed eyes. Her own woman. Jiraiya turned his head and gave Temari a hard look. Yuyake was her own woman, and nothing like Tsunade. Naruto's voice went quiet as he whispered over to Kin. Does that make sense to you? Vaguely. He likes to mention that name around Sunshine a lot. Kin noted as she lightly tapped her lower lip in thought, even as she lightly inched herself closer to Naruto. He does? Naruto blinked a bit as he glanced over at Kin curiously. Since when? Since we left Konoha? She paused as she turned her head and stared at Naruto. Haven't you been paying attention? Not really. Naruto offered back with a bit of a sheepish grin. Been kinda busy. Figures. Kin muttered softly and shook her head before she looked back at Jiraiya. So, we're in Tanzakugai, where to next? Well, she can't be too far away, considering. Jiraiya shrugged his shoulders as he pursed his lips. Wait, wasn't there supposed to be a castle up there? Temari pointed over the wall. I mean, we should be able to see it, shouldn't we? Frowning slightly, Jiraiya's eyes narrowed. Yeah, we should. Without wasting another moment, he jumped up onto the wall, followed shortly by Naruto and the girls. I don't know if I'd really call that a castle anymore. Kin snickered softly as she pointed towards the collapsed ruin of what once was a castle. Huh? Jiraiya frowned darkly, until he saw a man running away from the castle. Hey! You! What happened to the castle? A demon monster. It just suddenly appeared and completely destroyed the castle. The man's eyes were wide, panicked as he paused where he was, throwing nervous, fearful glances back at the castle. You should be running too. What kind of demon monster? Jiraiya's eyes were going harder and harder as he watched the man carefully. A giant snake. The man's face was covered in a cold sweat as he spoke. It completely destroyed the castle instantly. A giant snake? Naruto spoke up as Kin's face instantly became pale and drawn. How big was it? I came across one back home and... Naruto, this is probably either the snake you met before or one of its close relatives. Jiraiya's face was hard and drawn as he turned towards the castle. Orochimaru. Kin's eyes were wide as she stared fearfully towards the devastated castle. We'll see. Jiraiya agreed with a nod of his head before he suddenly leaped towards the inner walls, heading towards the destruction. As Naruto immediately jumped to follow after him, Kin stood frozen on the rooftop staring at the ruins. Arching a brow, Temari turned her attention towards the other girl, her arms crossed about her chest. "What are you waiting for?" "Orochimaru," Kin stated flatly as she stared fearfully towards the castle ruin. "What, you're waiting for him to show up here?" Temari asked as she canted her head to the side, her voice dripping with a venomous sarcasm. "You don't understand. He's up there." Kin snapped back, her eyes trembling with fear. "He's up there, and as soon as he sees me, he's going to kill me. And here I thought you cared about what happened to our master." She spat the second word with a grimace of distaste even as she arched a brow back at Kin. "Ido!" It left her lips like a shot as Kin turned her head and glared back at Temari. Temari met that glare with a coolly arched brow before her shoulders rolled into a shrug. "And yet, here you are, watching him run towards the danger. Doesn't seem like caring much to me. You don't understand. It's Orochimaru. He'll kill me." Kin shivered as she suddenly clutched at her arms. "Well, in case you forgot, if he kills him then we're just as dead." Temari snapped back and shook her head as she started to leap forward. "So either way, we're dead. Not much point in being a coward about it." "I'm not a coward," Kin declared sharply as she stared at their retreating forms and rubbed at her own arms. "I'm not." "Oh." Temari landed with a quiet thud as she glanced around, taking in the demolished wall and the collapsed castle before slowly shaking her head as she looked at a pensive-looking Jiraiya and a grumbling Naruto. "So, I'm gonna guess we missed the party? So nice of you to point out the obvious." Jiraiya frowned as he crouched down and inspected the rubble, before tilting his head to the side just a bit. "Huh, she's gotten rusty. Used to be she would've demolished at least an extra 10 feet with that technique." "So, it wasn't Orochimaru after all?" Temari asked curiously as she lightly arched a brow. "The wall was Tsunade. The castle was Orochimaru." Jiraiya corrected absently as he slowly stood back up and looked around. Still, if they fought there'd be more signs. Slowly pacing around, he moved to the opposite wall and frowned lightly as he crouched down, then picked up a fallen Sanban from the ground and took a sniff. Nodding his head, he grunted slightly before he tossed it back down. Poison Sanban, probably from Shizune. They were standing here. Orochimaru here, someone else on his left. He's the one that intercepted the Sanban. Shifting slightly, he frowned again as he saw the drops of browning crimson that dotted the ground in a small group of splatters a little over 2 feet from the footprints he'd identified as Orochimaru's. "Looks like blood. Guess Orochimaru still remembers. What are we going to do then?" Naruto glanced over at Jiraiya before frowning as he looked around, suddenly alarmed. "Where's Kinchan?" "Back where we took off from." Temari answered with a shrug. "Too scared to come closer. And she thinks that being off on her own, standing there, atop of a wall is safer than sticking near me?" Jiraiya shook his head and muttered slightly while rubbing his face. "Well, he's not here, so she needs to get herself back over here." When neither of the two of them made any more to respond, Naruto with a look of confusion on his face, and Temari standing there with a placid stance, his eyes narrowed. "That means one of you two needs to go get her." "Okay." Temari nodded her head, but made no move to be the one to do it. Naruto stared back at Temari for a moment before grumbling slightly as he jumped up to the wall and bounded towards Kin. When he was gone, Jiraiya turned his head and arched a brow at Temari. "And is there any particular reason you didn't do that?" "No one ordered me to." She arched a brow as she casually crossed her arms about her chest. "You never gave me a direct order, neither did he. So, why would I do it?" "Because that's what your place is to be now," Jiraiya stated flatly as he shook his head. "Not my place to go about volunteering to do things just because someone wants them done." She snapped back. "He wants me to do something for him? He's going to have to make me." "He will if you keep pushing him like that." Jiraiya shook his head and sighed before he performed a quick fire technique that scorched the area he'd been examining and the poison Sanban with it. "Well, the search for the princess continues. Let's go get something to eat." "Oh, why are you way back here?" Naruto's voice was more than slightly irritated as he lightly glared at Kin, causing the shaken girl to flinch slightly back. Sorry." She spoke up quickly, looking away as she seemed to shrink back and away from him. It's just... Orochimaru." "Yeah, so?" Naruto tilted his head to the side in confusion as he stared back at Kin. "It's not like you've never met him." "He didn't want to kill me then," she snapped back as a bit of fire sparked back into her voice. "Again, so? You're just gonna stand there and let him?" Naruto answered with a trace of irritation entering his voice. No, I'm not. Why do you think I stayed here instead of going up there? She gestured vaguely with her hand back towards the ruins of the castle. You mean, like the pervert said, you stayed here all alone while the person who can actually fight him went up there? Naruto paused there as he glared back at Kin. Are you trying to get yourself killed? I'm trying to not get myself killed. Kin snapped back as she shivered quietly and curled herself into a tighter posture. Hence why I'm staying away from where he is. Well, we don't know where he is. Naruto almost yelled the words as he glared back at her. All we know is that he isn't up there. So he could be here, anywhere. He could have been right here and you might have? The words felt thick and unwieldy then, leaving him uncertain and insecure as he stared back at her for a moment. As he stared, she squirmed slowly as the pressure gnawed its way into her stomach. When she spoke, it wasn't soft or regretful, and she regretted it almost immediately. Yeah, like you care. They both stared as the realization of just what it was she'd said sunk in, and immediately she could see the way his eyes flinched back slightly. There was something in them for a moment, a dark, aching hurt that bubbled up in a flash. Then it was gone and he pointed up to the castle. Get up there, now. His voice was angry, though he was obviously trying to hide it, control it. He was failing at it just as obviously as his jaw clenched and his teeth grit. Wincing slightly, her mouth opened to respond, only one look from those angry blue eyes thickened her tongue enough that it refused to move itself at her urging. Silently and grudgingly she nodded her head, before quietly jumping forward, landing on the ground and starting to move towards the ruins. He landed behind her a moment later, the air heavy with his silence, and she could feel the way it weighed on her, leaving her wondering just how much of a mistake she might have just made. Oh! Jiraiya glanced from Naruto to Kin and then to Temari before he reached up and rubbed his face. Kin was sulking, Naruto was glowering, and, for a change, Temari was doing neither as she had the slightest little smug smirk of satisfaction. It was like he suddenly had an incredibly juvenile version of his genin team all over again. Okay, what's wrong this time? He grumbled a bit as glanced down at the three brats, watching as Temari shrugged her shoulders helplessly. Kin glanced away, and Naruto just sent a glare at Kin. Let me rephrase, what did Kin do this time? It was odd to think of the girl as the one that was always screwing up. Previously it had always been one of the boys in the groups he trained that seemed to have a chronic case of foot in mouth, though there had only been one girl in each of those groups, so that might be it. Still, he couldn't help but feel a slight sigh of irritation leave his lips as he felt Kin's eyes snap up at him. Why are you assuming I did something? The voice was almost squawking with outrage as Jiraiya pushed back the entrance to the bar. Because even Naruto has more tact than you? Temari noted blandly as she let her eyes flick down at the girl. Yeah, hey. Naruto glared at Temari before he shifted his glare at Kin, who immediately dropped her eyes. You saying you didn't? Kin opened her mouth to respond before snapping it shut as she kept her eyes down, her voice mumbling out. No, Naruto-sama. As the sigh left his lips, Jiraiya shook his head and glanced around the bar, only to blink slightly as his eyes fell on a honey-eyed blonde. Well, well, damn, this is turning out to be the day from nostalgic hell. The woman muttered lightly with a half-glare. What are you doing here, Jiraiya? Hello to you too, Tsunade Haim. Chapter 22. So, how did Sarutobi manage to talk you into taking on another genin team? Tsunade shifted the neck of her bottle about slightly before she took a swing. I thought you'd finished with all that after your last pupil. He didn't. Jiraiya glanced over at where Naruto was sitting between a subdued Kin and a smirking Temari. I'm training him, the girls were simply a part of the package. What, a new prodigy in your legacy of perversion? Tsunade snorted softly as she shook her head derisively. Hey, they're the perverts, not me. Naruto snapped back as he grumbled a bit, glaring from Kin to Jiraiya. Are you calling me a pervert? Temari drawled out as she arched a brow back at him. This coming from the boy who uses that technique. I was talking about them. Naruto firmly pointed to Kin and then Jiraiya. And I knocked out a Kage with it, so stop yelling at me about it, sunshine. Right, because I'm suddenly going to make things so easy for you. Temari snapped back as her eyes flashed just slightly. You know, blonde girl there seems rather familiar. Tsunade noted as she squinted her eyes at Temari, pointedly ignoring Naruto entirely. Can't quite remember whom, though. She's Yuyake's niece. Jiraiya stated flatly as he locked his eyes challengingly onto Tsunade's. For a moment, there was a flash of too many things in Tsunade's eyes, before she grunted lightly and looked away. Then what's she doing with you instead of in Suna? Orochimaru and Sand attacked Konoha? Jiraiya stated suddenly as he kept his eyes on Tsunade, never looking away. We were ready enough for them, so that we were able to beat them soundly. There was a pause as he leaned forward with his hands rising and lacing together to catch his chin. Except for how Sensei died fighting Orochimaru. The air went still as the two Sannin locked eyes, filling it a sudden tension. But, I suppose he already told you something along those lines. Kin flinched lightly in her seat closest to the wall, her head hung and her voice silent. Temari arched a brow but remained silent. Between them, Naruto crossed his arms about his chest and glared forward at the table. So he was telling the truth. Tsunade shifted the bottle just a bit as she continued to peer down into it. And here I thought he was just shooting off his mouth again. Huh, go figure. That's all you have to say? Jiraiya asked quietly as he stared back at her with an unreadable expression written across his face. You were expecting something else? She shook her head and caught her face on one palm before honey brown eyes half shut as they regarded the man. So, why are you here? Jiraiya paused a moment as he glanced over at Naruto before shrugging again as he looked back at her. On behalf of the people of Konoha, I'm here to offer you the position of 5th Hokage. Everyone else at the table froze at those words. Next to Tsunade, the woman's formerly silent apprentice let out a soft gasp of shock, turning toward Tsunade. Tsunade-sama. A silent glare cut off anything else the woman might have said before Tsunade shut her eyes as if in contemplation, before suddenly snorting. Not interested. Find someone else to take that fool's job. Naruto coughed out on the food he'd put in his mouth before he shot up, glaring at Tsunade. Who the hell do you think you are, calling that a fool's job? Humph, your last blonde brat was more polite than this one, Jiraiya. Tsunade snorted as she twisted her bottle of sake in her fingers. Smarter and better looking, too. His name, Princess, is Naruto. Naruto Uzumaki. Jiraiya smirked softly as he watched the recognition flash across her eyes. And you better remember it. Naruto crowed out as he glared back at Tsunade. Next to him, Temari groaned softly as she buried her face in her hand, and Kin managed a faint smile. Across from him, however, Tsunade was less than impressed. I don't bother wasting time remembering the names of idiots. With a dismissive wave of her hand, Tsunade shook her head and looked back at Jiraiya. I thought you had better taste in students than that. This one doesn't even know when to shut up. Jiraiya took a slow sip of his sake as he looked back at Tsunade with an arched brow. When she only glared, angrily back at him, he couldn't help but let a slight sigh of frustration leave his lips. So, she wanted to play it that way, huh? Really, princess? She didn't flinch from his tone, instead letting her look turn back into a glare leveled at him. Well, obviously I was wrong, Jiraiya. Hey! Naruto's voice rose up again as he looked back at Tsunade with narrowed eyes. Relax. Jiraiya reached over and lightly ruffled Naruto's hair before turning his attention back to Tsunade. You shouldn't be so dismissive, princess. I think the brat here would surprise you. Doubtful, Tsunade said flatly. Now, you've made your pitch. You can go home now. You sure that's your decision, Tsunade? Jiraiya lightly tilted his head to the side as he studied her intently. That position is for suckers. Her voice was flat and cold as she gave her response, her honey brown eyes like chips of frozen amber. The Hokages have been nothing but a bunch of idiotic fools who dash. Take that back. Naruto's voice rose even louder as he glared at her. Or even if you're a lady, I'll beat you until you do. Oh really, Tsunade stood up, smirking as she met the boy's glare inches from his face. You should learn your place, you little brat. I could beat you with one finger. Bring it. I'll show you. Naruto growled back as his fingers curled into fists. Outside then. Tsunade flipped one of her ponytails over her shoulder before she stepped out of the booth. And you're paying for my sake when you lose. Tsunade-sama. Shizune began to protest with wide eyes, before Naruto cut her off. What? No way. Naruto jumped out of the booth but glared at the woman. I'm not going to pay for some old hag's booze habit. Tsunade froze in her spot, slowly turning her head around to face him as one eye twitched just slightly. What did you just call me? You were his genin teammate. Naruto pointed straight at Jiraiya with a smirk. Which means, no matter much you want to pretend to be otherwise, you're old, granny. Your friend really shouldn't have said that. Shizune muttered to the girls as she caught her face in her hand. Now Tsunade-sama's really going to be difficult. He's not my friend. Temari's voice was acidic as she hissed back at the woman. Shizune paused a moment, eyeing Temari critically before tilting her head to the side. Ha, got a thing for younger men then? Temari stared back at Shizune for a moment, before Kin burst into laughter next to her and Jiraiya chuckled softly. I am not his lover. Temari blushed brightly as she glared back at Shizune. Drawn by Temari's outburst, Tsunade paused a moment as her attention was diverted away from Naruto and she arched a brow at the group, specifically at Jiraiya. Well, she's telling the truth. Jiraiya nodded his head in agreement as he grinned, slyly back at Tsunade. As of this point in time, she is not sleeping with him. Still, give it time and... Not interested, Temari hissed out with a growl towards Jiraiya. Time will tell. Jiraiya grinned unrepentantly back at Temari before arching a brow at Tsunade. Are you really going to go through with that? Humph, like I'll need more than a finger to beat a loud-mouthed brat like him. Tsunade narrowed his eyes. Though you'll be the one paying for his medical bills when I'm done. And what does he get if it takes you more than one finger? Jiraiya asked curiously as he tilted his head to the side. I mean, you've hardly made it worthwhile for me to allow him to take you up on your little challenge. Like a brat like him has any chance. Tsunade huffed in annoyance as she glared back at Jiraiya. A disrespectful, undisciplined little punk like him won't need more than that. Hey! Naruto's voice cracked as it rose in outrage. Who the hell do you think I am? Completely ignoring Naruto, Jiraiya smirked back at Tsunade. How about, if it takes more than one finger, you have to come back to Konoha with us, just to heal his friends? I'm not going to be your fifth Hokage. Tsunade stated flatly as she glared back at the man. And the bet was just to heal his friends, not take the hat. Jiraiya held up his hands and smiled back at her. You could leave right after you were done, unless, of course, you don't think you can beat a rookie genin with one finger? Fine, Tsunade grabbed Naruto by the back of his jacket as she spat out the agreement. Come on, you little runt. It's time for you to learn a little respect. You crazy old bat. Naruto struggled, valiantly, though ineffectually, against the woman's iron grip. Let me go. Faye. Tsunade shook her head in displeasure as she stepped out into the street and then casually flicked her wrist, sending Naruto flying into the street in front of her. Whiny little idiot. Twisting in midair, Naruto landed in a crouch as his hands palmed the street itself. Slowly pushing up, he glared back at where Tsunade put one hand on her hip as she lifted up her index finger on her other hand. With an almost bored expression, she tilted her head to the side. I'll tell you what, I'm feeling generous, you little brat, so. Naruto answered her with a wordless shout as his fingers rose up into a single sign and, suddenly, the street was filled with clones, hanging off the buildings, each and every one of them glaring back at Tsunade. As Tsunade stared in shock, Jiraiya exited the bar and leaned up against the wall. Well, I hope you've kept up your practice, princess. You're going to need it if you're going to limit yourself to one finger. Jiraiya grinned cheekily back at Tsunade while Shizune, Kin and Temari exited the bar. What kind of reckless idiot teaches a genin the shadow clone technique? Tsunade turned her head and glared back at Jiraiya. Don't look at me, he knew it when I first met him. Jiraiya held up his hands in mock surrender. Oh, dear. Shizune's eyes were wide and shocked as she slowly looked around. How did he? That's an impressive number of clones. Ready to give up, Granny? One of the clones asked with a grin curling on his lips. Just for that, I'm going to squish you first. Tsunade muttered slightly before crouching down and flicking a pebble on the street. It immediately shot through the air with a crack. The clone stared at her in disbelief for a moment before it exploded into a quickly dispersing cloud of smoke. Behind it, 4 other clones immediately followed. Smirking softly, she stood back up, holding her finger up. Sure you don't want to give up, brat? It literally rained kunai down on her in response. Her finger moved quickly, catching a tip of a kunai, then another, and another. Each of them clung to her finger, caught in the thin layer of chakra before she danced back, evading the remaining fall before flicking her finger and sending the 3 kunai spinning through the air. Only this time not a single clone was dispersed as the kunai all seemed to split in half before they could reach the blonde figures. Blinking slightly, Tsunade tilted her head to the side as she studied the swarm of figures around her. Ha! That's a new one. Shaking her head, Tsunade frowned as she started to run forward, her finger trailing on the, collecting kunai as she ran. When she reached a likewise charging clone, she pivoted to the side. As her body twisted about, a chain of chakra connected kunai snapped out, catching the clone by surprise as it snaked around behind it, then caught its neck in the connected kunai. Shaking her head, Tsunade smirked at the rest of the Narutos. Oh, I see, only good at stopping head-on attacks like that, huh? With a dismissive flick of her wrist, the clone was sent flying crashing into another group and smashing them into the ground. So what's a loud-mouthed brat like you care about the Hokages? It's my dream to become Hokage, one of the figures shouted angrily. I don't care who the hell you think you are, I'm not going to just sit here while you call them fools and idiots. My dream is to be a Hokage greater than even the 4th. Images rose unbidden before Tsunade's mind, of a bright-eyed boy, looking so much like Naruto, proclaiming a dream so similar to his. Then another face came unbidden, a man with long hair and a kind smile. Reflexively she trembled, her free hand reaching up, catching hold of the necklace hanging from her neck. Reacting to the pause, the Naruto clone surged forward like a wave from three sides. Snapping out of her reflection, Tsunade frowned darkly as the chain of kunai whipped around her. With a violent snap, it broke the wave, sending them crashing back to disperse into smoke and property damage. Still they came. When one slipped inside of the curving momentum of her makeshift whip, her finger curled back and she moved her hand in close. As a slight pulse of tightly controlled chakra deflected the grinding edge of the clone's blades, she would bring her finger up and a flick would send it flying back with the whip suddenly flicking around her again. Through the broken wave, Naruto raced forward, glowing spheres of chakra pulsing in each of his hands. Her eyes widening, Tsunade twisted her wrist, sending the kunai chain to crack into him. Only it was deflected to the side, leaving him unharmed. As the Rasengan spheres suddenly began to bubble and distort, Tsunade closed her hand into a fist and slammed it down into the street. Immediately, whole street shook as if an earthquake was ripping through the air and the street indented. The force of the blow caused the street blocks to shift and rise up, one catching the edge of Naruto's sandal as he stumbled forward under the unstable ground. His eyes widening, Naruto twisted around, trying to keep his balance, before the spheres in his hands exploded violently. Sent spiraling around, he landed on his side a short distance away. Quickly rolling back onto his feet, he was treated to the sight of Tsunade glaring at him for a moment before her attention turned to Jiraiya. "What the hell have you been teaching this kid?" Tsunade glared, angrily back at the man. "Oh, a little of this, a little of that." Jiraiya casually brushed a bit of dust off of his clothes as he smirked back at her. "That and he seems to have gotten a rudimentary understanding of mass clone tactics. At least against opponents he has no chance in hell against." "Hey!" Naruto affixed a glare at Jiraiya, his eyes narrowed into slits. Still, he did win. Jiraiya ignored Naruto as he continued, smirking at Tsunade. "I?" Frowning a moment, Tsunade looked down at her dust-covered fist, then scowled at him. "Bastard. Sticks and stones, princess, sticks and stones." Jiraiya's eyes gleamed back at Tsunade. "I do believe you know what you owe him. I'll think about it." Tsunade's face twisted sourly. "I can't believe you're trying to teaching him that technique. Better than the one they call his Kage killer." Temari muttered audibly as she glared at Naruto. "I beat the old man with it, so, Naya." Naruto stuck his tongue out at Temari before he crossed his arms about his chest and glowered back at Tsunade. "And what the hell is that supposed to mean?" Tsunade looked back at Naruto with narrowed eyes before she shook her head and grunted lightly. "It doesn't matter." When Naruto opened his mouth to protest again, his eyes burning angrily, Tsunade cut him off with a flick of her wrist and a grunted change of topic. "So, what's the deal with the girls then, Jiraiya?" "Oh, that." Jiraiya nodded his head a bit before glancing at Kin and Temari, then giving an innocent smile back at Tsunade. "They're his spoils." Instantly she froze in place as Shizun's eyes widened next to the two girls, before Tsunade narrowed her eyes into cold slits. "His spoils? Not like I had a choice in the matter." Naruto muttered quietly under his breath. "What the hell is a kid doing taking spoils?" Tsunade turned her head and glared at Jiraiya. "What the hell was that old bastard thinking? It was that or execute me." Kin spoke up quietly as she didn't quite look at Naruto. "I was given the choice. I chose this." "I didn't." Temari grunted sourly as she glared back at Kin. "I'm in this position to help keep Suna in line." "It still doesn't excuse the old man from eager." Tsunade reached up and pinched the bridge of her nose. "I was a sound nin." Kin's voice was barely audible to Tsunade's ears as she kept her head firmly down. "I was one of Orochimaru's little pets. One of his pawns. Do you really think he could have just let me go with Orochimaru planning an attack?" "I need a damn drink." Tsunade muttered sourly as she stalked back into the bar, pushing past Shizun and the girls and ducking inside. "Right, sure you do, princess." Jiraiya called out as he followed after her. "Because we all know you weren't already drowning yourself in sake when we arrived." "Shut up, you old pervert." Tsunade's voice could be heard echoing through the air. As the few remaining Naruto clones dispersed, Naruto himself grunted lightly and stalked back into the bar as he pointedly ignored Kin and Temari. Left alone with the two girls, Shizun attempted a slight, almost timid smile. The little genius here is not only a coward, but apparently went and pissed off our master," Temari said with a casual shrug of her shoulders. "Not exactly the hardest thing to do, considering he's pretty much a brat a lot of the time, but she really seems to have stepped in it this time." Kin looked up long enough to glare back at Temari before her head hung again as she made no response or attempt at rebuttal. "Is she normally that quiet?" Shizun asked curiously as her eyes slid between the girls. Hardly, Temari snorted softly and shook her head as she glared back at Kin. Normally she's running her mouth or acting like a pervert. Just wish I knew how to get her to shut up like this more often. Shizen's lips twitched lightly as she looked at Temari for a moment, and the blonde girl was given the distinct impression that it wasn't her she was seeing. When Temari shifted slightly and looked away, Shizen realized what she'd done and quickly held up her hands. Sorry. You're a lot like how I remember your aunt being. Hot-blooded and sarcastic. Did everyone in Konoha know her or something? Temari hissed lightly and grunted as she glared back at Shizen, while Kin perked up a bit and looked back at Temari curiously. Just the Sannin and those who were close to them. Shizen's smile faded and she shook her head. I only met her once. I wasn't even a genin at the time, but she left an impression. I only got the chance because my uncle was watching me that day and he took me with him when he went to see Tsunade-sama. Oh, joy. Temari shook her head as she glanced over at Kin. So, not only does she have to worry about Orochimaru, but I do too. Shizen couldn't meet their eyes at that, her face staring into the ruined street as she brought her hand up, biting at the nail of her thumb. Orochimaru is? I'm sorry, Tsunade-sama wouldn't want me talking about him. Temari narrowed her eyes as she watched the way Shizen reacted, bits and pieces clicking into place as Jiraiya's lessons whispered at the back of her mind. There was something going on. Tsunade was hiding something Shizen knew about, something involving Orochimaru. But, as she stared back at the weak smile plastering itself across Shizen's face, she wasn't sure what. Oh, so, you think a brat like him can actually learn the Rasengan? Tsunade fell back into the booth with a quiet thud as she lifted up her previously discarded bottle of sake. I'm right here. Naruto snapped back as he glared back at Tsunade and thrust a finger at her. And I don't care what you or any of those other people say. I will become Hokage. Save yourself a lot of pain and heartbreak, kid, forget about a dead-end dream like that and move on. Tsunade closed her eyes and brought her sake to her lips. Chasing after that dream has brought about more pain and suffering than you can imagine. Not to mention all the pain and suffering they heap on their families. Tsunade. Jiraiya's voice took on a warning tone as his eyes narrowed dangerously. I refuse to back down. I don't give up, I won't go back on my word. I will become Hokage. Naruto stood up to his full height as he glared back up at the woman. I don't care what gets in my way, I'm going to keep going and I won't let it stop me. Stupid little brat. Tsunade muttered sourly as she looked away and took another sip from her sake. Where the hell did you find this kid? Orochimaru messed with his seal, sensei asked me to fix it for him. Jiraiya caught the look of panic and horror that suddenly settled across Naruto's face and let out a sigh of annoyance. She already knows about that, brat. You think I'd talk to someone about it that didn't already know? Meh, not like you're the first. Tsunade took a sip of her sake and looked away, her lips curling down into a frown. Just shitty luck you got born into that cursed clan. What? Naruto froze in place, staring back at Tsunade with wide, uncertain eyes. Sighing audibly, Jiraiya shook his head as he caught his chin on his palm. How much did sensei tell you your family, Naruto? That they were dead. Naruto looked away as his words fell flat past his lips. I figured that's why he used me for it. That's it? Tsunade paused as she looked over her bottle back at Naruto, before shaking her head. Damn, sensei was more of a bastard than I thought. Jiraiya seemed more than slightly perturbed as he looked back at Naruto. He didn't tell you anything? What's there to tell? There was a sudden look of anger flashing across Naruto's face. I was just another orphan without any family, so the fourth used me to seal the demon. Yup, sensei really was a piece of work after all. Tsunade took another sip of her sake. And you wonder why I don't want to go back to Konoha and be the Hokage? Naruto, you weren't just randomly picked out. Jiraiya spoke quietly as he stared down at his hands. You were specifically picked because of your family. What? Naruto only looked even more confused as he stared back at Jiraiya. The Kyuubi has been contained before. Tsunade answered as she took a sip from her sake and her eyes gazed off into the distance. You're the third that I'm aware of. And all of you have had one thing in common. When Naruto turned his head back to Tsunade, his expression full of questions, Jiraiya spoke. All three of you were Uzumaki. You weren't just some random orphan, Naruto. You were the only Uzumaki left in Konoha, you were the only one that could be used. They didn't survive that day, Jiraiya stated solemnly as he stared down at the table and took a long sip of sake himself. But I know that they'd be proud of you. If I'm supposed to be so special, why did everyone hate me then? Naruto's eyes had refused to look back at Jiraiya. Because people, especially in Konoha, are idiots and fools. Tsunade stated flatly as she took another sip of her sake and shook her head. Oi, get me some more sake, Jiraiya. Are you broke again, Tsunade? Jiraiya palmed his face and groaned. Nope, hit all sevens on a slots just before you and the other jackass showed up. Tsunade made a sour face and shook her head before she brightened visibly. But, since you're here anyway, I might as well take advantage of it. I can't believe how shameless you turned out. Jiraiya muttered under his breath before he stood up and stalked over towards the bar. Heh, I grew up with you and Orochimaru for teammates, so if there's anyone to blame, it's you too, Tsunade said sardonically as she turned her head to Naruto. So, why the hell do you want to be Hokage if Konoha treated you like shit? Because unlike you, I actually care about people, Naruto snapped back with a growl. And I'm going to prove to the ones that want to ignore me, that want to pretend I don't exist that I'm there. That I won't go away and that they can't ignore me. I will prove to them that I'm not a monster. That I can be strong enough to protect everyone. Nobody's strong enough to protect everyone. The words were soft as they left Tsunade's lips as the sake suddenly seemed to dry up in her mouth. Nobody. I don't care. I'm not going to just sit around letting people hurt the people I care about. I'm going to stand up and stop them. Ume Naruto Uzumaki. I'll never give up, do you hear me? Never. Naruto stood tall and proud as he glared back up at Tsunade, his eyes shining defiantly. Keep telling yourself that, brat. Tsunade muttered lightly, though in a more subdued tone now. Keep telling yourself that. I don't back down and I don't go back on my word. That's the way I live my life. Naruto's voice rose, full and strong as every eye in the bar turned towards him. Damn it, shut up already. Everyone's staring. Tsunade palmed her face and groaned. Damn it, Jiraiya, why'd you bring this shit for brains in here? I'm not going to just dash. Naruto's protest was cut off as Jiraiya sighed and pulled on the back of his jacket, forcing him back against his seat. Naruto, even though you have a point, we're in a bar. Jiraiya shook his head and lightly ruffled the kid's hair. You can yell at her more when you're outside again. Hey! Tsunade narrowed her eyes at Jiraiya. Just because you've gone far enough over the deep end to think that a brat like that can learn the Rasengan doesn't give you the right to tell him he can yell at me. Jiraiya arched a brow as he looked back at Tsunade, tilting his head to the side. You really sure that I can't think of a reason for him to yell at you, princess? Tsunade didn't flinch at his words, though her head turned to the side. Shut up, you old pervert. Where the hell do you get off saying I can't master it? Give me 3 more days and I'll have it completed. Naruto growled angrily as he glared back at Tsunade. That move was known only to, what, 3 people, Jiraiya? Tsunade snorted softly and shook her head. The 4th, you, his teacher, and his last surviving student. Now, what, you think this little brat can figure it out? Oh, you never know, Jiraiya said with a smile as he shifted back, his arms crossing about his chest. I think the kid might just surprise you again. Humph. Tsunade shook her head. There's surprising and there's surprising, Jiraiya. That thing he used was pretty unrefined and incomplete. Grr. Naruto's eyes burned angrily as he glared back at Tsunade. I can, too. So, again, how come the brat here was stupid enough to take on spoils? Doesn't he know how much trouble they're likely to get him in? Tsunade asked as she cut Naruto off with a dismissive wave of her hand. They've already been getting me into trouble, Naruto said with sour mutter, though he never stopped glaring at Tsunade. More like they just make things difficult for you, Jiraiya chuckled softly as he waved over a waiter. Some more sake. Don't they teach you anything about spoils anymore? Tsunade grabbed a bottle as soon as it appeared on the table and leaned back into the booth. I swear, if you did it just because you were thinking with a piece of your anatomy like Jiraiya here. It wasn't like that. She chose to be a spoil. Naruto immediately protested with his hands raising up. I'm not a pervert. That's Ino and Kin and him. When Naruto pointed towards Jiraiya, Tsunade arched a brow lightly at the boy. Ino? Inoichi's daughter. Jiraiya clarified with a slight grin on his lips. He named his daughter Ino? Tsunade repeated as she stared back at the other Sannin with a blink. I know that they're obsessed with that whole Ino-Shikacho connection, but... Don't look at me, I've yet to meet someone from a clan who wasn't crazy in some way or another, Jiraiya said with an entirely too innocent grin on his face. Tsunade opened her mouth, as if to agree, before suddenly her eyes narrowed into twin slits. I'm from a clan, Jiraiya. And how does this contradict what I just said? Jiraiya asked with that same grin curled on his lips. Bastard, Tsunade grunted sourly and sighed as she took another drink of sake. So, what's Inoichi's girl got to do with all this? She's the kid's girlfriend, Jiraiya said with a suggestive waggle of his eyebrows. She is not my girlfriend. Naruto almost shouted out with a shudder. She'll try to make me dress and act like Sasuke. Jiraiya. What the hell? Tsunade asked as she stared back at the man. Naruto, why don't you get the girls and head back to the hotel? Tsunade and I are going to catch up for a bit. We'll see you tomorrow? Jiraiya suggested with a bemused smirk on his lips. You want to send me back alone, with them? Naruto asked, his face twisting in a myriad of different emotions. There are some things you need to work out with them. Specifically Kin, though Sunshine could use a talk too. Jiraiya shook his head and smiled at the boy. Better to get it over with. Fine. Scowling, Naruto pushed himself out of the booth and then stalked towards the door. Once he was gone, Tsunade settled further back into the booth and gave Jiraiya an appraising look. What do you want? Chapter 23. Want? Jiraiya tilted his head to the side and smiled blandly back at her. That's an interesting question, I'd say. You know what the hell I meant. Bringing him here, teaching him. What the hell were you thinking? Tsunade's glare only grew in intensity as it was leveled down at him. You mean, what was I thinking, bringing my godson here, or do you mean, what was I thinking bringing your cousin here? Jiraiya asked curiously in turn as he watched the way she flinched back from the point of her relation to Naruto. Or, perhaps you're wondering why I brought your grandmother's current successor? Again she flinched, her eyes immediately turning away as she refused to answer his words. Or do you mean what was I thinking, bringing someone so like your little brother here? Jiraiya continued with his eyes a cold glare. After all, you might not look much like Naruto, but someone just has to have met. Shut up. Tsunade hissed out with her eyes narrowed into teary slits. Just shut up. Don't you dare bring him into this. Well, if you opened up that top of yours a bit more I'd probably. Jiraiya's eyes gleamed before his head crashed into the tabletop from Tsunade's fist. You dirty? Tsunade growled softly as her fingers trembled with rage. And you're a bitchy hag, Jiraiya stated with a shrug and a shake of his head. Do you really want to waste all this time throwing names back and forth? Tsunade paused and stared back at Jiraiya for a moment, before her eyes narrowed into slits. What happened to you? You've never insulted you before? Probably should have. Jiraiya shrugged his shoulders as he pulled over a saucer of sake and took a sip as he looked at her with weary eyes. I'm tired of trying to pretend you're just going to magically get better, Tsunade. I should kill you for pulling this, she said with a hiss as she glared back at Jiraiya. No, he corrected as he took a sip, what you should do is finally pull your head out of your ass and come back to the real world. Trying to kill me for making you finally face what you've been running from for years is what you somehow think would be appropriate. Do you really want to go down that road with me, Jiraiya? Tsunade hissed out as she slammed her fist into the table, her strength causing the sake bottles and dishes to bounce for a moment, though nothing more. Do you want to talk to me about what we'll do when we lose someone we love? Go ahead, Jiraiya said softly as he took another quiet sip, then glanced back at her. But she died years after he did. And here I am. I went through my grief, my madness, and I moved past it. You, though? She couldn't look at him when he spoke, her eyes turned away as the tears gathered in her eyes. What I did only ever hurt me. I never started a damned war because of it. The war was coming no matter what. What I did just made it come faster, Jiraiya said solemnly and shrugged his shoulders a bit. What did you expect from me? Remorse? She bit back the words she almost said, and stared down at the table in front of her, still not meeting his eyes. No. I've taken too many lives for me to feel remorse over that. Mist provoked a response. Mist knew that I was involved with her. They made a bet that I wouldn't find out about it. They lost. Jiraiya took a slow, lingering sip from his sake bowl before setting it back down. You may have forgotten what it means to be a ninja, Tsunade, but I haven't, not yet. You're not going to start something stupid like lecturing me about what it means to be a ninja, are you? Tsunade growled softly back as she glared at Jiraiya. I listened to enough of your damned philosophical debates with him. Yeah, well, he always was a damned know-it-all. Jiraiya shook his head and poured himself another drink. And for someone so smart, he's so damned dense at times. For someone so dense, you could be damned smart at times, Tsunade countered reflexively before slowly shaking her head, allowing a slight smile curl over her lips. Yup, he agreed quietly. Jiraiya. She slowly looked up at him, bringing her eyes to look into his, softened, only to freeze under the cool stare he sent back at her. I need you to understand this, Tsunade, he said softly. If you betray Konoha, if you help him try and destroy it, I will kill you myself. Tsunade stared back as she recoiled slightly under the simple fact that, for the first time she could remember, he was threatening her. And she could see in his eyes that he meant it. Aw. Naruto stared back at Kin for a moment before stomping over to his bed, almost unconsciously creating 3 clones as he fell down onto it. A short distance away, Shizun blinked slightly as she watched the clones intently beginning to focus on the tips of their fingers as the air began to ripple and distort above them. Turning her head, she arched a brow at Temari. Grimacing lightly at the memory, Temari scowled at the clones as she said, "Wind claws. Bastard used one of them to ruin my fan. Is whining all you know how to do?" Naruto's voice suddenly cut in as he glared from his position on the bed. "Bastard this, poor me that. You're almost as bad as Sasuke and his brooding." Temari's cheeks flushed in anger as she hissed out a response, "How dare you? I'm so sick of it." Naruto cut her off with a glare. "I'm so sick of everyone whining and complaining about how horrible things have happened to them. It's like that's all you care about. Like your whole life revolves around it. This coming from the idiot that can't shut up about becoming Hokage." Temari said back with a glare and a hiss of breath. "That's right." Naruto agreed with a sudden grin. "I make my life about my dream, about my promises. I'm not like you. I have something to live for. Something to fight for." Suddenly he was on his feet, pointing his finger at Temari. "I will become Hokage. I refuse to settle for anything less. I refuse to back down, I refuse to give in. I don't care how many times people tell me I can't have it, I don't care how many times I'm told that it's impossible. Every time someone's told me I can't do something, I've proven them wrong. I am Naruto Uzumaki. I will be the greatest Hokage this world will ever see. Nothing, no one, is going to stop me." Shizun stared at Naruto and, for a moment, couldn't help but see a phantom of two smiling figures standing behind him. The first was a woman with long red hair and a smoldering smirk full of life and energy that seemed to scream defiance. The second a calm man, his lips curled into a quiet, knowing smile, filled with a calm, impossible confidence. She turned then, unable to bring herself to look as she studiously stared out the window. Next to her, Temari stared at the boy for a moment as that simple force behind his words shook something deep inside of her. Only it quickly wiped away with a growl as she glared back. Big words, but anyone can say them. Doing them is something else. And I told you, I don't go back on my word. That's my way. Naruto shot back with his eyes burning back at her. Under that gaze, Temari was forced to look away before her lips twisted sourly. Maybe. At least someone around here isn't getting forced into these stupid espionage classes. Ah? Shizun blinked a bit as she finally broke through the spell Naruto's words seemed to catch her in. I suppose that's probably because, well, she helped him create his network. Well, I'm not her. Temari growled out with a hiss. I'm not my aunt. I'm not the kind of kunoichi he seems to think I am. I can't just sit around doing nothing like he's been having me do. Well, he did have you working on that chakra control exercise, Naruto said with a shrug. How far did you ever? Temari flicked the Ryo coin straight at his nose. It stopped less than an inch from his skin before jumping back to her hand as she began to move it across her knuckles. Glaring at him, she asked sarcastically, What does that tell you? How did you do that? Naruto's eyes were wide as he stared incredulously back at Temari. Wouldn't you like to know, Temari said with a smug smirk as she let the coin suddenly drop and sway back and forth several inches beneath her hand. She's using chakra strings, Naruto-sama, Kin said softly as she finally spoke up, not quite looking at Naruto nor Temari. Temari glared back at the younger girl but did not dispute her claim as she shrugged her shoulders. I've got a brother who's a puppeteer. He taught me the basics of the skill. I can't control a puppet worth a damn, but I can do some parlor tricks with them. Huh? Naruto blinked a bit as he watched the coin flash back and forth before he slowly looked back at Kin. Thanks, I guess. Noticing his gaze, Kin immediately averted her eyes even further, refusing to meet his gaze. Shizun blinked at the scene, watching the awkwardness between the two and the aloof humor Temari seemed to take in it. All right, what exactly is wrong here? She's a coward and he's an idiot, Temari offered helpfully and smirked at the glares she got in turn. What? I'm just pointing out the truth. I am not a coward, Kin muttered softly under her breath, though she couldn't keep her eyes on anyone when she said it. Bullshit. Naruto suddenly stood up and glared at Kin. You just stood there, doing nothing while the rest of us went. We had to come back to get you. It's not cowardice to not want to take the chance of getting caught by that monster. Kin retorted but didn't bring her eyes up to face his. It's survival. Don't you even remember what the first exam guy said? Naruto shot back as he glared at Kin. If you're so afraid of what could happen to you that you won't step forward, then you have no place in the shinobi world. I said it then, and I'll say it now. I won't back down. No matter what. I won't live my life afraid of what I may or may not have to fight. This is different. Kin insisted as she dared to look up slightly. This isn't some typical mission. This isn't even some kind of jounin. This is Orochimaru. And I don't care. Naruto suddenly shouted and he stood up and glared at Kin. You didn't see me backing down and running scared from Fishface or the old lady. That's different. Kin snapped back as she glared at Naruto now. All they would have done is hurt you badly or kill you. Orochimaru, he wouldn't just kill me, he'd use me for one of his experiments. You don't know what that's like. You haven't seen what I've seen. Do you think that's going to stop me? Naruto's glare only grew in intensity as he stared back at her. I won't let him hurt the people I care about. So what if he's stronger than me? It just means I have to keep getting stronger. And when he just kills you and takes us with you? Kin cut in and glared. Or maybe he decides to keep you and us alive to study. Do you know what that would mean for us? It's not going to happen, Naruto said without even an ounce of doubt in his voice as he glared back at Kin. I won't let it. I refuse to let it happen. Just because you say it won't doesn't magically make it not happen. Kin almost screamed back at him as tears glistened in her eyes. People say things like that all the time, and you know what? They're proven wrong. I'm not them. I don't go back on my word. No matter what. Naruto snapped back at the air seemed to suddenly stir around him. I am Naruto Uzumaki. And don't you forget it. So you keep telling us, Master, Temari said with a sarcastic drawl. Again, and again, and again. And I'll keep doing it until it gets through your thick skulls. Naruto shot back without even a moment's hesitation before turning and stalking towards the bathroom. Well, that could have gone better, Shizune said with a light wince before she glanced at the pair of girls. You two really are something, you know that? Kin flinched lightly at the observation and again found her eyes looking anywhere but at the people present. Temari just sneered. What, I'm supposed to just fawn over some no-name bastard who's supposed to own me? Temari snapped with a snort. Not going to happen. Shizune caught the glare that Kin sent at Temari, and the way she viciously bit into her lower lip to keep from saying anything. Tilting her head to the side, she looked at Temari. You don't know, do you? Then, she turned and looked at Kin. But you do, don't you? Kin's eyes widened immediately before quickly going flat and neutral. I don't know what you're talking about. I think you do. Shizune shook her head a bit and glanced towards the door. I'm surprised that everyone can't see it. You don't even really have to look for it to see his parents in him. Something that sounded suspiciously like a squeak left Kin's lips as she stared back at Shizune. But, you might want to think about the path you're on. From what I've seen, Naruto-kun deserves more faith than you've put in him. Shizune smiled politely at the girls, before standing up. I'll leave you to enjoy the rest of the evening. Good night. With that, she gave them a polite bow, before quietly exiting the door, leaving Temari to glare suspiciously back at Kin. What the hell was she talking about? Nothing I'd tell you, Kin spat out acidly and glared away. Whatever. Temari snarled lightly before crossing her own arms and glaring back at her. Aw. Shizune bit her lip nervously as she stood outside the bar, watching the pair of Sannin drinking quietly in what seemed to be an uncomfortable silence. She'd seen it happen once or twice over the years, usually when the topic of Dan or Yuya came up. Or Orochimaru after their teammate had gone traitor. Considering the circumstances, she honestly couldn't begin to guess which one it would be. As she watched the pair, a part of her couldn't help but wonder if some of her oldest memories had really existed. Was there a time when the Sannin had all been healthy and whole? Where laughed and smiled with one another like a family should. Looking at them now, she struggled to think of any of them save Jiraiya looking that way. Tsunade only smirked now when she wasn't looking angry or depressed. From what she'd seen of Orochimaru, he was much the same, only with a colder, crueler bent. She wished she knew a way to heal them, to fix them back into the people they were. To restore them to the glory and brilliant light they'd held. And then the memory of Orochimaru and Jiraiya's words rose up, like bile in the back of her throat. No, the Sannin could not ever be whole again. Orochimaru had seen to that. What was left though? She took a seat a distance away and, for a time, just watched Tsunade and Jiraiya. The occasional looks in the other's direction when they weren't looking. The glimpses of sadness and longing shown only for instants. But, in Jiraiya's eyes she saw something else, something hard and cold tempering everything. She swallowed slowly as the realization filtered into her mind. He was preparing himself. Preparing himself in case Tsunade took up Orochimaru on his offer. It was a horrible thing to see. But, it seemed to embody Jiraiya's view of shinobi. They were not dealers of death, they were not masters of combat, they were not astounding wielders of ninjutsu. No, they were the ones that endured. She was starting to think maybe he was putting a little too much stock into the whole, enduring, thing. Shaking her head, she quietly stood up and walked over to the pair when she saw Tsunade finally let her head rest down on her arms. Taking a seat near to the still conscious Jiraiya, she took a moment to study his reddened cheeks, before speaking softly, Jiraiya-sama. Oh, hello again, little Shizun-chan. I thought you went off with Naruto and the girls? He grinned at her a bit too widely, his eyes slightly glazed as he offered her a bottle. Care for some sake? No, thank you. She looked at him for a moment before looking down at her hands, finding them utterly fascinating for some reason as she continued. And I was talking to them for a bit, then I thought I should come talk to you. Oh? Now, Shizun-chan, I know I'm an irresistible specimen of manliness, but I think the princess would kill me if I so much as touched you. He smiled apologetically back at her and took a sip of his sake. You understand, don't you? Her mouth dropped at his words and her head jerked up, staring at him as her cheeks began to pinken. I didn't want to talk to you about anything like that. You're old enough to be my father. Really, Jiraiya-sama, have you no shame? Well, some women like older men. Not to mention all the interesting daddy issues. He winked at her before taking another sip of his sake and settled back into his chair. Well then, if not about the culminations of years of deeply buried, illicit yearnings, what did you want to talk about? And what can I do to get you back to the topic of said yearnings? She took a moment to take a deep gulping breath before glaring at him with still flushed cheeks. I will not dignify that with an answer, as you couldn't afford it. I wanted to talk to you about the girls and your favorite student son. Jiraiya froze for a moment before grimacing as he set his sake back onto the table. Damn, how'd you figure it out? I remember Minato-sama and Kushina-san? Shizun half-asked in way of answer as her cheeks darkened again. It's easy enough to see them if you remember the prenatal visits you badgered Tsunade-sama into making for Kushina-san. Ah, I'd almost forgotten about that. Jiraiya scratched the back of his head and grinned sheepishly back at her. I'd say he turned out amazingly well, all things considered. Yes. I know, Shizun said softly and quietly nodded her head as she studied Jiraiya carefully. You know that he's not Minato and he's not Kushina, yes? I'm aware of that, Jiraiya admitted with a quiet grimace and turned his head away. Has absolutely no interest at all in seals. An Uzumaki with no interest whatsoever in sealing. The son of one of the greatest non-Uzumaki seal masters the elemental countries has ever seen, with no interest in seals. If you've noticed that, then why are you trying to treat Temari-san like she's another Uyake? She asked, turning her head away. It's not like that, Jiraiya muttered quietly as he looked away, his face suddenly growing stony and hard. Isn't it? She said aloud as she continued to study the table in front of them. She talks like her, she carries herself like her. It would be so easy for you to confuse her as another girl just like her. She's even a direct relative of her. I said it's like that. Jiraiya turned his head and glared at Shizun, and suddenly the woman could feel as if the weight of a frozen world bore down on her. I'm not talking about lust, Jiraiya-sama. The words were thick on her lips as she forced them past her lips, unable to bring herself to look up at him. Just that I think you're trying to find things in Temari-san. Things you knew she had. Things that aren't really there. Such as? It was forced out, like it left a sour taste on Jiraiya's lips, even as he kept himself from looking directly at her. She doesn't see people like Uyake did, Shizun said softly. It doesn't interest, it doesn't intrigue her. It annoys and frustrates her. She just needs time and practice, he insisted, though his words were muttered half to himself, as if an already established argument. Do you really think so? Shizun's voice was filled with doubt as she turned her head and glanced at him for a moment. She doesn't really seem the type in all honesty. She just needs time and practice, Jiraiya repeated, his voice straining to be as firm as it could be. That's all it is. She just needs time and practice. She's not Uyake, just as he's not Minato-sama, nor Kushina-san, nor you, Jiraiya-sama, Shizun said softly as she bowed her head. All I can do is humbly suggest to please try and remember this. I know who he is. I know who she is. Jiraiya insisted firmly as he glanced away, not quite looking back at her. As you say, Jiraiya-sama, Shizun said, as if conceding the point before she stood. I should get Tsunade-sama back to our room. Do you need any help? He asked, almost reluctantly as he arched a brow back at her. I thank you for the offer, Jiraiya-sama, but I know Tsunade-sama well enough to be used to such things. We can't always see things in them that aren't really there. She said it with a quiet bow, before she quietly slipped herself beneath Tsunade's shoulder, managed to stand with surprising fluidity before smiling slightly at the man and managing an awkward bow. Have a good night, Jiraiya-sama. Jiraiya watched the two women carefully exit the bar before turning his attention back to his sake and frowning slightly. Oh. With a sour grunt, Jiraiya leaned back against the frame of the window and watched the slowly rising sun in the distance as he waited for Naruto and the girls to rouse themselves. When a sleepy-eyed Naruto shuffled out of his room, He blinked slightly and stared at Jiraiya for a moment, before he couldn't help but blurt out, "Man, you look like shit, old pervert." Jiraiya sent Naruto a mild glare before sighing slightly. The boy in orange pajamas doesn't get to make comments about other people being eyesores. "Hey, I like these pajamas," Naruto protested before glancing around. Seeing no one else was there, he glanced back at Jiraiya. "What, did you stay up all night drinking or something?" "Or something," Jiraiya agreed as he glanced towards the girls' rooms. "So, tell me, Naruto, what do you think about the girls?" "Kin's a coward," Naruto stated sullenly as he looked away and shrugged his shoulders. "Sunshine, she's always pissed about something. And she hates the training you're making her do." "Ah." Jiraiya nodded his head a moment as he turned and stared out into the distance again. "Not interested in it at all, huh? Well, what did you expect?" Naruto looked back at Jiraiya with a glare. "She's watching the rest of us get all this combat training like she wants, but all you do for her is make her come along with you on whatever the hell it is you do. I know if I was her, I'd be pissed too." "Ah," Jiraiya repeated the syllable as he continued to look out into the distance. "There are worse things than dying out there, Naruto. Kin's afraid of one of those things happening to her. She's seen it happen at the hands of Orochimaru. She knows what he can do to someone. That's what she's scared of." "So what?" Naruto's voice started to pulse with anger as he glared back at Jiraiya. "You think I don't know that there are worse things out there than dying? You think I haven't seen them? You think I haven't lived some of them? If I let myself be scared of all that, what right would I have to be Hokage?" "It's not always that simple, Naruto," Jiraiya said wearily as he refused to let himself wince at the boy's words. "Life isn't that simple." "Yes, it is," Naruto stated with an angry certainty. "You either do what you say you will and do what's right or you don't. It's not that easy, Naruto." A tinge of anger started to pulse into Jiraiya's voice as he started to glare back at Naruto. "Of course it's not." Naruto ignored the way Jiraiya faltered slightly at his words. "It has to be hard. Otherwise, the hell would be the point of doing it?" Jiraiya stared back at Naruto before reaching up and pushing his steel forehead protector up and rubbing at the revealed flesh. "I am too damn tired to try to follow that headache. Can't you two argue somewhere else?" Temari's voice cut in as she blearily pushed open the door to glare at the pair of them. "Some of us were trying to sleep." Naruto took one look at Temari, clad in only her oversized shirt, and then blushed as he quickly looked away, averting his eyes. As a quick blush rose up his cheeks, Temari glanced down at herself before snorting softly back at the boy. "Seriously? Doesn't your teammate wear something shorter than this every day?" "I don't think she has your legs, Sunshine," Jiraiya couldn't help but remark dryly as he glanced over her way. "How far have you gotten with the coin trick?" "Enough to pull it off and then some," Temari snapped back before turning her sour look onto Jiraiya. "What, you going to want me to make some big show of it when you drag me off to meet another group of your damned look underneath the underneath contacts? I was actually going to start you on something Yuyake and I were working on before she died," Jiraiya responded quietly as he pulled out a pair of edged fans and tossed one towards her. "What, I'm supposed to wave it in front of my face while I fake being interested in what a bunch of corrupt idiots have to say?" Temari asked sarcastically as she glared back at Jiraiya. In response, Jiraiya arched a brow and then snapped the fan he'd kept open. Razor tips of metal flashed in the light for a moment before he twisted his wrist and suddenly the fan began to glide around it. Temari and Naruto watched in surprise as the fan twisted and wove around his hand, elegantly weaving its way around his hand and arm, twisting into a variety of different poses and directions. "I was thinking you'd learn how to cut people up, actually." He paused and suddenly the fan snapped shut and slipped back into his palm. "Of course, if you'd rather go to some of those meetings." "Are you just trying to fuck with me, you old bastard?" Temari's eyes were narrowed slits as she held onto the fan in her hand with a white-knuckled grip. "Not particularly," Jiraiya said blandly as he looked away. "It was simply pointed out to me recently that you had little to no interest in the things I wanted to teach you and, as such, I should worry more about teaching you something you'd be more willing to dive into. That means no more of those boring, pointless meetings, right?" The hope actually managed to break through the seemingly omnipresent cloud of gloom that had plagued Temari since she'd woken up from her match. Jiraiya sighed again and nodded his head. Yes. I'm convinced to work with you on other things, for now, at least." Temari deflated lightly at the qualifier but nonetheless squared her shoulders. "All right, fine. At least I can something worthwhile out of this." Jiraiya sighed and shook his head. "Go ahead and get dressed." He paused before he glanced at the still closed door. "And go ahead and drag her out of her bed. She probably doesn't want to get up, just so you know." Temari noted as she started walking back into her room. So dump some ice water on her, Jiraiya said with a shrug. I'm not in the mood to let her lounge around whining her ass off. Temari suddenly grinned viciously as she turned around and shut the door to her room behind her. What are we going to do? Naruto glanced at Jiraiya, his eyes starting to shine, eagerly. We're going to go start training. Jiraiya paused before jerking his thumb towards Naruto. You're going to go get Tsunadeheim and Shizune and get them to come join the rest of us. But, why? Naruto half whined out as he glared back at the man. Because I want her to look over the girls, thoroughly, Jiraiya stated simply. No one's ever harmonized someone to a Jinchuriki's chakra before. I want to make sure there's nothing we might need to worry about. Fine. Naruto grunted sourly in acknowledgement. Kin's angry shriek filled the air before he could say anything else. Ah, I forgot their rooms were connected. Jiraiya paused a moment, then shrugged. Next time Kin can dump the ice water on her. Chapter 24. Sakura slowly closed the door to Sasuke's hospital room and frowned slightly. Whatever Itachi had done to Sasuke, it had obviously been bad. She'd never seen Sasuke looking so thin, so frail, so delicate. She shook her head, it was just bad. Hey, you're that kid, Naruto's teammate, right, Sakura? Sakura blinked slightly and turned her head to see the brown-haired girl smiling politely to her. Oh, hello. Tenten, right? Yup. Tenten quickly nodded her head in agreement. Is he around? I wanted to thank him for what he did to that Suna bitch. Not really. I went to look for him, but I've been told he's on some mission. And since Kakashi-sensei and Sasuke-kun are here. Sakura shrugged helplessly. Yeah, I know the feeling, Tenten agreed with a wince. Both Lee and Niji are going to be out for a while. They're even talking about Lee never being a ninja again after what that bastard Gaara did to him. You've still got your sensei though, right? Sakura pointed out with a slight shrug of her shoulder. I mean, that's something, right? Have you not met Gai-sensei? Tenten asked incredulously before shuddering visibly. Would you want to spend that much time with him? Is he really that bad? Sakura blinked slightly as she stared back at Tenten. I mean, I know Lee's a bit much but… Gai-sensei is just as bad, Tenten argued back with a shake of her head. I mean, it's always youth this, or burning brightly that. Well, at least they're really good, right? Sakura offered, lamely. Your team isn't exactly slouching. Tenten pointed out. I mean, Naruto made his opponent look like she was an academy student facing a jounin. And Sasuke managed to do more damage to Gaara than even Niji did. Sakura nodded her head quietly in agreement before frowning as she wrapped her arms about herself. Everyone's just so strong. Shaking her head, she sighed bitterly. And I'm the weakest. Tenten paused a moment, before shifting uncomfortably as she tried to think of something to say before perking up lightly. Well, you tied that other girl, right? Well, yeah. Sakura admitted with a slow nod of her head. Ino and I said I was sorry already, Shika. Ino's voice echoed down the hall as she scowled at her teammate as he walked, slumped forward, his arm in a sling. But it's your own fault for putting up such a shitty block. You stabbed me in 5 different places, Ino, Shikamaru said flatly. Once, maybe even twice, is an accident. 5 times though? It's not my fault I'm used to fighting someone who's that much better than you. Ino protested immediately. I wouldn't have landed a single one of them against my last training partner. How would you feel if you were the one stabbed 5 times in the arm? Shikamaru actually growled as he glared back at her. Ino blinked, tilted her head to the side then wordlessly rolled up cloth forearm protectors to show off a number of paler-looking circles of flesh in the exact same shape as the ones on his arm. How do you think I learned that move? She glared a bit at him as she rolled it back into place and huffed softly. And I didn't whine about it like you are. There was a pause, before she narrowed her eyes at him. And now that I think about it, why the hell are you even wearing a sling? When they fixed me up, I was fine to go straight back to training. TSK, troublesome, he grumbled in response as he made no move to remove his arm from the sling before he shifted his attention to the 2 girls watching them. Sakura, Tenten. Oh, hey forehead, Ino said with a wave before nodding to Tenten. Tenten. What brings you 2 here today? I was visiting Kakashi-sensei and Sasuke-kun, she said simply and shrugged softly in response. I don't really have much else to do since, what happened? Lee and Niji. Niji should be going home soon, but they're still trying to finish reconstructing his leg, Tenten added as she shrugged her shoulders helplessly, that Gaara guy pretty much shattered it. They've been having to reconstruct it. Kakashi-sensei is here? Then? Ino stared at Sakura for a moment, suddenly looking appalled. What VE you been doing? Sakura shrugged her shoulders helplessly as she looked away. Sakura, have you just been staying at your parents' house? Ino's face paled dramatically as she stared back at her, watching as the girl only shrugged helplessly in response. What's wrong with her staying at her parents' place? Tenten asked curiously. I still stay at mine and. Sakura flinched almost violently at Tenten's words and her head immediately hung down, her eyes vanishing from view. Shikamaru frowned a bit as he watched Sakura's reaction before letting out an audible sigh. Troublesome. The invasion? Sakura nodded wordlessly in response. Next to her, Tenten frowned a moment as she glanced back at Shikamaru. What does the invasion have to do? There was a pause before she finally noticed the way Sakura was reacting, and her hand lifted to her mouth. They were? The sound Nin were targeting civilians, Sakura said with a quiet shrug. They were civilians. Okay, no way this is going to keep up, Ino stated simply as she grabbed hold of Sakura's arm and started walking towards the door. Come on, we're going to go find Crazy Lady, she'll know what to do. But. Sakura started to protest as she was bodily hauled off by Ino. I'm fine. Nobats. Ino stated firmly before calling back over her shoulder. And Chika, if you even think about showing up to practice with that fake sling tomorrow, I'm going to be giving you more holes in even more troublesome places. Damn it, he muttered sourly, his shoulders slumping further in defeat. I hate Naruto. What the hell does Naruto have to do with that? Tenten couldn't help but ask. Because if it wasn't for him, she wouldn't know what she was missing, he stated flatly with a sigh and a grumble as he removed his sling. Oh. Anko blinked slightly as she glanced from Ino to Sakura and then back as she leaned back against one of the many trees that surrounded the training ground she'd been found at. Well, it really sucks, but what do you expect me to do about it? Isn't there something that can be done? I mean, she's got nothing to do, no one to assign her anything, she's just sitting at home or at the hospital. That can't be right. Ino protested as Sakura shrank down in response. Well, currently there's no Hokage, and that means oversight is a bit off on these kinds of things. Everything is kind of up in the air if it wasn't already in place, Anko responded as she lightly tilted her head in thought. Though, I do know someone who could use an assistant. What kind of assistant? Sakura asked quietly as she watched Anko cautiously. Oh, the kind to hold the thumb screws while he's too busy with the red-hot kunai, Anko said dismissively. What? Sakura's eyes widened in disbelief. Well, most of his paperwork is way above your pay grade, Anko said simply. You'd need to be at least a chunin for that, and, well, to be honest that's not going to happen anytime soon. Sakura glared at Anko, her fingers clenching back into fists. Isn't that a little harsh? Ino asked as she winced a bit. I mean, she's as bad as you were, Anko responded pointedly as she smirked. Before you went and took part in the awesomeness that is our training. I'm not useless. Sakura insisted, causing both Ino and Anko to look at her. I never said. Ino started to say. Yes, you are, Anko said bluntly with a TSK and a shake of her head. And I can prove it. Oi, bimbo, sparring time. I brought her here to get her help, not to fight her. Ino immediately protested, holding her hands up defensively. I'll show you I'm not useless. Sakura growled softly as she could feel the bubbling spark of anger start to roll through her veins. Yes. I'm sure, Anko said dismissively before gesturing to Ino. Prove it, if you can. And then suddenly Anko had leapt out of the way, landing on one of the outstretched branches of the tree, as Sakura gave another growl and then lunged at Ino. Ino lightly twisted out of the way, as she reflexively snapped her hand out and cracked her knuckles against Sakura's elbow. Hey! I didn't agree to this. Sakura hissed softly in pain as she brought her hand up to rub at her elbow, before glaring more angrily at Ino as she pulled out a kunai and lunged at Ino once more. This time, when Ino targeted Sakura's wrist instead, Sakura vanished in a puff of smoke. In her place, a small wooden log dropped to the ground. Immediately, Ino dropped to the ground as Sakura's fist, still wrapped around her kunai, sailed right through where Ino's head had been a moment earlier. Ino's leg lashed out, aiming for just below Sakura's knee, only the girl immediately vanished again, replaced by another log. Immediately, Ino rolled back to her feet, ready for the next attack. This time, when Sakura appeared, throwing another angry punch at Ino, Ino's hand shot out, grabbing the fist without trying to stop its momentum as she twisted it in her hand. As Sakura attempted to react, there was a sudden flash as Ino struck Sakura's arm a Sanban, causing Sakura to involuntarily drop her kunai. Then she tried to kick Ino away. Only Ino twisted inside her guard. Sakura's leg hit empty air as Ino's knee drove up into her stomach. As Sakura fought against the sudden need to recover her breath, she barely noticed Ino releasing her fist and driving her elbow into the back of her head, sending her face first into the dirt. Damn it. I said I didn't want to do this. Ino whined softly as she quickly put some distance between herself and Sakura. Yes, but I wanted some amusement, Anko said brightly as Sakura was picking herself up from the ground and glaring at Ino as she pulled the sunban out of her arm. Though not nearly as entertaining as you and bitch going at it, bimbo. I really hate that, Ino stated with a growl as she glared back at Anko. And until you reach at least specialist, you are undeserving of anything better. Anko responded with an unrepentant grin on her lips. Grr. Ino growled softly as she suddenly twisted out of the way of Sakura's sudden kick. Damn it, forehead. Give it a rest. No. I told you I'm not useless. I won't be useless. Sakura almost screamed out the words as her green eyes seemed on fire. A little help here? Ino half demanded as she twisted out of the way one of Sakura's attacks and shoved a sunban into the girl's other arm. Damn it, forehead. This is supposed to be a sparring match. I won't be useless. Sakura repeated, ignoring the sunban still sticking out of her arm as she smashed her hand into the ground trying to hit Ino. Never again. That's one major anger issue, Anko noted clinically as she lightly tapped her lower lip with the ring of her kunai. Or several all bursting at once. I'll have to see what Ibiki thinks. Are you just going to let her try to tear me to pieces? Ino half screamed shrilly as she quickly backpedaled away. If you'd stop panicking and actually focus on your little match, you wouldn't need any help, Anko pointed out lazily as she flipped her kunai over and casually began to clean under her nails. So, either be a scared little rabbit and let her maul you, or show you've got some of that boar in you after all. Ino glared back at Anko for a moment before she shifted out of the way of a wild cross from Sakura, only to have the tip of the sunban still stuck in Sakura's arm scratch across her chest. It dug into the fabric and caught her skin as it ripped a tear into the clothing. As it was pulled back, Ino could see how it had torn the wound in Sakura's arm from a neat hole into a much more ragged wound. A wound Sakura seemed to be completely ignoring as she twisted around towards her again. Oh, screw this. Ino hissed out as she grabbed hold of the bloody sunban and planted her foot as she twisted her body forward and using her elbow to force Sakura's wrist back towards her body. As Sakura's hand smashed into her own nose with an eye-watering crack, Ino had ripped the loosened sunban out of her arm. Ino's body kept up the spin of her momentum, her other arm rising, elbow smashing into Sakura's ear. Then, as she stumbled, eyes watered, head spinning, Sakura vaguely felt the way the sunban was slammed down into her calf. Still spinning, Ino kicked in the back of Sakura's knee, forcing the girl to drop reflexively as the other end of the sunban broke into her thigh. As she twisted, Ino barely registered Sakura's scream of pain as her knee smashed into the girl's face, sending her falling back, unconscious. When Sakura's body didn't stir again beyond the steady rise and fall of her breath, Ino slowly put her leg back down and stared at the wet stain of blood that blossomed across it. She took a slow, greedy breath, and then let it out. Immediately after she whirled around and pointed a finger accusingly at Anko. God damn it. You could have stopped that. Yeah, and? Anko shrugged her shoulders a bit as she appeared over Sakura and started to check the girl out. And? I just beat the hell out of my best friend. Ino growled back at Anko. She wasn't really giving you much of a choice, Anko responded pointedly. You avoided making any kind of attacks that a basic mednin can't fix. Hell, Kurenai and I have done way worse to each other. I've still got this really cool, crescent-shaped scar right on my ass from where I do not need to know that. Ino protested with a bright, crimson blush. The only really tricky thing is to find a mednin fast enough who's got the skills and the spare chakra to heal things up properly without scarring up, Anko continued as she picked up Sakura and lightly cradled her in her arms. You see, you leave it to field medicine for a day or so. Unless you get Tsunade-sama herself feeling generous, you're going to be stuck with a scar. Then that's why Daddy and that guy from the first stage have those. Ino said in realization, her eyes widening slowly. Yup, why do you think we pushed you so hard while you're still just training in the village? You know, where we have a nice, healthy supply of medicnin on hand? Anko shrugged her shoulders. Speaking of which, come on, let's get your little friend taken care of. She's going to need some serious help. Ino paused, staring back at where Anko had already started to move towards the hospital faster than simply walking. Hey! Wait up! Aw! Sakura groaned softly as she slowly regained consciousness. Looking blearily around the room, a part of her mind absently noticed she was in the hospital. The rest of her mind rapidly lurched forward with her body as she sat up. She immediately regretted it as the whole room seemed to spin. Sit down already, you lost enough blood when you carelessly ripped those Senbon around in your arms. A hard, gruff and more than a little irritated and definitely male voice noted. Apparently, from what Anko tells me, you have a bit of an anger problem. She lay back down, letting her swimming head rest against the comfort of the pillow. Once she was sure she could actually think, she turned her head to the man speaking. Immediately, her eyes widened as she recognized the heavily scarred man staring back at her. Ibiki Marino looked just as terrifying as he did the day of the first exam and, this time, she had no Naruto around to push her back up. Sakura started to speak, but found she really didn't have anything in particular to say as her mouth slowly shut. Sakura Haruno, age 13, genin assigned to Team 7 under Kakashi Hatake, Ibiki observed clinically as his expression remained stony. Top marks in academics, high level of chakra control and decent mastery of basic clone and replacement techniques. Sakura opened her mouth again but quickly shut it as she clenched her fingers into her sheet and stared down at herself. Recently lost both parents to Sound Nin under the command of Orochimaru and, with both your sensei incapacitated and your teammates unavailable, and the issue of most oversight being tied up until a new Hokage is appointed, you've been living in your parents' home, on your own, doing nothing except visiting your incapacitated teammates. Ibiki paused a moment, before tilting his head to the side. Was there anything you wanted to add to that? I won't be useless anymore, Sakura repeated the words softly as she stared down at her hands. As you said when you apparently attempted to do grievous harm to one Ino Yamanaka during what was supposed to be a sparring match, he said simply as he arched a brow back at her. Who is also reportedly your best friend. The lady with her, she just said it and that I should prove it, she said softly, her head hung. And all I could see was proving her wrong. Not that I could. The bitterness in her voice made Ibiki arch a brow back at her. You expected to? Ino and I tied just over a month ago, but now I could barely even touch her, she responded softly as she clenched her fingers. Everyone's just getting so strong and It would help if you bothered to train, Ibiki noted with a drawl and a shake of his head. Each of your teammates push themselves to their limits and beyond. You, though. Sakura curled back into herself, flinching at his words. And Ino? She spent a month and a half training with either Anko or another Jonin, against another genin for most of it, being pushed past anything your instructors had made any of you do before. Ibiki frowned slightly as he studied the girl. She's been pushed to find her limits. Apparently you haven't been. Sakura paused, before her head hung further down. And that's why she? I don't know her, personally, but I know the ones she's been training with. They expect her to give her everything, Ibiki said bluntly as he gave the girl a hard look. She ended up coming here quite often. Sakura hung her head slightly as she curled up, slowly this time as she brought her knees to her chest. What am I supposed to do then? I have been asked to take you under my wing, so to speak, Ibiki stated simply as he looked at the girl critically. As things stand currently, you are the weak link in your team. You are an obvious weakness that most enemy shinobi will be quite eager to exploit. I have a number of friends who don't want to see that happen. What? Sakura's head snapped up, staring at the imposing man with wild eyes. But your tests show you have the mental aptitude for the less physical side of interrogation, Ibiki said simply as he tilted his head to the side, as well as your performance during my stage of the exams where you were able to answer each of the questions on your own merit. What isn't known, he continued after a moment's pause, is if you have the mental fortitude to handle that kind of work. Or the mental stability. The former, I think you do, considering what I understand about your fight with your friend. But it also calls the latter into question. Sakura made no response as she curled up a bit more, fingers tightening across her knees, though she made no objection to his claims. And I'm going to push you. I'm going to make you find your limits, and then I'm going to see how far past them you can handle going, he said simply as he stood up and walked towards the door. Then I'm going to make you understand them. But wait. Sakura stared at him, her mouth hanging open in disbelief. I will pick you up tomorrow at sunrise at your home. Be ready, he said as he pushed his hands into his coat. And a word of warning, do not waste my time. My word carries a lot of weight, either way. And with that he was gone, leaving Sakura to stare at the door with a look of confused disbelief written on her face. With the sun shining down on them, Naruto led an irritated Tsunade and an almost serene-looking Shizune to the training ground Jiraiya had set up. Why the hell am I here, Jiraiya? And why so damned early? Tsunade glared at Jiraiya with angry, narrowed eyes. Tsunade, you're the world's top medic Nin. Jiraiya sent a look of irritation back at her. If you've got a headache, medic, heal thyself. You do recall I'm not a part of your little group, don't you, Jiraiya? Tsunade growled out her words as she clenched her fists at her sides. I have no obligations to. I need you to examine the girls for any side effects from their chakra being harmonized to the brats, Jiraiya admitted with a sigh and shook his head. I figured you'd be curious enough to take a look, all things considered. All things considered? Tsunade repeated, though there was a slight spark of curiosity in her eyes as she glanced back at the pair of girls. Considering your clan's involvement with the previous Jinchurikis, Jiraiya said simply as he rolled his shoulders back in a half-shrugging motion. Ah? Something unidentifiable flashed across Tsunade's eyes as she eyed the pair. Well, I'm going to need some information on. Kin was first put under the seal roughly 50 days ago, Jiraiya stated simply as he glanced at the girl in question. Temari, 1 month later. Both instances required several hours' worth of interaction between them and Naruto. In Temari's case, Kin entered a kind of trance-like state along with Naruto and Temari. You always did love to spoil anyone's fun but yours, Tsunade scowled lightly as she then pushed past Jiraiya and walked over to the girls. I do not, Jiraiya said with a huff, noting the looks he was getting and glowering back. I told you I do not. Whatever you say, Jiraiya-sama, Shizune said soothingly as she politely smiled at him. I get no respect anymore, Jiraiya said with a whining grumble. You never got respect, Jiraiya. Tsunade shot back over her shoulder even as she began to examine a squawking Kin. I did too. Minato respected me. Jiraiya protested again and glared at Tsunade. Minato doesn't count, she said flatly as she gave him a look over her shoulder. That man was a goddamned saint to have put up with what he did from you. He was Hokage. Of course he counts, he protested, vocally as he grumbled back. Just goes to prove how screwed up in the head he was, wanting that job, she said back with a glare. Tsunade-sama, Jiraiya-sama, Shizune said gently as she arched a brow at the pair. Would the two of you prefer to adjourn to a more private setting? I'm sure the rest of us would completely understand. Immediately both turned and glared at the woman, who kept her smile lightly plastered on her lips as she pretended to ignore the slight tinge of red on both their cheeks. While they turned their heads away, Shizune smiled brightly at the pair and nodded her head. In that case, perhaps it would be best to do something productive? I'm sure you'll have plenty of energy for one of your usual discussions tonight. How much euphemism do you actually mean in that? Temari couldn't help but murmur softly to Shizune as she glanced at the still smiling woman. Tsunade-sama and Jiraiya-sama? Shizune tilted her head to the side before lifting up the pig in her arms. Taunton will fly under her own power before that happens. Damned straight. Tsunade agreed with a fierce nod of her head. What would I want with a perverted reprobate like him? What would I want with a drunken, drowning in deadbeat? Jiraiya asked flatly without skipping a beat the moment Tsunade's mouth shut. Naruto frowned as he looked at Pair, who seemed almost to the point of full-out combat, and a flash of irritation rolled over his eyes. Following that was a sudden pulse of Kyuubi chakra-infused wind that tore a furrow in the ground between them. When everyone turned and blinked at him, he just glared back before stalking off as a swarm of clones popped into existence around him. I think Naruto-kun's a bit upset, Shizune noted dryly as she tilted her head to the side. Perhaps it would be better to save all the arguing for later? I think Naruto-kun's a bit upset, Shizune noted dryly as she tilted her head to the side. Perhaps it would be better to save all the arguing for later? Damned show-off, Tsunade muttered sourly as she lightly glared at Naruto's back, before huffing softly and grabbing both Temari's and Kin's collars. Shizune, go check on the brat, I'll deal with these two. Of course, Tsunade-sama, Shizune bowed her head, before frowning slightly as she listened to the strangled sounds both girls were making. Don't worry, she'll only strangle you a little bit, she paused, glancing at Tsunade's face before quickly amending her statement, I hope. Kin and Temari did not look reassured. Chapter 25. Naruto let off a quiet growl of frustration as he dug his fingers into the jacket of his clone. The clone grimaced before exploding into smoke as claws of wind tore into his chest. He didn't even grunt as the memories poured into him of the sudden flash of pain entered his mind. He hissed softly as he felt the sudden impact of one of his clones smashing his foot into his side, making his ribs groan slightly in protest. Immediately he moved to cut the leg away, only the clone was dancing out of the way, followed by another clone lashing out with claws of its own straight towards his arm. The air screamed as he caught the claws with his own, the blades of wind chakra grinding against each other as the air coiled and twisted in streams of distortion. Then he could feel his body folding forward as a solid kick crashed into his stomach. As he was forced to release a sudden eruption of breath, his control faltered. He barely had time to twist out of the way of the first clone's claws as they left a trio of cuts on his cheek and sent a few blonde hairs flying. As he attempted to force himself to straighten and back away, another clone's foot slammed into his cheek, making his world spin. Then he could feel another kick to his side. And a punch to his jaw. More and more blows followed, some of which he managed to block and deflect, the majority of them making their way past his guard. When one of the clones kicked him in the shin, he finally blurted out, "Enough." Instantly the blows stopped and the clones backed off. One of the clones nervously scratched the back of his head and crouched down, looking at the panting and groaning Naruto. "You okay, boss?" He got an unstable Rasengan smashing into his face and exploding for his trouble. Naruto himself flew back onto his back from the technique and groaned softly as he closed his eyes as the clone's memories fed themselves to him. As they settled into place, he just let out a soft groan of satisfaction. "So, totally worth it. We'd really prefer to not be dispelled that way, boss, so..." The clones looked at one another, before nodding in agreement as suddenly they all exploded in puffs of smoke in unison. Naruto groaned softly as he was suddenly hit with a small headache worth of memories. "Damned bastards. What does that say about you then, Naruto-kun?" Shizune asked, a touch of amusement in her voice before she sked softly and looked him over critically. You really should take better care of yourself." "I'm fine," he said simply and rolled his shoulders back as he took a slow, deep breath. "Just give me a minute." "Are you sure? Some of those cuts could get infected," she said politely as she gestured to his face. "Nah. I don't get those things." Naruto waved his hand dismissively as he slowly sat up and looked back at Shizune. "Just, gimme a sec." "But..." Shizune frowned slightly as she stared at Naruto, before her eyes widened as for a moment, a harsh, crimson chakra poured over his body. Before her eyes, she could see the way his cuts closed themselves. His bruises faded, and his scrapes healed. Then, just as quickly as it was there, it vanished again. Just as a startled oath screamed through the air. "What the hell?" Shizune was broken away from her staring as she immediately glanced back in the direction the yell had come from. Naruto-kun, when you access that, do the girls?" Yeah?" Naruto slowly nodded his head, confusion written on his face. "Why?" "Oh, dear," Shizune said as she put her hand over her mouth. "That might be you." Tsunade suddenly burst into the area, her eyes burning as she thrust her finger at Naruto. Naruto blinked a moment, staring owlishly back at her. "Me? Yes, you." Tsunade growled as she glared at him. "What the hell were you thinking? Accessing that? While I was in the middle of examining them? What?" Naruto blinked again, looking at Shizune in confusion. "The red stuff," Shizune explained quickly. "Was that bad?" he asked curiously as he seemed to be ignoring Tsunade entirely. "Well, it would throw off all her readings and make it so she probably has to start over from scratch," she agreed with a nod of her head. "And Tsunade-sama tends to not be very happy about those kinds of interruptions. It's demonic chakra suddenly flooding through a non-Jinchuriki's system." Tsunade glared at Shizune. "I'd like to see how you would have reacted." "Of course, Tsunade-sama," Shizune said quickly as she nodded her head before glancing back at Naruto. Apparently she was a bit startled. "Naruto-kun. Oh, could you tell her I'm sorry then?" Naruto asked vaguely as he scratched the back of his head. "I'm standing right here." Tsunade turned her attention back to Naruto as her glare spiked in intensity. "And I think she would appreciate it more if you gave your apology to her." Shizune noted carefully as she saw the slightest twitch beginning to grow in Tsunade's eye. "Whatever gave you that idea, Shizune?" Tsunade said with a hiss of anger, her eyes slits as they glared back at her. "The eye twitch and the vein on your forehead, maybe?" Naruto offered after a moment, before shrugging a bit when Tsunade's glare turned back onto him. "You asked. What on earth possessed you to think it would be a good idea to start using that while I was in the middle of examining them?" Tsunade immediately growled out. "Even the most basic of medical training would." Do I look like a medic nin?" Naruto cut in as he stared back at Tsunade. "Obviously not," Tsunade stated simply with a grunt. "Then why the hell do you expect me to know this?" Naruto snapped back as he glared at Suanda. "Did the part about basic medical training fly over your head?" Tsunade responded with a glare. "Excuse me, but they didn't even start to cover Jinchuriki or not using demonic chakra during medical exams during the academy." Naruto snapped back with a growing glare. "Why the hell would I know any of that?" "You're a Jinchuriki," she said through gritted teeth. "I didn't even know I was one until the night I graduated the academy." Shizune looked from one glaring blonde to the other glaring blonde and sighed softly as her shoulders slumped. "Tsunade-sama? I think it's safe to say Naruto-kun didn't mean to cause a problem, he honestly didn't know it would cause a problem." "Yeah," he agreed with an angry glare. Naruto-kun, Tsunade-sama is trying to make sure the girls are going to be fine with everything that's happening. You do want to make sure they're going to be fine, don't you? Naruto turned a glare onto Shizune before turning and just storming off again. Don't you? Shizune repeated the question as the boy walked away, a note of uncertainty in her voice. Tsunade looked at the boys retreating back and shook her head as she ruthlessly crushed the urge to chase after him. He wasn't her little brother. He wasn't Dan. He wasn't her grandmother. He was just a punk kid who she shared a clan with and who happened to have things in common with those important people in her life. It was all just one twisted little coincidence. That was all. She affirmed that to herself as she couldn't help but look one more time. She'd believe it soon enough, she was sure. Oh! The pulsing whine of a Rasengan tore into the tree once, then again. Two perfectly spherical holes appearing in the trees. They were matched by identical-looking holes all along the trunk and in the numerous trees around him. Naruto stared back at the tree before he moved again, striking again and again as his sweat-slick skin caught the faint cloud of sawdust that filled the air. It itched all over his exposed skin and into crevices in his clothes. But he ignored it as he continued focusing on slamming the Rasengans into the tree before him. Around him, a chaotic melee identical forms moved with matching spheres in each of their hands. Every few moments, one of the figures would explode into a cloud of smoke from the impact of one of the spheres hitting them somewhere on their bodies. Occasionally, Rasengan would meet Rasengan, grinding together for a moment before each would destabilize and explode, taking both clones and sometimes a third with it. He wasn't sure how long he'd been doing it. The slowly growing size of the clearing was a testament that it had been a while though. Everything, from the clones, to the grass to the leaves was covered in a fine layer of sawdust. The Rasengan had chewed through most of it, but there were impossibly clean cuts here and there, along with a sharply cracked tree limb or two. It was this scene that Jiraiya walked into as he slowly glanced around the clearing, filled with dancing particles of sawdust. Well, feeling better? He asked with an arched brow as he lightly shook the fine layer of dust his hair had already accumulated. What do you want? Naruto didn't even turn to look at him as he continued to feed the Rasengan in his hands and slam one then the other into the remnants of the tree trunk in front of him. I think you've got it down, kid, he noted dryly as he glanced around the clearing once more then shook his head. Though, I'm going to guess that it's good there's no lumber mill near here, or we'd have a mob after us. Fine, Naruto said sourly and suddenly the Rasengan disappeared out of each hand, dispersing with a slight explosion, before his fingers curled back like claws and he began to tear into the waiting trunk with claws of wind instead. That really wasn't what I meant, Jiraiya said after a moment when he saw Naruto had simply changed from one attack to another. I was thinking you should. Jiraiya twisted then as a kunai suddenly cut through the air right where his shoulder had been a moment before. What the hell? Like their creator, the clones had dispersed their Rasengan, some more successfully than others. Only, instead of moving on to the same attack Naruto had, each of them had pulled out kunai. One unrepentant clone was glaring at Jiraiya, hand still extended from his throw. Okay, you want to play it that way? Fine. Jiraiya cracked his head to the side, then flicked his hands through a series of signs then slammed his hand against the ground. Most of the clones reacted quickly enough to put some distance away from the rapidly spreading wave of soft, swamp-like earth. Only those who had landed back on Earth quickly fell victim to the spreading technique as it moved faster than they could escape. Perhaps a fourth of the clones, landing on still upright trees were able to launch kunai back at Jiraiya, trying to disrupt the technique even as the ground began to consume the trees as well. TSK, I don't think so, brat. Immediately Jiraiya was enfolded in a covering of his long white hair, hardened like steel as the kunai bounced off the suddenly sharp, spiked surface. I'm not some random jounin. I'm not some half-crazed missing nin. I am Jiraiya. Suddenly the spikes exploded out, peppering the entire clearing, catching almost every one of the clones with a harder-than-steel white needle. As Naruto actually flinched under the sudden, mass influx of violent memories, he was hit by another, then another. Each clone that had managed to avoid the spikes found themselves hit by hard, staggering blows that forced them explode and disperse. When the last of the clones exploded beneath Jiraiya's heavy sandals directly behind Naruto, the Sannin continued as he slid into a classic kabuki pose. I am the gallant toad sage of MT Mayaboku. I'm not some little bit player, here to dispense a few lines and then vanish into the background. And Naruto demonstrated that he wasn't the same little genin he'd been only a few months ago. Immediately, he was twisting around, kunai flashing straight towards Jiraiya, as a sudden expulsion of wind chakra onto the remains of a log in front of him sent a stream of sawdust towards Jiraiya's face. Only Jiraiya wasn't there to catch it. A simple replacement put Jiraiya directly in Naruto's side path. Before Naruto could fully react, Jiraiya's fist smashed into his cheek. As the tearing blades of wind instinctively formed on Jiraiya while Naruto was propelled backwards, another log replaced him. Before the suddenly segmented log could land in its fractured state, Jiraiya was again behind Naruto, grabbing him by his collar and moving to throw him into one of the still-standing trees. Naruto reacted, grabbing onto Jiraiya's arm with his hands, latching on with chakra just as Jiraiya released his throw. Angrily, he twisted his body, trying to pull Jiraiya's arm back, continuing the momentum as he released one hand and immediately formed a Rasengan in it. Then suddenly it was like Jiraiya's arm was coated by oil and Naruto lost his grip. As Naruto flew away from him, Jiraiya's hands flashed through a series of seals and suddenly a stream of fire followed him. Naruto's eyes widened as he instinctively tried to bring his usual defense up. As the hard edge of wind chakra met the fire suddenly seemed to explode in strength. Feeding on the wind, the fire leaped around Naruto, surrounding him making his sweat-soaked skin burn as the heat poured onto him. As the flames flowed around him, hotter and faster with each passing beat of his rapidly pounding heart, he gritted his teeth and glared back at the flames. Fire was Sasuke's favorite element. Fire was Konoha's favorite element. He wouldn't lose. Naruto gritted his teeth and clenched his jaw as, suddenly, the air seemed to thicken around him. For a moment the heat spiked even hotter, driving the boy to sway, almost faltering to his knees, before he narrowed his eyes and pushed harder. As the heat beat on him, as it weighed on him, heavier and heavier, trying to drive him to fall, he suddenly, wordlessly screamed out in defiance. And in response, suddenly, the thick, heavy air exploded with a ripping scream as it suddenly grabbed hold of the flames and, in an instant, feed them into that razor edge and a thin blade of superheated air shot forward, leaving a trail of burning earth and wood in its wake. And who the hell do you think I am? Naruto suddenly burst out as he swayed on his feet, sweat burning his eyes as he focused his suddenly blurry eyes on Jiraiya. I am Naruto Uzumaki. I'm not going to go run away, I'm not going to cower, and I'm not going to cry out in fear. I'm going to take on everything thrown at me. I won't stop. I won't give up. Naruto planted his feet as deeply as he could and jabbed his finger at the man. I'll take whatever you throw at me and I'll throw it right back. Then Jiraiya's fist met his face again and he was sent flying back again. His whole world exploded into a rolling wave of vertigo, his fingers digging into burnt earth. Shakily, he planted his foot on the ground as he forced his mind to accept just which direction down was. Jiraiya hit him again, then again. He couldn't bring his hands up fast enough to catch the blows. He couldn't even see them coming, the air didn't even seem to move until Jiraiya's fist was just about to land, giving him just enough time to turn into the blow before it sent him flying again. When he landed again, in charred, blackened earth, his limbs felt like hot, bubbling lead. They screamed out at him as he forced them to move. His stomach twisted and churned before suddenly he could feel a dry, hacking forcing the foul, acrid taste of bile into his mouth. A moment later, Jiraiya's wooden sandal had knocked him onto his back as he struggled to push himself up and back to his feet. I know who Naruto Uzumaki is. But you're confusing who you are with whom you want to be, maybe even who you will be. But either way, you aren't even close to there right now. Right now, you aren't Naruto Uzumaki, feared, loved and guardian shinobi of Konoha. Right now, you're just Naruto, with a few cool little tricks up your sleeve. Right now you're just a little minnow that's been thrown into a sea of sharks all looking to make a meal out of you. Naruto couldn't quite form the words to respond back to him as he noisily continued to cough and heave, rolling onto his side as he struggled to calm his still churning, empty stomach. But, I will tell you the truth about what makes a shinobi truly great, Jiraiya said as he crouched down, hovering over Naruto. It isn't amazing and powerful techniques. It isn't great fighting skills, or impossible aim. It isn't lineage or bloodline techniques. He paused, letting Naruto slowly calm his still spasming body a bit more, before he continued. What makes a shinobi truly great, is the ability to endure whatever is thrown at them. It's to have life beat you down, again and again, then getting up and moving on a little wiser. When Naruto finally stilled a few moments later, Jiraiya picked him up by the back of his jacket and carefully put him over his shoulder. Figure that out and nothing will stop you in the end. Oh. Kin opened her mouth to say something before shutting it and shaking her head. You know what? Never mind. I know no matter what, you're going to say something about his attitude or training or who knows what. He started it, actually. Jiraiya stated simply before lightly settling Naruto down onto the soft grass. You should see what he did to his little training ground. Somehow even came up with a way to turn a fireball eating away at that defense of his back into an attack. Tsunade slowly looked up from where she had been hovering over an irritated Temari, who was continuously twisting her arm and wrist as the fan flowed around arm and wrist. Her brow furrowed as she twisted her wrist, catching the fan and slapping it shut. Then it fell to the ground and she cursed softly. "Stop squirming so much," Tsunade chided lightly as she lightly pushed him back down. "You're not going to just magically pick it up. You don't have the control for that." Temari's scowl immediately deepened. Nearby, Kin allowed a brief, triumphant smirk to crease her lips. Unfortunately, Tsunade saw it. "Oh, don't look so smug, little Miss High and Mighty, your control is on a whole other level of bad compared to hers," Tsunade said with a smirk of her own. Kin immediately scowled as she clutched at the leaf she still hadn't made much progress on disintegrating in the last few days. Then her eyes glanced over at the small group of clones working on doing the same. Her scowl only deepened from there. "How come he makes it look so easy?" Kin demanded quietly as she sent a slight look at the still prone Naruto as Shizune was slowly running her glowing green hands over him. "Because he's been like this his whole life," Tsunade said absently as she continued to scan Temari. "Of course he's going to be able to handle it better. Have you even bothered to try and relearn your chakra control exercises yet?" Kin opened her mouth to answer, before she turned around and glared at Jiraiya. "Why didn't you tell me I needed to learn everything all over again?" "Because I'm not a highly trained and legendary medic nin who knows and understands that stuff." Jiraiya responded flatly with a shrug of his shoulders. "Why do you think I had her check you out?" "But..." Kin groaned softly and hung her head with a scowl. "Fine." As Kin stood up and walked over to her group of clones, Jiraiya shook his head and looked back over at Shizune. "How's he doing?" "The heat exposure is subsiding faster than I'd imaged." "The same with the bruises," Shizune frowned slightly. "Is this the power of the QB?" Jiraiya shrugged simply. "Don't know. I don't think either Mito-sama nor Kushina-chan ever healed this fast, but neither of them had the sealing done when they were born. Neither of them had a mother like he did, either," Tsunade said simply as she continued to examine Temari for a moment longer before nodding her head. "There, now you can get back to trying to play with your fans." Ignoring the growl Temari sent her way, Tsunade stood up, then walked over to the still unmoving Naruto. "So, what did you do to the brat, you old pervert?" "I simply needed to ensure he learned a valuable lesson," he said simply as Tsunade eyed him warily and brought her own hand down and began to examine the boy. "What the hell is this?" Tsunade stared a moment, before she ripped her eyes up towards Jiraiya. "Who the hell has this brat been training with? That idiot guy? HM? No." Jiraiya shook his head, arching a brow at her lightly. "Why? His bones are too dense for normal training at his age," she frowned slightly as she continued to run her hand over him. "But that doesn't make sense, they shouldn't, but they are." "Mind speaking plainly for those of us not living in your head, princess?" he asked with a small touch of sarcasm in his voice. "Like I'd ever let you near it," she responded flatly without even a moment's hesitation. "Believe me, princess, I've had enough trouble trying to follow your line of thinking for years. I gave up trying to figure out why you do what you do decades ago," Jiraiya said flatly. "So what does it mean?" Even with his healing factor, he'd have to be training himself into the ground, repeatedly, in order to have this kind of bone density, she said, ignoring the barb in his voice. "What kind of teacher pushes their students that hard?" Jiraiya glanced away for a moment, before rolling his shoulders into a shrug. "Not the brats. If he's been training that much, it's because he did it on his own up until those Chunin exams when he got some help from Anko and her friends." "Anko?" Tsunade frowned slightly at the name, brow knit into a furrow. "What does Dango have to do with?" "Anko, as in Orochi's Anko," he said in clarification. "You know, the apprentice he slapped that twisted little creation of his on and then abandoned?" "Ah." Tsunade's face twisted sourly and she shook his head as she resumed studying the boy. "His chakra coils are quite interesting. There's a definite bleed-off, but there's no ruptures. And the chakra signature matches the ones I found in the girls. I am such a genius," Jiraiya chortled softly as he rubbed his hands together. "Oh, shut up and stop being so smug about how lucky you got. I know you didn't mean to use the seals as a filter to bleed out the toxicity of its chakra," she stated simply and shook her head. "I see you decided to put the little brat in his place. Quite hard it looks." She was smirking, smugly as she said, taking a visible satisfaction from the fact as she took over healing from Shizune. "I'd say I'm surprised at your pettiness, but..." Jiraiya shook his head ignoring the slight glare Tsunade sent his way. "Feel up to do some actual training or do you want to go back to drowning in sake? Please, you looking to end up in the hospital, again, old man?" Tsunade's lips held a light smirk as she arched a brow back at him. "Like I have something to worry about from an old booze hound like you," Jiraiya said back without missing a beat. "I'll show you what you have to worry about, all right." The crack of Tsunade's knuckles was audible as she stood up and glared at Jiraiya. "Oh!" Naruto awoke to a violent shaking, throwing him lightly into the air and then painfully onto his back. With a groan, he quickly sat up, his head immediately swimming. Glancing blearily around as his eyes refused to focus, he asked, "What's going on?" "Ah, you're awake, Naruto-kun." Shizune quickly put her hand on the back of his head and smiled as the green glow helped clear his head. "Better?" "Yeah." Naruto agreed with a light nod of his head before he looked around, trying to find the source of the sudden earthquake that had woken him. He found broken, burning earth churning around the blurring motions of two figures. Jiraiya and Tsunade moved too fast for him to truly follow. Blows were thrown and parried in the blink of the eye, faster than Naruto had ever imagined before, neither of them attempting to block the other straight out. Then the earth shook again as Tsunade landed another punch into the ground. Earth rose up in a stone wall before a wave of fire caught it and melted it into a rose-colored slag. Then, a few motions and a blast of water left Tsunade's mouth and covered the glowing stone. Instantly the air cracked as a hiss of steam filled the air, obscuring the distance between the two combatants. Sounds of sharp impacts found it out, then Tsunade found herself leaping back, a flowing wave of spikes penetrating into the space she'd been in only a moment before. Then, suddenly, the makeshift walls she'd created with her blows melted down into mud and poured towards her. Tsunade was airborne before it could reach her and took another sudden breath, filling her lungs up, as her hands ran through a series of seals. Then she spat out a series of bullets of ugly green fluid through the steam. The flowing earth stopped and turned solid again as Jiraiya's technique was broken. When the mist cleared moments later, the earth was eaten by a series of blackened pits that released a soft stream of toxic vapors as the acid bullets slowly finished eating their way down. Beyond them, Jiraiya released a trio of kunai, tags flapping on their rings. Tsunade flicked small broken stones at each, deflecting the kunai and causing the tags to explode. And suddenly it was raining oil down all over the field, covering every inch in the slick, glistening fluid. Everything, including Tsunade, and her suddenly not as opaque as it normally was top. The woman stood there a moment before her brow twitched and her jaw clenched. "Jiraiya, you dirty, perverted little dash." She broke off, in mid-rant as she saw a familiar set of signs flashing through Jiraiya's hands as he leaped past the edge of the oil and a blast of fire escaped his mouth. Instantly the entire battlefield was transformed into a twisting, churning inferno. Jiraiya wasted no time as he landed, his fingers instantly moving through a new set of signs, and slamming down onto the earth, turning them into a churning swamp of fire. Then the liquid earth exploded outwards, arching up into a curving, solid dome, covering the flame entirely. Moments later the dome collapsed in on itself, leaving a mess of charred earth and stone. Then, suddenly, a massive geyser of water shot up, propelling an irate-looking Tsunade, her arms crossed about her chest upwards, standing at its peak. She looked down at Jiraiya for a moment, glaring angrily at him, then she made a series of signs of her own and flipped backwards. As she descended, her hands came together, fingers pointed like a gun towards Jiraiya, and suddenly the geyser began to shoot out, breaking into a multitude of whirling scythe-like blades. A wall of stone and earth rose up between Jiraiya and incoming onslaught before it was worn away into rubble in seconds. When it fell, he was nowhere to be seen. Still the blades fell, earth was carved up and turned to mud everywhere the blades could reach as Tsunade landed. Then a hand rose up, grabbing hold of her ankle and pulling down. Tsunade's fist crashed into the earth again, however, instead of shattering, it rippled like water and turned into mud. Glaring angrily, she suddenly kicked up with her leg, ripping the hand, and the Jiraiya attached to it, out of the ground. The man broke his grip when he was halfway emerged from the ground, but it was too late for him to reverse the momentum. Viciously bending backwards, Tsunade cartwheeled into a snapping kick that propelled Jiraiya up into the air. As he arched back, she spit an acid bullet as she finished completing her cartwheel straight towards the flying form, only he dispersed into a puff of smoke before it could impact. Then Jiraiya erupted from the earth behind her, hands filled with swirling Rasengan as he swung at her head. She ducked, just inching out of the way of the first sphere as a few errant strands of hair were tugged out of her head and turned to dust in the attack. Then she was twisting about, using her arm to catch his and force his follow-up backhand to slide harmlessly up over her head. Her cheeks puffed as he came full circle, before blasting out a stream of steaming acid. He met it with his own stream of oil. For a moment, they focused on battling, one against the other, struggling for dominance as acid and oil splattered around them. Then suddenly they broke and they were moving back into tight, flowing blows. Tsunade moved with a tight, minimum efficiency, using her strength and chakra control to deflect Jiraiya's blows with the least amount of force possible. Jiraiya moved with a dramatic, deceptive style that gave every indication of telegraphing itself one way, only to strike another. Still, neither seemed to gain over the other, until finally both froze in place. When they looked, Jiraiya was holding a swirling Rasengan at Tsunade's throat. She in turn had her finger, cocked back, held beneath her thumb at his. Either was a potential death blow. For a moment, silence reigned as the pair stared, solemnly into each other's eyes. Then Naruto's voice broke enthusiastically in. That was awesome. Then, Tsunade pulled her hand back and scowled, angrily at him. You held back. You're out of practice, he responded simply with a shrug. The entire match had only lasted a few precious minutes, the Sanin's attacks flowing back and forth with the strength and skill that brought armies to their knees. As Naruto slowly felt the reality of their skills filter into his mind, his jaw started to hang. Then their words hit him like a falling mountain. That was holding back? That was out of practice? Naruto demanded as he stared back at the pair. Jiraiya turned and smirked softly at the boy as his eyes gleamed lightly. That was just a taste of what it means to be a legend, brat. Then his lips tightened back down into a frown. That was just a glimpse of what League Itachi Uchiha and Kisame Hoshigaki are in. And with those words, Naruto simply stared back at Jiraiya for a moment, before his eyes hardened and he glared back defiantly. Then I've got a lot of work ahead of me. Chapter 26. Sweat glistened down Naruto's face as he glared at where a smirking Jiraiya was standing in front of him, arms crossed about his chest. Still gotta be faster about it, Jiraiya said simply. If you can't do it fast enough to catch your opponent off guard and fast enough to keep the heat from getting to you, it's not going to be that useful in a fight. I'm getting better, Naruto growled back as he glared at Jiraiya. I'd like to see you do something like this. I'm not that crazy and I don't have that little healing factor of yours to keep from cooking my brains, he responded without skipping a beat and smirked lightly. Then why were you having me do this? Naruto demanded with a growl as he looked up at him with sweat-stung eyes. Because you are that kind of crazy, Jiraiya said simply. And this kind of crazy works for you. It just gets so damned hot. Naruto whined softly as he fell back, staring up at the sky as the light touch of a cool breeze ran over his skin. You can worry about confining the exothermic properties into the focal point after you've managed to get the technique working, Jiraiya said with a deadpan. Huh? Naruto blinked several times as he stared back up at Jiraiya. Right, idiot, I forgot, he rubbed his face slowly and shook his head with a sigh. Hey! Don't worry, I'll try to remember to not use big words around you. Jiraiya waved his hand and shrugged a bit. I don't really have the patience to improve that shitty vocabulary of yours. Bastard, Naruto said with a hiss as he closed his eyes and just sank back into the cool earth for a few more moments before slowly pushing himself back up to his feet. Again. Eesh, already? Youth, so quick to recover, Jiraiya said before his lips drew into a wicked grin. Now if only you used it on those girls of yours, I'm sure that they would appreciate it. Especially your little blonde boar of love. Boar of love? Naruto repeated, staring at him with a sudden look of incredulity. Seriously, you're going with boar of love? Oh, shut up, like you could do any better, her name's Ino for Kami's sake. Jiraiya protested. That's not exactly a name for the epics of romance. I don't even want to think about what Inoichi was thinking naming her that. I still don't want to even think about the fact that you want to inflict her on me, Naruto muttered sourly. And I still don't see why you're complaining. She's spirited, she likes you, she's going to be one hell of a looker, she's not afraid of actually getting into a fight. Jiraiya shrugged his shoulders. And she likes you. She likes Sasuke, Naruto stated stubbornly. All of them do. And she'll just try to make me act like Sasuke. I'm not Sasuke. I want to be recognized as Naruto Uzumaki. Not someone who tries to be Sasuke Uchiha. Idiot, Jiraiya muttered sourly. If she didn't like you, she wouldn't like you. She wants me to be more like Sasuke. Naruto growled back stubbornly at the man. She only thinks she wants you to be more like Sasuke. What she really wants is for you to be you, Jiraiya nodded with a sage nod of his head. That completely doesn't make sense, Naruto said with a confused stare. Ah, my poor, little student, let the master educate you in the ways of female mind. Jiraiya paused dramatically, before glancing carefully to his left, then his right, before leaning in to whisper in Naruto's ear. It never, ever makes sense. But Naruto started to protest as he stared up at Jiraiya. Never, Jiraiya repeated firmly as he crossed his arms about his chest. Why should I believe anything you say? Naruto frowned slightly as he crossed his own arms about his chest and glared back at Jiraiya. You're just a dirty old pervert. I already told you, I am no mere pervert. I am The super pervert, Jiraiya, Naruto said in complete deadpan. You know, not even I'm dumb enough to yell that like it's a good thing. Humph. I know more about women than you do, brat. Jiraiya grunted sourly as he glared back at the boy. You just said that you didn't know anything. I said the female mind didn't make sense, not that I didn't know anything, Jiraiya said with a sage nod of his head. For while it does indeed not make any sense, there are certain consistencies in that lack of sense. Naruto looked back at him in silence for a moment. Jiraiya opened his mouth to say something before noting that Naruto's gaze wasn't quite on him. He vanished in a puff of smoke, just before Tsunade's fist passed through the spot his head had been a moment before. Ugh, bastard, she said with a grunt as she straightened up and then glared down at Naruto with narrowed eyes as she started to crack her knuckles. Now, I'm going to hope you're not so much of a brat that you actually believe that old pervert. He's an old pervert, he said simply as he looked back at Tsunade in confusion. Why would I listen to anything he has to say about women? Hey! Jiraiya's voice called out from a nearby tree. Tsunade vanished herself for a moment and suddenly the tree split in half as a log fell to the ground from one of the branches. As she pulled her fist back from the broken trunk, she slowly scanned the area. When she apparently found no further sign of Jiraiya, she scowled and walked back over to Naruto. I suggest you stick with that thought. And never, ever forget it, Tsunade muttered darkly as she continued to send a general glare around her. That kinda was the idea. Naruto paused a moment, before groaning softly as he fell back and dropped onto his ass. Now I have to wait for him to get around to getting back here. Slowly Tsunade looked at the scorched area around them, before palming her face with an audible groan. You're not seriously trying to make that ridiculous idea work. Hey! It works. Naruto huffed in irritation. I just need to do it faster. Right, she said with a roll of her eyes. I'm sure. Wordlessly, he brought up a completed, swirling Rasengan in one hand as he glared back at her in challenge. I already got this down. I got my other skills down. You think I won't get this one? Humph, luck is only going to get you so far, kid, Tsunade said simply before she suddenly changed the topic. So, don't you have enough girl troubles with your two spoils? You've got another girl you're chasing after too? I'm not chasing after her, Naruto turned away, grunting softly. She's chasing after me. Just so she can try to make me act like the bastard. The bastard? Her lips twitched slightly at that, and for a moment, a brief flash of nostalgia rose up as she remembered another spiky-haired brat describing someone in that tone. Sasuke, Naruto said with a nod. My teammate. Rookie of the year, stuck-up bastard. Which, as I recall, would probably have made you the year's dead last, Tsunade said reasonably, even as she smirked at the boy. Naruto tensed at the words and glared back at Tsunade. Yeah, so? You think I care about something as stupid as that? And you really think it's possible for a dead last to become Hokage? Tsunade smirked at Naruto and shook her head. Yes, he said simply, causing her to blink as he leaned back and stared up at the clouds. She frowned slightly and glared slightly back at the boy. Then you need to wake up and start living in the real world. No one's going to follow a dead last. You think that's going to stop me? You think that's going to scare me away? Naruto didn't even bother looking at her as he stared up at the sky. All you people are just broken records repeating the same thing over and over again. You're the ones that need to start living in the real world. Excuse me? Tsunade's eyes flashed in anger as her fist clenched back. You heard me, he said as he sat up and twisted in her direction. I'm going to follow my dream, no matter what. Even if I have to claw and scrape my way to the top, I'm going to do it. Better men than you have died trying. The pain in her voice had bled into venom as she glared back at Naruto. And you think some punk like you will triumph where they failed? I don't go back on my word, he said simply, glaring back at Tsunade. I said I would be Hokage. I will be. I will protect the people of Konoha. I will make them acknowledge me. That is my dream and I will make it happen. Tsunade unconsciously gripped at the pendant hanging from her chest and shook her head, scowling at him. People like you, they always talk so big about their dreams. What happens when you die trying? Do you even think about the people you leave behind? Naruto paused a moment, confusion written on his face. Huh? When you die on that stupid little quest of yours, not only taking yourself, but those girls of yours, too. Have you even stopped to think about the people you'll leave behind? The people that care about you? Have you? Tsunade's fingers clenched tighter onto the pendant in her hand. Do you think about how they feel when you die failing to live up to your dreams? I won't die like that, Naruto said angrily as he glared back at Tsunade. I won't do that to Kinchan or Sunshine. He paused a moment before his lips pressed tightly together into a thin, hard line. But, even if I did? Dying, fighting to reach your dream? Refusing to give up? They might be sad, sure, but if they knew me, if they knew my dream, they'd know that I died how I lived, refusing to go back on my dreams. So, you just want them to suffer through it? Stupid, typical idiocy. Tsunade spat as she refused to look back at him. Naruto looked at her for a moment before he scowled again. I'm not the one who's not listening. It's my dream. It's my reason for living, my goal, my purpose. Friends, people who care about me, if they want to deny me who I am, they never really cared about me. He took a breath and suddenly, he wasn't looking at her as he stared into the distance. All my life, I wanted recognition, for people to see me. When they finally did, that's not enough for me. I want to protect them. I want to protect them all. So my goal is still the same, I will be the Hokage, I will be the strongest, I will be the awesomest. I will be me. And if people see me, know me, like me for me, they will have to accept that me being me means I have to follow my dream. Otherwise, they don't want me to be me, and if they don't want me to be me, how can they care about me? He frowned at his words before scratching the back of his head and shrugging. I don't know, but doesn't caring about someone mean you care about who they are? If you try to change who they are, aren't you trying to change them into someone that you don't care about? Naruto shook his head for a moment and turned away from the staring Tsunade. Anyway, I need to get back to my training. Later, Granny. It took Tsunade several seconds to process his last line before her eye began to twitch, violently. Who the hell do you think you're calling old? Oh. It was the end of the week Orochimaru had given her to come up with her decision as Tsunade stared down at the half-filled cup of sake and let the flickering light of the moon reflex across its surface. Tomorrow she would meet with her teammate. Tomorrow would require her to answer. Tsunade-sama. And, of course, there was Shizune. I don't want to hear it, she said gruffly as she continued to stare down into the sake. You've made up your mind then? Shizune sounded resigned more than anything before simply bowing to Tsunade. Very well. That's all? Tsunade asked simply as she raised a brow and brought the cup of sake to her lips. I expected something more. I miss home, Shizune said simply, head still bowed. I have followed you faithfully for most of my life, Tsunade-sama, but I am still a ninja of Konoha. I humbly request to be released from your service. Tsunade's flinch was only a tightening of her fingers on her cup, as she kept her features schooled to neutrality. And if I say no? Then I will continue to follow you, as I have all these years, Tsunade-sama, Shizune said in a completely neutral tone. Ask me again tomorrow night, Tsunade responded simply before she raised her cup to her lips and drained its contents. I see, Shizune slowly nodded her head, before bowing again. Very well, Tsunade-sama. With that she wordlessly stood and backed out of the door, leaving Tsunade alone again to stare up into the night sky, searching for answers she knew she'd never find in the glittering heavens. Oh, it was wonderfully warm in her bed, Shizune noted with a heavy veil of contented drowsiness fogging over her mind. There was a delightful security she only rarely indulged herself in, buried down in those sheets. Around her the world simply didn't exist for a wonderful moment that stretched on to eternity. Oi, Shizune-chan. Where's Tsunade hiding? And then Jiraiya's voice just had to go and ruin it. Then his words filtered through her mind. Wait, Tsunade, hiding? What? Immediately Shizune sat up, before feeling a wave of vertigo washing over her senses. Blonde woman, about this tall, likes to pretend she's half her age, with a rack that makes a man want to fall to his knees and thank the kami for the glory of creation? Jiraiya waved his hand at roughly Tsunade's height before a disturbing grin curled over his lips. She's not here? It was hard to think, her head was foggy, clouded. Not like how she was normally when she woke up. It was like she was. Her eyes immediately widened as she attempted to stand up before collapsing back into her bed. Oh, no. Shizune-chan. Quickly he moved, catching her just before she could fully crumple. What's wrong? Tsunade-sama, she went to meet him, all on her own, she said in almost a whisper, before she frowned. It was difficult to string her thoughts together, she had to force her mind to focus, to ignore the way the drugs scattered her thoughts. She must have drugged me. Him? Jiraiya's voice suddenly went hard. Shizune, are you talking about Orochimaru? She blinked owlishly up at him before opening her mouth, then shutting it without a word and shrugging helplessly at him. Wonderful, Jiraiya's face was caught in his palm before he looked back at Shizune. Where are they? Again she shrugged helplessly, staring almost owlishly back at him as she shifted nervously in her blankets. It was really hard to think. Did she even know where Tsunade had planned to meet her renegade teammate? Of course, Jiraiya said as he groaned softly and shook his head. Well, it's not like I don't have enough time Tsunade hunting as is. I'll come. Shizune managed out, her words thick in her too dry mouth as she started to push her way out of her oh-so-comfortable sheets before she realized the air felt particularly cool to her skin. Why, Shizen-chan, I never knew you preferred to sleep in the nude. Tell me, is it because you like the way the silk sheets feel against your bare skin? Jiraiya's expression had turned downright lecherous as he grinned down at her. What? Shizen blinked, then blinked again, her eyes owlishly wide as she looked down from her completely bare chest, to Jiraiya and back, before her brow furrowed. I don't? Doi? Well, you certainly have nothing to be ashamed of. Jiraiya agreed quickly as he nodded his head and stared. Wait. Tsunade-sama. We have to, she's going to meet with him. It's not safe? She frowned again. Something was wrong, but she couldn't put her finger on it. She was rather cold, though. As she pulled herself back into her sheets, Jiraiya paused, almost frowning in disappointment, before managing to compose himself. Right, Tsunade? Orochimaru. I've got to go make sure she doesn't do anything too stupid. Tsunade-sama and him, Shizen blinked before quickly trying to stand up again, almost leaping out her sheets. We have to save her? And before she could fully stand up, she swayed and faltered, before collapsing, naked back onto her sheets. Oh, you're an evil, devious woman, princess. Jiraiya muttered mournfully as he looked at Shizen for one more moment before almost whimpering as he tore his eyes away from sight and started to move towards the door. Evil, evil I say. Oh. 3 figures stood before the ruins of what had been a castle only a week earlier. Orochimaru smirked coldly towards Tsunade. Next to him his assistant, Kabuto, watched Tsunade with a more wary expression behind his glasses. So, come to a decision, Tsunade-chan? There was nothing but confidence in his smirk as he stood there, his golden eyes glittering wickedly. Let's just get this over with, she said irritably as she refused to quite look at him. Kukuku. The cold chuckle softly left his lips as he slowly lifted up his hands and looked around. Nosifune-chan? My, I didn't expect you to be here all alone. Shizen asked to be released from my service last night. Tsunade said, her teeth gritted softly. Oh? Such a shame, Orochimaru said as he lifted up his bandaged arms. I would think she would have realized you were making the right choice. Tsunade turned a harder glare at Orochimaru before her hands lifted up towards his, beginning to glow a pulsing green. It was then that Kabuto suddenly imposed himself between Tsunade and Orochimaru, pushing his master behind him as his own hands began to glow a pulsing green. I'm afraid she's deceiving you, Orochimaru-sama. Kabuto said quickly as his master's grin faded into a frown of irritation. Her killing intent? Ah, Kabuto-kun, so overprotective, the grin returned full force as he chuckled again. Of course she wants to kill me. Her dear little apprentice has gone and abandoned her. Now all she has left is the promise of her dear loved ones to be returned to her. You have a really annoying brat there. Tsunade growled out as she glared back at Orochimaru. As I said, he's so very overprotective, Orochimaru chuckled softly as his eyes glittered. Besides, we all know what your little weakness is here, Tsunade-chan. And something so easy to bring out? Let's just get on with this, you bastard. Tsunade hissed out with a glare. Of course, wouldn't want to keep Dan and Nawaki-kun waiting, now would we? Orochimaru smirked softly as he held up his hands again. Her hands glowing green once more, Tsunade took hold of Orochimaru's hands in hers. She then raised her head and looked up into his eyes. They'll have to wait a while longer. Orochimaru's eyes widened before he let out a scream of pain as the bones in his hands were completely crushed inside his flesh. Then he was flying through the air courtesy of a powerful kick from Tsunade. His entire body exploded in pain an instant later as he crashed through the hard stone wall that had surrounded the castle. Tsunade turned towards Kabuto before freezing, a splash of crimson blood was flicked into her face as Kabuto held up a bloody kunai, with his free hand dripping blood. I have to congratulate you, Tsunade-sama. It must have taken an exceptional amount of control to destroy Orochimaru-sama's bones like that and not have broken the skin. Kabuto said with a patronizing smile. But you really shouldn't have underestimated me. Tsunade said nothing, only shivering in response as she stared back at the dripping blood splashing onto the ground. Her whole body was frozen, refusing to move. All she could see was flash after flash of Dan's dying body, his blood covering her hands. Ah well, one less problem to worry about, Kabuto said reflectively as he held up his kunai. If only all problems could be solved this easily. Leave her alone, you basta. Naruto's voice cut in as his kunai landed where Kabuto had been only moments earlier. You. Ah, Naruto-kun. This is a surprise. Kabuto said with a sigh of annoyance before frowning lightly. I shouldn't be, but that does seem to be your specialty. But, what? Naruto's mouth hung open, as Kabuto sent his kunai rocketing towards him at speeds faster than his body could fully react to. It split around him nearly a foot from his face. You just tried to kill me," Naruto stated, before his eyes narrowed and his jaw clenched. "You just tried to kill me. And I am sorry about that, Naruto-kun, but I'm afraid I really do need to kill Tsunade-sama here." "She did just try to kill Orochimaru-sama," Kabuto said apologetically with a cold smile back at Naruto. "So, I'm terribly sorry, but could you please lay down and die now?" "No," he practically roared out as he rocketed towards Kabuto. "Ah, I'm sorry, I'll have to insist." Kabuto simply twisted out of the way of Naruto, easily avoiding the grinding edge of air cutting away in front of him and dodging the blades of wind jutting past his clawed fingers with apparent ease. As he twisted out of the way of Naruto's angry charge, his glowing green hand struck, slapping against Naruto's shoulder, almost barely making contact before pulling back with a smirk. Naruto's arm immediately went limp, falling uselessly at his side as he bit back a scream of agony at the sudden eruption of pain. Twisting about, he growled softly and skidded to a stop, his fingers and claws gouging into the earth from his good arm. "As you can see, Naruto-kun, one doesn't need wind to cut," Kabuto said with a chuckle as he pushed his glasses up his nose. "A good medic, well." Naruto's response was a deepening of his growl, as suddenly the air grew saturated with a thick, boiling rage. As crimson bled into his eyes, a coat of matching chakra flowed out over his body, pulsing, bubbling above his skin. Kabuto's smirk dimmed slightly as he watched the slight transformation Naruto endured, before suddenly the limp arm at his side lifted and his fingers flexed. "So, you've learned to harness a bit of the Kyuubi's power after all, Naruto-kun? I'm impressed." Kabuto let himself smile again as he shifted and glanced around. "And you put yourself between me and Tsunade-sama. You might actually have what it takes to be a shinobi. A pity." "Shut up," Naruto said simply, before his fingers moved into a familiar sign and suddenly the area was flooded with clones. "Ah yes, the quantity over quality approach. I expected better from you, Naruto-kun." Kabuto sked lightly before his glowing hand struck a rushing Naruto in the crotch, before he jabbed another Naruto in the throat and crushed a third's foot beneath his heel. "Quality first, Naruto-kun. Quality first. You. Naruto stared at him, mouth opened in shock at the speed and efficiency that Kabuto displayed, completely contrary to the teen he'd encountered in the Chunin exams. "I thought it was fairly obvious I was fooling you before, Naruto-kun. I am a ninja after all," Kabuto said with a thick condescension. "Now I'm afraid I've wasted enough time on this. Goodbye, Naruto-kun." And with that he tore through the clones without pausing for more than a moment. He kept himself moving in tight efficiency, every step carefully measured just beyond the reach of blades and blows. He wasted as little energy as possible, evading most of the clones instead of dispersing them, treating them as if they weren't even worth his time. Then, he was suddenly almost on him. He twisted at the last moment, avoiding the cutting edge reaping towards him by the barest of distances before lashing out with his hands once more. A nearby clone pulled Naruto out of the way, catching the strike in his own back and exploding in a cloud of smoke. As Naruto twisted about, claws raked out, leaving slashes of red across Kabuto's chest. Kabuto simply took a step back and, as one hand glowed over his wounds, the other struck down 3 more clones in quick, snapping thrusts. "I had forgotten how lucky you could be, Naruto-kun. I suppose it's time to stop playing then." He moved even faster as he suddenly struck inside of Naruto's guard, his hands hitting once on each of his arms, once on each of his legs. When he finished, Naruto dropped onto the ground with choked scream of pain. He glared back up at Kabuto, his eyes still and almost glowing, bloody red as he wordlessly tried to struggle back to his feet. "Yes, I'm sure that your little bijou-induced regeneration can heal you back up in no time, almost as well as I can heal myself, Naruto-kun," Kabuto said almost indulgently before he smiled coldly back at him. "Which is why I don't plan on giving you a chance to recover. Goodbye, Naruto-kun," he said simply as he moved swiftly around the forming blade of air and struck towards Naruto's chest. Only another crimson-cloaked form barreled into the way, knocking them both out of the way and tumbling around until they came to rest at the feet of the still-frozen Tsunade. When they stopped, Naruto found himself on his back staring up at his savior. Weakly, Kin smiled back down at him. "I'm sorry. I was so afraid, Naruto-sama," she said in a voice that was soft, too soft, before her body convulsed, and blood began to leak past her lips. Kabuto actually frowned at that, before sighing softly and shrugging his shoulders as he lifted his hands up almost helplessly. "Well, Naruto-kun, you certainly seem full of surprises. Another Jinchuriki somehow going and throwing their life away for you? Quite amazing. Well, at least I don't have to deal with both of you." "Kin-chan?" Naruto stared up at the girl, feeling the way she just collapsed atop him as he weakly managed to pull his arms up, to hold her gently, even as he could feel the way her body fell still and silent. No? It was supposed to be your heart I did that to, but I suppose I really do keep underestimating that luck of yours, Naruto-kun, Kabuto said with an exaggerated sigh and a shake of his head. And as I really do need to get Orochimaru-sama out of here. I'll share something I learned just in case it came to this. No? Naruto forced his body to sit up, cradling Kin's body in his arms. Kin-chan. Tsunade watched, frozen as present warred with the past in front of her, everything slowing to a crawl as memories slipped back and forth with reality. She could see Dan and Nawaki, she could see Naruto and Kin. She could see herself and her grandfather. She could see her sensei and her uncle. She could see Naruto's parents. All in a broken series of images, flashing together. Words vaguely reached her ears, from the blonde boy and from the smirking man. Then words led into actions as his hands moved through a series of signs and a sudden rolling line of fire barreled down onto them. This wasn't right. She was sitting by, watching it happen all over again. This wasn't right. And somehow she could feel her body start to move. Start to stand up, start to move towards the children. Only, she already could see she was moving too slow to make it in time. Then fire exploded around them, turning into an inferno that blocked out in a rush of hungering, greedy flames. Reflexively she knew she wouldn't be able to pull off a move to stop it in time. But, still she had to try. Then that voice spoke up. No. It didn't speak. Instead, it screamed in defiance one single word. Nu. Chapter 27. It hadn't been a completely simple thing for Kabuto to learn the fire technique, in spite of his many talents. His affinity simply didn't match up. Still, that was merely meant it was more difficult, not impossible. For all his failings, the third Hokage had proven that a single person could master all 5 of the elements if they had the intelligence and dedication. Naruto's very public demonstration of his newfound skill left its nature rather simple to deduce. At least, it had been once he used the Wind Claw attack to destroy the girl's fan. It had been bold, it had been powerful, and it had made a statement of how he had completely and utterly dominated the match and his opponent. And it had foolishly demonstrated the glaring weakness of his defense for anyone who cared to pay attention. Just as predicted, the instant the relatively weak line of fire had hit only a few feet in front of the boy, it had suddenly exploded into an inferno. Kabuto didn't even have a chance for his smirk to falter when exploding mass of flames heralding the death of the young Jinchuriki suddenly vanished and a thin line of burnt earth raced towards him. It moved as faster than he imagined it would, even as he shifted to the side, moving out of the way, he knew he wouldn't be fast enough. Immediately he pumped chakra into his arm, strengthening it just where he knew the blade of wind would hit it. It was instinctive, reflexive, and in the end, utterly futile. The blade cut through his flesh without even a moment's hesitation. As his arm fell, severed and useless, the smell of greasy, burnt flesh filled the air. Instead of a dripping stream of blood, the heat in the air had completely cauterized the wound. It didn't make it hurt any less as he bit back a scream and turned his eyes into a twisted glare of rage as he looked back at the boy. Wisps of burning, boiling chakra had wrapped about him again as he cradled the girl in his arms. Bloody, hateful eyes glared back at him, with white, gleaming teeth glinted with fang points. For a moment, Kabuto faltered as he took in the utterly alien look on the defiant braggart he'd met during the Chunin exams before he couldn't help but let his snarl cool into a cold smirk of satisfaction. Well, going to preach at me now, Naruto-kun? There was more bravado in his voice than he actually felt. The boy's attack had actually handicapped him, rather handedly. And that surge of demonic chakra was sure bring Jiraiya running. He would have to move quickly if he was going to kill Tsunade while she was still. Give her to me, brat. Helpless? Tsunade reached out and gently took the girl out of the boy's hands and laid a glowing green hand on her chest. Tsunade, still splattered in blood, holding the girl with blood leaking out of her mouth. She didn't show even the slightest moment of hesitance or fear. Go ahead, kid. Show him what you've got, she said, not even bothering to look at him as the demonic chakra extended around him, suddenly forming into ears and a tail. Kabuto-kun, I'm afraid we've worn out our welcome. The silky voice was still flowing, oozing with confidence as Orochimaru rose out of the mud behind him, looking no worse for wear from Tsunade's devastating attack. And it looks like little Naruto-kun is, much more than you reported to me previously. He glanced towards Kin, lying beneath Tsunade's hands, before suddenly his eyes lit up in recognition. And how interesting. You know the other Jinchuriki, Orochimaru-sama? Kabuto asked carefully, before the surge of demonic, killing intent rose even further. Little Kinchan isn't a Jinchuriki, just another, broken, worthless tool to be cast aside, Orochimaru said dismissively before both he and Kabuto leapt back as Naruto slammed into the spot, almost cratering the earth with the force of his blow. At least, we should deal with this little pest before he becomes any more of a problem, he said with a TSK, before suddenly his sword erupted from his throat. Naruto roared back in challenge, only to swiftly find his face slammed into the earth beneath Orochimaru's heel. You didn't think it would truly be that simple, did you, Naruto-kun? Orochimaru chuckled softly as his sword erupted fully from his throat. Didn't you learn anything from that little exhibition in the forest? And suddenly, he leapt back, pushing Naruto's face deeper into the earth and landing a short distance away. Eyes narrowed, he glanced down at where his foot was smoking, shoe ruined completely and flesh starting to turn red. Shaking his head, he gave one last, cold smirk towards the boy still embedded in the ground and then brought his head, and the blade with it, down towards his body. The air suddenly broke into the high-pitched whine of grinding metal as the swirling pulse of a Rasengan struck the sword, propelling it, and the body holding it, away from the chakra-infused body. Just in time to save the day, the gallant Jiraiya has arrived. Jiraiya declared loudly as he struck a classic kabuki pose over the prone Naruto's body, Rasengan dispersing in his hand. Orochimaru actually glared at Jiraiya as his sword slowly vanished back down his throat. You know, I like that sword, you fool. Sorry, but I can't let you hurt one of my students, Jiraiya said seriously as he glared back at Orochimaru. And since you just tried to kill them, I'm afraid I'm going to have to kill you. You? Kill me? Orochimaru barked off a laugh and smirked back at Jiraiya. I see all that. Research of yours has finally rotted what you had left of your mind. Stand down, Jiraiya. The voice was quiet steel as suddenly Tsunade was walking towards them, Kin still gently cradled in her arms. Jiraiya froze for a moment as he stared at the girl in Tsunade's arms. Is she? She'll be fine, Tsunade said simply as she pushed the girl into his arms, rather forcefully, before leveling her eyes onto Orochimaru. Neither Kabuto nor Orochimaru particularly felt like smiling at that point. After he killed the last Hokage, if anyone's going to kill him, it's going to be the next one, Tsunade stated simply as she cracked her knuckles. Ah, Orochimaru-sama? Perhaps we should? Kabuto asked wanly as he glanced from the two rather upset Konoha Sannin back to the one he served. Orochimaru glared at his former teammates for a moment before nodding his head, reluctantly. Yes, I suppose we should. With that said, both figures seemed to dissolve down into the earth. I don't think so. Not that easily. Tsunade growled softly before slamming her fist into the ground. Instantly, the earth fractured and almost exploded between her and where the pair were vanishing. A moment later there were suddenly snakes exploding off in every direction. A wave of white pins followed them, causing them to vanish in puffs of smoke. When that smoke finally dispersed, they found nothing but shattered earth remaining, along with Kabuto's dead, discarded arm. We going after him? Jiraiya asked as he glanced back at Tsunade, who was frowning slightly at the broken earth. No. Tsunade slowly shook his head. We don't have a sensor to follow him and he threw up enough false trails that we'd spend hours chasing them down. So we're just going to let him go? Naruto pushed himself up out of the dirt, the wisps of Kyuubi chakra slowly dispersing as he looked up at Tsunade. After what he did? Kid, what he did here was just a fraction of what he's done before, Tsunade said simply as she shook her head and stared back at the slight blood smear on her hand. He will be stopped. Just not today. But... Naruto glanced over at Kin, still in Jiraiya's arms, then looked back towards the shattered earth Orochimaru and Kabuto had vanished from. Another day, kid. Another day. Tsunade slowly glanced around before looking back at Jiraiya. Nosithune. You wanted me to bring her, naked and drugged out of her mind out, in public? Jiraiya asked with an incredulous stare at Tsunade. Well, I did use toad secretions. I thought you might be familiar enough with the effects to think of something. Tsunade waved her hand vaguely. Though, I'm impressed you made it here so quickly. I figured I had at least 10 more minutes before you managed to pry yourself free. Humph, Jiraiya grunted back at her before he walked over and calmly pushed Kin into Naruto's arms. Just take your little pet back to the hotel, kid. Looks like we're heading back to Konoha pretty soon. Back home? Naruto perked up as he glanced back at Tsunade with wide eyes before frowning a bit. But I thought? I said I was gonna be the Hokage, didn't I? Tsunade smirked slightly, her eyes glittering lightly. And what kind of Hokage would I be if I went back on my word? Now you've done it, Jiraiya said with a groan as he palmed his face. Well, you better keep that hat warm for me, 'cause I'm gonna be wearing it soon enough, Granny. Naruto grinned back at Tsunade, watching her twitch slightly as he took off running with Kin in his arms. Oh, that cheeky little brat. Tsunade growled softly as she clenched her fingers tightly back into her palms. I'm gonna have him doing D ranks for a month. No, 2 months. He wants to call me old? Let's see how he likes changing bedpans and scrubbing backs and. They don't really have D ranks for that anymore, princess, Jiraiya noted with a smirk. Not since that little tantrum of yours and the Uchiha elders. Hey, I didn't know those old geezers' hearts were that weak. Tsunade protested quickly. And I saved their lives, didn't I? They spent the rest of their days incontinent, Tsunade. They still lived. She paused a moment, before glancing hopefully towards Jiraiya. Think we could do something like that to Danzo? Well, it's always good to keep your hopes up, Jiraiya smiled slightly back at her. We might be able to think of something. Between the two of us, we better be able to, Tsunade muttered softly. Aw. I leave you two alone for all of half an hour and you come back here looking like you just went 5 rounds with Orochimaru, Temari said incredulously as she stared at Naruto. What the hell happened to Kin? It wasn't even 1 round. I got that bastard Kabuto good, though, Naruto said with a slight grunt as he laid Kin out on the couch. Wait, what? Temari shot up ramrod straight as she stared back at Naruto. Orochimaru. All this training and I'm still not even good enough to touch the bastard, even when he's weakened and I'm using the QB. Naruto's fingers clenched a moment, before sighing softly as he glanced over at Temari. Go ahead, you can say how pathetic that makes me. Temari stared at Naruto for a moment and then sighed as she slumped down. I'm not going to call you pathetic. I got my face stomped down into the ground and he didn't even bother to make it look hard. If the old pervert hadn't shown up, I'd probably be needing to replace another jacket. He paused and grimaced lightly, and probably a new head and whatever else he'd have cut out. The only other person I've ever seen that could take on Gaara when he unleashed Shikaku is my father, Temari said suddenly as she glanced away and stared down at her hands. No one else. Just my father, the Kazekage. The leader of one of the Big Five. And he was killed by Orochimaru. You're, what, 12? 13. Naruto growled out lightly. 13, Temari agreed with a nod as she lifted up her hands. So, at 13, you managed to do something it took a Kage to do before. I don't know what it says to you, but I'll be honest, it scares me and thrills me all the same. Naruto scowled back at her and opened his mouth to respond only to be lightly bapped atop his head by a fan that had suddenly appeared in her hand. Nobats. It absolutely terrifies me because you've pasted a gigantic target on your, and by extension, our backs, Temari nodded towards the still unconscious Kin. We're going to have the monsters of the shinobi world gunning for us. Yeah, so? Naruto glared sullenly back at her. And then there's that. You really don't care. I don't know if it's stupidity or supreme confidence, or maybe both. Temari brought her fan out again, catching his chin and lifting his head up to stare straight. But you won't ever back down, will you? Never. Naruto agreed without looking away, staring defiantly into her eyes. Then I suppose I have no choice but to entrust my fate to your hands. Nay, Naruto-sama, she pulled the fan back, bringing it to lightly tap her chin as she watched the expression of confusion blossoming across his face. Do try and not disappoint. I'd really hate to go into afterlife weighted down with the kind of regrets of you not realizing your dream. Naruto's jaw hung open, as he stared back at her. Who? But. You. What? You all got caught up in your little dramas and you left me here alone for the most part, with nothing to do but work on my fans and think. Temari shrugged a bit as she rolled her shoulders back and settled into a seat, staring back at him. What do I do trying to deny this, trying to disbelieve it? Nothing. I'm stuck with this. I can either sulk and whine and hate it. She paused, and flicked her wrist, her fan snapping open and flying a short distance into the air, before quickly jumping back into her hand and clicking sliding shut. Or, I can stand up and take advantage of the fact that I get the chance to learn from living legends and, with a bit of luck, become one myself. Because, I had to be honest with myself, the best I was ever going to be was a jounin. A strong jounin but never truly one of the elites of our world. Now, though? She shrugged her shoulders and managed a vicious, predatory grin. I grew up buried by the shadows of legends and monsters. Now, if I shine bright enough, I might just a part of a greater one. A greater what? Naruto asked, staring at her in confusion. Legend, of course, Temari replied without even skipping a beat as she opened and shut the fan in a fluid flicking of her fingers. That, or we die in a horribly defiant manner. We're not going to die, Naruto said with a half glare. I'm not going to let that happen. Good, Temari agreed with a nod of her head before she grabbed hold of his arm. Now, Come on, I need a sparring partner. But, Kin-chan. Naruto protested quickly. And we're supposed to be heading back to Konoha soon. Make some clones to pack up while we spar. Temari waved her hand dismissively. They can be here when she wakes up. But she saved my life. Naruto growled back at Temari now, glaring at her as he stiffened and straightened his back. You can take the clones, I'm going to stay here and make sure she's fine. Temari blinked a moment before sighing as her fan opened then slapped shut across her open palm. I don't know why that surprises me. It really shouldn't. When he glared openly back at her, she merely waved her fan. Fine, fine. See to our little bitch-chan. I'll settle for the substitutes, for now. Naruto just stared at her, unsure of how to react to the sheer difference in attitude Temari was showing since he last saw her, before he frowned just a bit. He was aware of her. The same way he was really aware of Kin. A kind of nagging tug at the back of his mind, affirming that yes, this was the same girl he'd applied the seal to. Did Granny drug you like she did Shizen-chan? He asked, watching the girl speculatively. What? That brought Temari up short as she turned and stared incredulously at Naruto. Well, she apparently drugged Shizen-chan to distract the old pervert, so I was wondering if she did something like that to you, Naruto said simply, eyeing her warily. You're acting weird. Humph, she sniffed lightly and crossed her arms about her chest. It's not my fault you can't understand a woman's prerogative to change her mind. But, he paused a moment, his nose scrunching up as he studied her a moment. Isn't a sudden change in personality supposed to be a sign of mental instability? She froze a moment, before turning her head and glaring at him in outright fury, before she snapped open her fan and began to work it furiously just beyond her face as she forced a calm smile onto her features. Oh ho ho ho. Now really, Naruto-sama, you wouldn't be insinuating something, would you? He stared at her for a moment, before slowly rubbing his face. I'm definitely going to ask Granny to make sure she didn't accidentally drug you. Temari's eye twitched violently as she clenched tightly on her fan. I am not drugged. Damn it. You sure? If you were anyone else, I would have beaten your head in by now, she stated flatly. Oh, yeah, that sounds more like you, Sunshine, Naruto agreed with a sage nod of his head. Yeah, way too loud. Kin's voice grumbled out with a groggy whine. Some of us were trying to sleep. Kin-chan. Naruto exclaimed gleefully as he grabbed a hold of the girl and practically crushed her to his chest. You're awake. Need ribs. Kin half gasped, half whined, though her lips lightly quirked up into a half smile. I swear, if you ever do that again, I'll. Naruto paused a moment, his face scrunching up in thought. Give me a spanking? Kin offered hopefully. No. Naruto glared at her as he let out a low growl. No spankings. Lots and lots of no spankings. But. Kin's eyes swelled up, glistening as she looked up at him. Didn't I do a good job? Naruto faltered slightly as he stared back into those pleading black eyes. You do realize she's absolutely faking those tears, right? Temari noted blandly as she pulled her fan up and covered her wicked smile. Just to try and get you to give in and give her what she wants. Damn it. Kin growled as she twisted around and glared, angrily at Temari. Why do you have to be such a? Because, she slipped the fan out, tapping it lightly atop Kin's head for a moment before it was angrily pushed away by Kin. You're not the only bitch here, Kin-chan. Kin just almost died. Can you two please just try to get along, please? Naruto asked, looking pleadingly between the two of them. Kin and Temari took a moment to look each other up and down, appraising before they both answered in unison. No. Naruto's face darkened for a moment, before suddenly brightening. Fine then. Sunshine-chan gets the spankings and Kin-chan has to watch. That way everything works out. How the hell does that work out? Temari demanded as Kin gave an emphatic nod of agreement. Yeah. Because, now I have a way of punishing you both at once. Naruto crowed triumphantly and pointed his finger at the two of them in victory. Ah. Take that. The awesome Naruto Uzumaki triumphs again. You know? Temari lightly tapped her lower lip with her fan as her eyes looked speculatively at Kin. If she enjoys it so much, I suppose I could find a way to enjoy myself. And I do have a very, very good imagination, Kin quickly picked up, nodding as she leaned forward, her breath lightly teasing against Naruto's neck as his face suddenly flushed crimson. Haven't you heard the way I just, mooin', Naruto-sama? Hot, slick, glistening, writhing softly. Temari casually trailed her fan down, bringing it along the top then onto her bare shoulders. Our bodies so hot, so eager. Naruto made faint strangling sounds as his face turned an even brighter red, struggling desperately to make some kind of semblance of words. So, won't you punish us, na, are you, to say yama? Kin drew out every little syllable with a half-lidded smile rising across her lips. Ga wa. Naruto fell back, scrambling away as he started at the pair with wide, wary eyes, his breath hammering in short, fast breaths. Heh. Temari snapped her fan open and before raising a brow. You seem awfully red over there, Naruto-sama. Is there something the matter? Maybe he's coming down with a fever? Kin asked thoughtfully as she lightly tapped the side of her mouth. We better get him out of those clothes and into bed. Might have to break out the restraints, just to make sure he stays there, Temari agreed with a smirk. Eyes wide, Naruto made a quick sign and suddenly he vanished in a puff of smoke, replaced by a falling door. A rather familiar door in fact. When they turned their heads, they caught a bright glimpse of orange pants vanishing out of the now empty door frame. Temari took one look at Kin before suddenly bursting out into laughter as she fell onto her back. Kin broke into a smirk and chuckled lightly herself. Then, she froze as a slowly came to a realization. An instant later, she broke into a stream of colorful curses. What's wrong this time? Temari asked with a hint of exasperation as she calmed down and wiped the tears out of her eyes. I didn't get my spanking. Oh. Jiraiya took a moment to blink as he watched his apprentice slam the door shut behind him with wide, panicked eyes. Then he shook his head and sighed softly as he quietly resumed packing up. You know, you really should stop letting them scare you so much, brat. But, Naruto glanced around, his eyes wide before he suddenly pointed straight at him. You! This is all your fault. It's nice you think so, but I doubt it, Jiraiya stated with a bemused drawl as he continued to seal up his thinks. And you should really get packing, we're leaving soon. Liar, he declared without skipping a beat. Only Kin was a pervert before you came along. Jiraiya paused a moment, blinking slightly, before he tilted his head to the side, a grin suddenly split his face and he quickly produced a notebook. Oh, do tell. I mentioned, doing that thing Kin really likes to sunshine and making Kin watch so I could punish them both, Naruto said with a bright blush creeping up his cheeks. And, then they just... He shrugged helplessly, his face blushing brightly before he glared at Jiraiya as the man suddenly burst out laughing. Hey! It's not funny. Naruto growled back at the man. Kid, let me guess, they went and made it sound like they'd enjoy it in oh so interesting ways? Jiraiya waggled his eyebrows back at Naruto and chuckled as the boy blushed further. Thought so. They were using kunoichi tactics 101, turn it back on them in a seductive manner. Every kunoichi learns that stuff in the academy. But, Naruto's mouth opened as he stared back at Jiraiya in disbelief. Didn't they teach you to watch out for it? Jiraiya arched a brow as Naruto sheepishly scratched the back of his head. I might have been absent that day? Naruto said sheepishly with a shrug of his shoulders. Jiraiya paused and arched a brow back at him. And exactly how often were you absent? Often enough to have a specialized response squad? Naruto shrugged slightly and grinned nervously. Of course you did, Jiraiya sighed softly and gave Naruto a flat look. Well, I did spend a lot more time in class those first 6 months, Naruto admitted with a wince. But it was so boring. You know, sometimes I wonder how you survived this long, I really do, Jiraiya muttered softly and shook his head. So, I take it that she's doing better? She wanted a spanking, Naruto said with a huff and a grumble. You are definitely the oddest kid I know, Jiraiya shook his head and sighed slightly as he rubbed his face. So many guys would kill to be in your position. He paused a moment, glancing with a half-worried expression on his face. Are you one of those blue boy types? Huh? Naruto blinked in confusion for a moment before a half-remembered conversation immediately made him flush and glare back at him. No. Not that there's anything wrong with it, of course, Jiraiya said quickly as he held up his hands. It's just, girls throwing themselves at you and you turn and run away. I like girls. Naruto growled back at him, his eyes narrowed into slits. I've been trying to get a date with Sakura-chan since forever. And it's not just you trying to get her to be your beard? Jiraiya clarified as he tilted his head to the side. Naruto's nonverbal growl was more than answer enough as Jiraiya reached down and lightly ruffled his hair. Just making sure, because that's what people will think. For a moment, Naruto blinked then stared at him, his mouth suddenly dropping. But, if I do that, everyone will think I'm a pervert. Let me impart upon you one of the greatest bits of wisdom there is, my young student. Jiraiya raised his hand, an expression of grave severity upon his features. Everyone is a pervert. Liar. Nope, everyone is. Jiraiya nodded his head sagely, before pausing. Well, except for the ones who are completely asexual, but those don't count. Ah. You just admitted you were wrong. Naruto stated triumphantly. Look, kid. Everyone has a degree of a pervert in them. Some more so than others, he said as he waggled his eyebrows back at him. You're male and you're going to be constantly surrounded by pretty girls that are going to become some very sexy women. If you keep running from them every time they try to do something a bit perverted, they'll assume you just don't like women. But, then they'll think I'm like you. Naruto said with a look of horror on his face. Do you like girls? Jiraiya asked bluntly. Yes. Then be willing to show it. And for the Kami's sake, give that girl her damned spankings already. She just almost died to protect you. She deserves a reward, Jiraiya said with a roll of his eyes as he lightly pushed the boy towards the door. You need to start showing some of that crazy confidence you have everywhere else. And for the love of all that's right in the world, take your blonde girlfriend on a date when we get back. Jiraiya firmly pushed him out of the room. Now, go finish packing and see to your girls. She's not my girlfriend. Chapter 28. So, I noticed you haven't been working the shop much lately, Inoichi Yamanaka stated simply as he took a seat across from his daughter. Ino blinked slightly as she stared at her father for a moment. What? You haven't been working the shop? You know, your mother's flower shop, he said in way of clarification as he stared back at her, neutrally. Oh. Yeah, I've been training a lot, she stated with a shrug of her shoulders. No big. Really? There was no small amount of skepticism in his voice as he arched a brow back at her. Because I've been seeing Shikamaru and Chuji down at the restaurants and laying about pretty often. Those lazy little finks. They told me they were training. Ino fumed, her fingers clenching. When I get my hands on them. They thought my last batch was bad? Oh, I'll get them but good. Inoichi blinked slightly as he stared at Ino, obviously not having expected his daughter's reaction. Ino-chan, what have you been doing? Training, I just told you, Ino repeated with a flash of irritation moving across her face as she glared lightly at her father. But I just told you that your team is full of lazy bastards, she stated flatly as she crossed her arms about her chest. So I have to go get training elsewhere. Elsewhere? He wasn't sure why he felt a cold, dripping trickle of doom moving down his spine at the words, frowning lightly. Where exactly are you getting training, Ino? The crazy lady from the second stage of the exams and the ANBU lady with purple hair that likes to cut people up, she responded with a shrug. They're bored since Naruto-kuen's out of town. Wait. That cold drip turned into a sudden, ice-cold waterfall, fed fresh from a glacier. You're getting training from Enko and Yugugo? Yup, time for me to go meet up with them now. She hopped up, smiling brightly and gave him a jaunty wave. Have a good day at work. Inoichi stared for a moment, as he watched the way his daughter vanished out the door, before another bit of information finally settled into his mind. Wait. Naruto-kun. Oh, Ibiki. I want this one. Ibiki Marino blinked slightly as he looked up at a grim-faced Inoichi and lightly tilted his head to the side. And why the hell would I let you? Thought you were done with this side of TNI? Because I just found out my daughter is getting training from Enko and Yugugo, Inoichi stated flatly as he stared back at Ibiki. And she called the Uzumaki Naruto-kuen. There was, of course, only one, the Uzumaki, in Konoha. During its founding it had been Mito, the wife of the Shodai Hokage. Later it had been Kushina. Now, that distinction had passed on to Naruto. What's the problem? He's an interesting brat. Might suck at stealing answers but damned if I've ever seen someone turn an atmosphere into a complete 180 as fast as he can, Ibiki said simply, pointedly ignoring the implications of the first part of Inoichi's statement. It means my daughter is now interested in a boy. An actual boy, with boy parts, unlike the Uchiha, Inoichi stated for clarification. An actual boy with actual boy hormones. Ah, Ibiki smirked slightly back at his older subordinate. Sucks to be you. And you're not going to say anything about Enko and Yugugo training my daughter? Inoichi's irritation was audible as he lightly glared back at the head of his department. I already knew about it, he shrugged his shoulders before pushing a button on his desk. Haruno. Instantly a familiar head of pink hair popped out of the door to the office. Yes, Marino-san? Ah. Hello, Yamanaka-san. Sakura? Inoichi blinked, then blinked again, staring at the girl. What are you doing here? Helping Marino-san organize his non-sensitive files, Sakura paused a moment before sending a mild glare at the smirking man. His clerical filing system was positively atrocious. Yes, some of us have actual work to do instead of worrying about where the requisition files go, Ibiki waved his hand dismissively. And besides, now I have you here to do that. How anyone found anything in that mess you called a filing system is beyond me, Sakura said with a grumble. They were organized perfectly fine. It was all by blood stain, Ibiki stated with a completely straight face. I don't even want to think about why that finger was in there, Sakura said with a light grumble. Oh, so that's where Morisato's finger went? Inoichi couldn't help but comment. She's pretty good about organizing things. Picks up things quite quick, Ibiki noted with a shrug. She just sucks with people. Sakura glared at Ibiki but held her tongue. She is getting better with her temper, though, he admitted with a slight smirk. She was about ready to physically assault people for a comment like that when I first took her in. Went berserk in a spar with your daughter. Sakura flushed bright right, her eyes immediately dropping down to her feet. Inoichi blinked slightly. But Ino wasn't in the hospital for anything like that. She wasn't, Ibiki agreed with a smirk and a nod towards Sakura. Your little girl put her in there. For a moment Inoichi just stood there, blinking as he tried to process exactly what it was Ibiki said. Ino. My Ino, put Sakura in the hospital? Pinky here rather forced her to do it, Ibiki agreed serenely and nodded towards Sakura. Of course, considering what your girl did to her, looks like we've got another sadist in the making. I don't want to know, do I? Inoichi asked rhetorically as he slowly rubbed his face. This just gets more and more complicated. There's a storm coming, Ibiki stated simply, not even glancing towards Sakura as he spoke. All of the veterans can feel it. And I have a feeling that in the end it's going to be these rookies right in the heart of it all. I hope you're wrong, Ibiki. I truly hope you're wrong, Inoichi said softly as his own eyes stared blankly past Ibiki, as it went unspoken he hoped he was wrong as well. Either way, we need to get these brats whipped into shape, Ibiki said with a smirk, suddenly changing the mood entirely. Won't do to have us looking like a bunch of idiots out there on the field, now will it? Wordlessly Inoichi nodded his head before eyeing Sakura critically. You've got a full schedule today, don't you, Ibiki? You volunteering to put Pinky here through some training? I was thinking, she needs proper evaluation. Inoichi said simply. Sakura felt a cold shiver running down her spine as Ibiki barked off a laugh and nodded viciously in agreement. That she does. Well, Pinky, I'll leave you in his perfectly capable hands. She just knew this was gonna suck. Aw, home at last. Naruto crowed eagerly as he practically bounced up towards the gate. I suppose it would be too much to ask for him to show at least a little restraint? Temari asked rhetorically as she lightly rolled her fan around her hand in a lazy manner. Entirely, Kin agreed with a nod and a shrug of her shoulders as she made certain her mask was pulled up over her nose. Naruto-sama is Naruto-sama. So I remember, Temari sighed slightly and shook her head as she unconsciously fingered the engraved collar at her throat. Now, cute little spoils should be seen, not heard, Tsunade said with a smirk as she appeared behind them. You wouldn't want to get your master in trouble, would you? Really, Tsunade-sama, there's no need to be so mean to them, Shizune protested before glaring lightly at the woman. After all, they're not the ones that drug women and leave them in the hands of a known pervert. Naked. Nyayinja, Tsunade countered with a smug look. And it worked, though he probably had to keep his groping to a minimum. I was a complete and total gentleman, Jiraiya grumbled as he glared back at Tsunade. If you were, I'm sure you're cursing lost opportunities, Tsunade said with a smirk. Though I doubt it. Shizune blushed crimson, staring at her feet as she shuffled along. Yes, it was quite the missed opportunity. Shizune-chan is such a wonderful example of womanhood, Jiraiya agreed as he threw a wink at Shizune and continued. It must be horrible, knowing that you have to use your apprentice because you can't do it yourself anymore. Tsunade immediately twitched at that, sending a baleful glare back at Jiraiya. Something the matter, princess? He asked entirely too innocently for her tastes. No, just thinking about the new renovations all the hot springs and bathhouses are going to need, she responded sweetly. All those old holes that need to be boarded up and all of those walls that need to be strengthened and raised a good 5 feet. We have to defend them against perverts, after all. Jiraiya paused for a moment, his eyes narrowed into slits before he slowly rubbed his hands together. So, we're going to play that game, are we, princess? Temari glanced over at a suddenly groaning Shizune. We don't want to know, do we? No, you don't, Shizune agreed with a sad shake of her head. It'll destroy what little illusion remains of them as great and noble shinobi. Go ahead and tell me then. Mine already ground itself into dust, Kin noted with a smirk. Funny, Tsunade stated flatly as she eyed the girls and snorted softly. I should put you through medic nin training just for that. With my control? Kin looked back at Tsunade incredulously. Are you kidding me? Do you want me to kill someone? Tsunade rubbed her chin thoughtfully as she glanced over at Jiraiya. They'd never go for it. They demand the best, not just some half-trained apprentice, Jiraiya said sadly and shook his head. Damn it, I hate it when you're right, she admitted with a sour twist of her lips and sighed softly. Oh, well. We'll eventually come up with an appropriately believable accident. Whatever you say, princess, Jiraiya agreed with a bemused smirk pulling over his lips. Halt! State your. There was a pause in the Chunin at the gate's orders as he realized who he was staring at. Jiraiya-sama? And Tsunade-sama? Yeah, it's the old pervert and granny. Can we get in already? Naruto demanded impatiently. TCH, relax already, you impatient little brat, Tsunade muttered a bit and sighed as she glared back at the boy who scowled back at her, then turned to the gate guard. Tsunade Senju, returning as requested by the Jounin Council. Ah, right, the Chunin fumbled a moment before quickly bowing to the group and stepping away from the gate. They're expecting you. Tsunade glanced questioningly towards Jiraiya, who shrugged and responded, I sent a toad ahead of us. Ah, then let's not keep them waiting, nay? Tsunade chuckled softly before frowning just a bit. They're not going to make me wear the hat, are they? It is part of the job, Jiraiya noted neutrally. But it clashes with my favorite uniform. Tsunade grumbled slightly, before brightening. Well, you know what that means. Time for me and Naruto to make like shinobi. CYA. Jiraiya agreed before vanishing in a puff of smoke and dragging Naruto along with him. HRMPH, after all these years and the idiot still runs away at the slightest mention of me taking him shopping with me, Tsunade said with a note of irritation. It wasn't that bad. A toad suddenly appeared in front of them, bearing a scroll it tossed up to Tsunade before vanishing. He didn't, Tsunade said incredulously before carefully unrolling the visibly aged scroll and stared at the writing it contained. He did. That idiot actually did it. Tsunade-heim? If you're reading this, the thing I feared most of all has come to pass and you were about to try and drag me off for another shopping trip. Please forgive me for, while I do enjoy seeing you in all those outfits, especially that cute little yukata that barely fit you, you nearly crushed my spine making me carry all those clothes. I like my spine where it is, thank you very much. Jiraiya, the awesome toadneen. I'm going to kill him, Tsunade stated simply as she fought down her blush. Slowly, painfully and crushing that thing he calls a spine into a fine powder. Shizun peeked over her shoulder, blinking slightly. Cute little yukata, Tsunade-sama? Shut up, Shizun. Aw. Phew, we made it, Jiraiya sighed in relief as they appeared in front of Naruto's apartment before grinning widely. My secret evade shopping trip technique was a success. What's with you and Kakashi-sensei and shopping? Naruto stared back at Jiraiya, blinking in confusion. One of us, most likely you. Hey! Would have said something stupid and gotten them pissed at us even more so than they are for us refusing to go with them, Jiraiya stated simply. And we both would have suffered. HRMPH, Naruto crossed his arms about his chest and glared back at Jiraiya. You're crazy. Think about how annoying they can be as is. Jiraiya paused a moment to allow Naruto to recall the experience. Now, imagine them being about 10 times or so worse. Naruto's brow furrowed and he looked back at Jiraiya before shaking his head. I don't believe you. Besides, can't I just punish them for it if they try? Jiraiya opened his mouth to correct the boy, then paused, recalling just what the boy's situation was in regards to Temari and Kin. Well, with your girls, yes. Though there's still the princess to deal with and you can't. Granny's your problem, though, not mine, Naruto said with a smug smirk on his lips as he crossed his arms triumphantly across his chest. Jiraiya stared back at him before pausing a moment and smirking at Naruto. Ah, but your little blonde Yamanaka isn't. Naruto groaned softly, Ino doesn't really like me. She just thinks she does for some stupid reason. You're an idiot. Jiraiya stated bluntly and shook his head. Naruto just glared back at him, and you don't know what you're talking about. No, you're just being an idiot, Jiraiya declared firmly as he glared at Naruto. And I do believe I already gave you an order on what you're supposed to do with her. What the hell? Naruto stared at Jiraiya, his mouth hanging agape, you're ordering me to go on a date with her. As you're too dumb to do it yourself, yes, he agreed with a nod and crossed his arms about his chest. And you've got the money to, so don't even try weaseling your way out of it. She likes Sasuke, Naruto repeated angrily. What is so hard about you understanding that? Asasu non taikeskiviko. She and Sakura have been fighting over him for years. This just some fad for her. I know women. Not a fad, Jiraiya countered in turn. You're a pervert who peeps on women in the baths. That's not knowing women, Naruto growled back and glared at Jiraiya. Humph. Super pervert, thank you very much. Jiraiya corrected before giving the boy a look. And I happen to know plenty about women. Liar, Naruto stated flatly. Ido. Jiraiya insisted as his look started to grow into a glare. Which is why Granny always wants to beat you into a smear in the ground. Tsunade is a completely different and unique case, he said defensively. I've known her since before your parents were even born. Right, Naruto just snorted slightly and shook his head. Thankfully you shouldn't have to deal with that kind of issue, Jiraiya continued as he ignored Naruto. She knows your situation and she's still interested. She's smart, she's determined, and she's going to be a damned looker. What more do you want, kid? I want... Naruto opened his mouth to respond before frowning slightly. Did he really want Sakura anymore? She was just... I want to be Hokage. It was a lame finish and they both knew it as Jiraiya gave the kid a look. That's nice, now go find the girl and ask her on a date. But... what about Sakura-chan? Naruto asked suddenly, desperately. Your teammate? You ever asked her on a date? Jiraiya questioned casually. Yes. She ever said yes? No, Naruto admitted with slumped shoulders. Did she ever blush when she did it, or just get angry and tell you off and or hit you? She only really blushes if Sasuke's involved, Naruto admitted before frowning lightly. What's that have to do with anything? Yeah, it means to give up on her, at least for a while. She's not interested, which is all the more reason to go on a date with a girl who is interested. But, date. Date. Don't. Date. Naruto paused a moment and just glared up at Jiraiya, only to find the man's arms crossed about his chest and standing resolutely before him. Damn it. And make sure you bring her something nice. Jewelry would be best since she already works at a flower shop. Jiraiya nodded his head and rummaged around his vest before pulling out a slim jewelry case. This will do nicely. Cautiously Naruto opened up the case to find a slim, elegant silver chain bracelet and then blinked in surprise. But, wait a minute. You planned this? Of course I did. By the way, never leave your wallet unsupervised around a better ninja than you are, Jiraiya agreed before pulling out a piece of paper. Your reservations are here. You can pick up your outfit here, and, for Kami's sake, please be early. But, and don't worry about reimbursing me. That overstuffed wallet of yours paid for this, just don't forget to tip the serving staff, Jiraiya stated as he handed Naruto a noticeably smaller wallet. I'd also recommend getting a manlier wallet. Gumasha. Nu. He was so nice and full of life. You bastard. Naruto clutched his wallet to his chest and stared in horror at the toad-shaped wallet. Best get used to money being this way now. Easy come, easy go, it is the will of Kami. Jiraiya said sagely. So, best to spend it on fine food, fine clothes and fine women, he paused a moment before smirking. And when you're older, fine wine. Naruto was less than understanding. Oh, yo. Ino blinked slightly and stared at the smirking form of Anko lazily leaning against the side of the building. I'm not running late or something, am I? Nope, training's cancelled today, Anko said as her smirk only grew in size. Why does that worry me? Ino wondered aloud as she warily glanced around. I don't have to worry about something like you deciding to spend the rest of the day randomly throwing dango sticks at me again, do I? Well, I was going to ask if you wanted to come with me to the Brat's welcome back party, but, if you'd rather do that, I'm game. Anko grinned back at Ino. Naruto's back. Ino's eyes lit up immediately. When did he get back? Where is he? Does my hair look alright? Oh, Kami, I don't have on any makeup. Damn, when you get it, you go full hog, don't you, princess? Anko laughed out loud and shook her head. No wonder Inoichi's going spare. Daddy will get over it, Ino waved her hand dismissively. I mean, he never got worked up by me going after Sasuke, right? Anko paused a moment, her face twisting in expression for a moment, before suddenly bursting out into more gut-busting laughter. Ahahaha. Damn, I don't know why I never thought about teaching you little mini-neen earlier. I've never laughed so damned much before. What's so funny this time? Ino frowned, her brow furrowing in confusion, before quickly shaking her head and stomping her foot lightly. Never mind. Where's Naruto? Oh, relax and keep your panties on, Anko grinned at her. I want to watch Inoichi squirm a lot more before he surrenders to the inevitable. Ino blushed a bright crimson as she stared back at Anko. Damn it, don't you have any shame? I left it in my other jacket, Anko said with a shrug and a grin. It clashed with this sexy body of mine. You're impossible. Do I have to track Naruto down myself? Ino paused a moment before frowning. You know what? He's probably at home. Doubtful. Anko grinned back at her, her eyes shining. You know something. Yup. And you're not going to tell me. And spoil my fun? Ino groaned and slumped forward slightly. And I have to go with you in order to find out what. And who says I can't teach? Anko crowed and laughed as she ruffled Ino's hair. Come on, let's go. Onwards. For my great amusement. My life used to be so much simpler, Ino noted with a groan as she nonetheless followed after Anko. Chapter 29. Naruto looked at the scene before him with a look that bordered somewhere between absolute horror and supreme loathing and somehow never managed to lose the extreme strength of either. I have to what? Naruto shouted as he stared from the stuffy-looking shinobi armed with a tape measure and what looked like thin, miniature sanbon. We're here to get you measured up so we can have you looking like a proper young man instead of an eyesore for your date, the stuffy shinobi said simply as he deftly cracked the tape measure like a whip at Naruto's hand when the boy tried to tug at a part of the outfit. No squirming. There was another glare sent at Jiraiya, who ignored it with a roll of his eyes. It's all about learning to blend in, brat. Not just down in the gutters but also among the rich, the noble, the refined, and those who think they are. I'm a fighter. Not a broody peacock. Naruto quickly protested. That's what we have Sasuke for. Jiraiya stifled a snort of amusement as he shook his head while the tailor chuckled softly. Less than you know, kid. Way less than you know. Huh? Naruto blinked in confusion before scowling again. Have you even seen Sasuke? He's all HN this and glare that. You know, when you finally realize the truth, I'm going to laugh, Jiraiya stated mysteriously, his eyes glittering. Oh, how I will laugh. You and half the shinobi forces, the tailor agreed with a chuckle. The rest of them will be wondering why we're laughing. Huh? Naruto stared in confusion at the conversation. Oh, you'll see, Jiraiya said mysteriously as his eyes glittered mischievously. You'll see. Oh. There were always times where words failed to properly sum up the sheer reaction a person could experience due to a specific stimulus. Ino Yamanaka was experiencing such a reaction as she stared in sheer, open-mouthed shock, summed up by a slurring mumble of syllables. Wahoo! Anko was smirking as she pushed the girl into the boutique, her eyes shining with barely constrained mirth as she rubbed her hands together. Fu. Now, my young apprentice, it has come time for you to truly take my entertainment to the next level. Instantly, Ino's eyes snapped back up to Anko's face as she flushed lightly and glared at the woman. I am not your apprentice. And I don't exist for your amusement. Yes, you do, Anko countered brightly as she held up a piece of paper. I won you for a week in poker. What? Ino grabbed the paper from Anko's hand and scanned it quickly before her face flushed even brighter. I'm going to kill him. That's nice, but in the meantime come, my little minion. We have preparations to do. And first, Anko's grin only grew in size as she spread her arms wide. First? Ino asked warily as she glanced around her and then blinked back at Anko. First, make over. Really? Ino blinked, then perked up visibly as she looked at Anko hopefully. Really? Anko agreed, nodding her head eagerly as she rubbed her hands together. Would I lie to you about something like that? Yes, Ino agreed without a moment's hesitation. My precious student wounds me. Anko sighed dramatically, clutching her hand over her heart, before giggling softly. Don't you trust your wise and learned sensei? As soon as I get one, I'll let you know, Ino stated in a complete deadpan. So, make over? HRMPH, if I wasn't going to be enjoying the end result of this so much, I'd be changing my mind right now. You're lucky I'll get more enjoyment out of this than I would out of denying you, princess. Anko stuck her tongue out childishly at Ino. I know somehow there's going to be something in this to make me regret it, but... Ino glanced around the boutique for a moment before grinning. I might as well try to enjoy it as much as I can. That's the spirit. Anko agreed with a grin. Now come along, my little dress-up doll. Time to get you all decked out. I am not a doll. Oh, it fit? Jiraiya asked curiously as he looked at where Naruto was glaring at him in an elegant red and black outfit. Yes, Naruto said curtly. Good, now on to colognes. I hate you. Oh, does it fit? Anko asked curiously as she peeked over and eyed the pale blue dress that hugged Ino's body. Not bad. MHM, it looks good, Ino agreed with a nod. Maybe pile? Maybe pile, Ino agreed with a perky nod. Next? Oh, I have this nice black leather and mesh. Save that for the bitch. I'm not the kinky one, Ino said with a slight blush. Besides, this is for a date, remember? Oh, phew. You're no fun, Anko pouted lightly before pulling out a piece of black silk. The kunoichi's best friend next? Oh, the little black dress. Ino quickly nodded her head before pausing. Wait, I don't want to look too eager. It's the brat. It'd go over his head. Better to save it for a special occasion. More special than your first date? Isn't that implied in what I said? Ino huffed slightly. Ah, right, save it for that special night, Enko agreed with a waggle of her eyebrows. Shut up. Ino blushed crimson and looked away, though she refused to stutter. Fufufu. Ah, my cute little student is growing up so fast. Enko mimed wiping a tear from her eye. I've only known you for a couple of months. And look at how you've grown. Enko agreed before pausing and rubbing her chin a moment, glancing down at her chest. Though, admittedly, you probably won't ever be able to compare to the magnificence that is me, but really, who outside the Hyuga can? Grrrrrrr. Ino growled back at her with a gnashing of her teeth. Relax. If he was interested in that kind of stuff, he would have been all over Kurenai's girl. Enko waved her hand dismissively and then chuckled. I will get you, one of these days, Ino promised. Sure, sure. Next dress, then? Enko asked cheerfully. I want to try the black one first. Fu. Of course you do. Aw, how are the shoes? Jiraiya asked curiously as he glanced back at Naruto. Stiff, uncomfortable, and shoe-like? Naruto half-whined as he pouted at Jiraiya. Why can't I wear my usual? No, Jiraiya responded swiftly and firmly with a shake of his head. You are going on a date, you will dress appropriately. This isn't even a real date. Yes, it is, and you will make sure that girl enjoys herself and your company. You're insane, you know that? Naruto stared back at Jiraiya for a moment. Completely and utterly insane. Just walk around in those shoes for a bit. They'll get more comfortable the longer you wear them. Aw, shoes? Enko asked with a slight arch of the brow. Are you kidding me? With this dress? Ino stared back at Enko for a moment. I know you have an underdeveloped sense of fashion. Hey! I mean, the size of those things on your chest has got to cut off some of the blood flow to your brain. Grr. But even you should be able to tell those straps are completely wrong for this dress. I think I have some straps that will look just perfect around your throat, Enko said sweetly as her eyes narrowed. They'll be very helpful in getting your face to match that wine-colored dress. Ino blinked a moment as Enko's words registered before quickly holding up her hands in front of her. Oh no, I've got a horrible complexion for that. I'd get all splotchy and stuff. That's what concealer is for, my cute little student, Enko stated simply as she took a step towards Ino. It'll ruin the date? Yeah. Can't go ruining Naruto-kun's date night, right? Ino asked quickly as she quickly picked up a pair of shoes, seemingly at random. Plus, think of the shoes. You don't want to subject them to something like that, right? Enko's eyes narrowed into slits as she nonetheless glanced at the plethora of shoes surrounding them. Reluctantly, she straightened up and simply glared at Ino. You're lucky there are so many innocent bystanders, princess. We'll pick this up later. Right, later, Ino nodded in agreement before muttering under her breath. Much later. Not that much later, Enko disagreed with a sweet voice. We still have training in the morning. Curses, Ino muttered sourly. Aw, are we going to accessorize? The shinobi with the tape measure asked Jiraiya. Jiraiya opened his mouth to respond, only to quickly shut it when he felt Naruto's glare hit him. I think my little student here is reaching the limit. Depends, do you want me to send clone patrols to every bathhouse in a 10-mile radius to warn them about you? Naruto asked with narrowed eyes. But, my research. Jiraiya protested quickly. My dignity. Naruto growled back. Dignity is overrated. Research lasts longer. Dignity doesn't keep you warm on those long, lonely nights. Jiraiya countered as his eyes took on a distant look, a slight line of drool forming at the corner of his mouth. Ugh. Naruto quickly took a step away from him. That's just... Ugh. Keep living in denial, young shinobi. It creeps up on you faster that way. Heh. Jiraiya chuckled menacingly as his eyes gleamed. Aw. Now, accessories. Ino chirped eagerly as she rubbed her hands together. Nothing gaudy, Enko stated firmly as she crossed her arms about her chest. Who do you think you're talking to? Ino huffed in irritation. I am the queen of style and elegance. Who sucks at seduction? Enko reminded her with a light grin. But I always look good, Ino said, tilting her head back challengingly as she glared challengingly at Enko. Oh, really? Enko's lips split into a creepy grin as she began to slowly chuckle. Foo. I'm so going to regret saying that, aren't I? Ino fought down the whimper that wanted to burst past her lips. Now, worry too much and it will start giving you wrinkles. Enko's grin didn't dissipate in the least as she spoke. So going to regret it, Ino paused a moment, eyeing Enko thoughtfully. You know I'm going to make you pay if you say it, so best to make sure it's worth it, princess. What? Making comments about the eventual issues with sagging, back pain and stuff like that. I'd never dream of it, Ino said with an overly sweet smile. HRMPH, well, at least you didn't chicken out, even if you will regret the day your great-grandparents ever met, Anko admitted grudgingly before smiling cheerfully. So, how about these earrings? Aw. Sakura blinked, then blinked again as she caught sight of a familiar head of blonde hair carefully walking down the street in a beautiful blue dress. Ino? Blinking slightly, Ino blushed a bit and offered up a light wave. Oh, hey, Sakura. Where are you going all dressed up like that? There was a pause before Sakura smiled slyly and winked at her. You got a hot date you didn't tell me about? Actually I didn't even know about it until a couple of hours ago, Ino said as her blush grew slightly in intensity. Sakura blinked and then blinked again. Wait, what? You have a date? What did you think, I just dressed up to make everyone think I did? Ino glared lightly back at Sakura as her fingers clenched back into fists. Well. Sakura shrugged her shoulders helplessly. Now girls, you can wait until tomorrow to have your rematch, Anko interjected cheerfully. I spent too much time getting Princess here ready for her date with the brat for you to go and ruin all that work. There was a pause before suddenly her smile grew fixed, as the shadows grew across her face. Am I clear? Sakura instinctively shrank away from the frightening expression as Ino shivered involuntarily. Yes, ma'am. Damn it, you're scary enough as it was before. Where the hell did you learn to do that? Ino whined slightly as she flinched at the look. A friend of mine in ANBU, Anko said cheerfully, her expression instantly melting back to bright and cheery. Wait. Sakura paused a moment, before turning her stare back to Ino. You said the brat was? Naruto? You're going on a date with Naruto? Yes. Ino glanced towards Anko, who just grinned back at her. Unless this is just her idea of a twisted and evil joke. Which I really wouldn't put past her, but I think she's being legit right now. Oh, how my cute little student wounds me. However will I recover? Anko mock swooned before rubbing her chin thoughtfully. Well, besides an extra 10 minutes of being my walking Senbon target. Naruto's back and nobody told me. Sakura stared back at Ino before the rest of things caught up with her mind. And the first thing he's doing is going on a date with you? Well, in his defense, we're not giving them a choice in the matter, Anko agreed with a grin. But, if it makes you feel any better, your third teammate is probably going to end up waking up any time now since Tsunade-sama went to the hospital about an hour or so ago. Sasuke-kun's going to wake up? Sakura's eyes widened before grinning triumphantly at Ino. Well, since you're going on a date with Naruto that means all the more Sasuke-kun for me. See you. As Ino blinked slightly as she watched Sakura run away. Ok? Anko asked as she was visibly struggling to not burst into laughter. What were you expecting me to do? Ino blinked slightly in confusion. I mean, I'm not that bad. Anko couldn't fight it any longer as she leaned back and exploded with laughter. Oh, Sasuke-kun. You're awake. Sakura exclaimed with a happy sigh of relief as she burst into the room and saw her teammate sitting up in the bed. Sakura, Sasuke nodded slightly towards her before frowning a bit and looking around worriedly. Where's Naruto? Is he alright? The last thing I remember. She frowned, her eyes narrowing. Itachi. Naruto's fine, Sakura said quickly before frowning slightly. Why wouldn't he be? I mean, he's being a jerk by going out on a date with Ino instead of coming here to make sure you're alright, but… Wait, what? Sasuke's eyes snapped onto Sakura with a frighteningly focused intensity. Sakura shifted uncomfortably beneath the attention. I know, it's rude of him, but he's, well, Naruto. He's an idiot. And Ino's. She stopped there, struggling for the words. Naruto, and Ino? Sasuke repeated, her stare blunted with disbelief. But I thought… You're still so much cooler than Naruto, Sasuke-kun, but this does mean that you don't have to worry about Ino. Sakura paused as Sasuke quickly started to move out of bed. Wait, should you be moving yet? Are you even released? Back off, Sakura, Sasuke growled, her mind flashing back to the cold, bored disinterest Itachi had shown her, her last memories before being dismissed in favor of Naruto. It burned of anger, jealousy and fear. A dark, rotten flame that pulsed through her veins. Then the sudden, searing pain of the seal on her back flaring to life brought her back to reality. Ah? Instinctively Sasuke grabbed the back of her neck, hissing softly as she clenched her eyes tightly shut. Sasuke! Instantly Sakura reached out towards Sasuke, only to have her hand batted away with an angry glare. I said back off. Sasuke hissed, her eyes flashing crimson as Sakura suddenly found herself staring into spinning, half-mature Sharingan eyes. Only she suddenly felt the stinging slap of Sakura's hand slapping out across her face, a surprising strength behind it knocking her face to the side. The shock of it stung more than the actual blow had, as suddenly Sasuke could see the fury in Sakura's eyes flashing through her mind again and again. She almost found herself doing the same back to Sakura, the movement begging to be unleashed, but something, most likely the fury dripping through Sakura's every little tremble, held her hand. "I'm trying to help you." Sakura glared, tears glistening in her eyes as she clenched her fingers back into her dress, digging into the crimson fabric as her eyes vanished beneath her pink bangs. You, Naruto, Ino and Kakashi-sensei are all I have left. I don't want to lose you too." "I?" For a moment Sasuke's mouth went dry as she struggled to find the words, thinking back, trying, desperately to remember what she'd wanted someone to say to her. How she'd ache to have someone comfort her when her world turned into a broken pillar of dust. "Just, remember that," Sakura said softly before she turned, and suddenly she just shrank back, her voice growing soft, almost meek as the realization of what she'd just done settled in. I need to go." And with that Sasuke was suddenly left alone, staring at an empty frame with her cheeks slowly turning a splotchy pink within the outline of a palm print, and a whispering sea of doubts and indecisions. "Aw." Temari glanced over at Kin, then towards Shizune before she saw a vaguely familiar crop of pink hair flashing through the hallways of the hospital in a brisk walk that bordered, barely, on the verge of a full-out run. "Hey, isn't that HRM?" Kin turned her head towards where Sakura was quickly moving past them, tunnel vision preventing her from looking anywhere but straight ahead. "Oh, her?" Shizune asked curiously as she glanced at the pink-haired girl. "One of Naruto-sama's teammates." "The boring one," Kin said blandly as she recalled her encounter with the girl. "She's one of Naruto-kun's teammates?" Shizune blinked in surprise before frowning lightly. "Oh, my, she looks upset." "I don't see why," Tsunade's voice cut in, irritation leaking into her words as she walked back up to the small group. "I just got finished pulling her sensei and other teammate out of that nasty little genjutsu coma of theirs." "Are they all right?" Shizune asked her teacher questioningly. "Have you forgotten who you're talking to?" Tsunade gave Shizune a reproachful look before grunting lightly. "Come on. There's one other team they want me to check on, then we can get out of here and get those two somewhere they won't cause trouble." "You mean somewhere you can get some booze?" Temari noted with a slight smirk. "Same difference," Tsunade said simply with a shrug of her shoulders. "Now come on. We live to serve," Kin said with a bow while Temari and Tsunade both snorted in chorus. "If that was true, the brat would be much happier," Tsunade said with a roll of her eyes. "Well, I don't know, I think at least Kinchan tries," Shizune said thoughtfully as she lightly tapped her lower lip. "She's just too direct about it." "He started tying her up before he goes to bed at night," Temari agreed with a smirk of her own. "If she wasn't so frustrated, I think she'd be enjoying it." "It's getting absolutely ridiculous," Kin muttered sourly as she crossed her arms over her stomach and scowled angrily. "Might be a better idea to let him get more comfortable with the idea," Shizune said diplomatically as she opened up the door to their destination. "What the hell are you doing here?" The voice was almost shrieking as a kunai was immediately pointed straight at Temari as the room was revealed to have a visitor in addition to its patients, with Tenten glaring angrily at the blonde Exuna Nin. "Following them?" Temari gestured vaguely toward Tsunade and Shizune before tilting her head to the side. "Who are you again?" Kin snickered as a sudden twitch appeared in Tenten's right eye. "Ha, and here I thought Naruto-sama was the heartbreaker. Sunshine, I never knew. Should I be afraid for my virtue?" "You can't be afraid for what doesn't exist," Temari said sourly. "You humiliated me and your teammate crippled mine." Tenten growled, even as her face took on a slightly crimson flush. "Well, that does narrow it down. Gaara usually killed people instead of just crippling them," Temari admitted as she tapped the side of her cheek in thought. "Isn't she the girl you wiped the floor with right before Naruto-sama beat me?" Kin offered helpfully with an innocent smile on her face. "Oh, right. The girl who thought it would be a good idea to use nothing but ranged weapons against a girl from Wind Country who carried around a giant fan on her back." Temari struck her palm with a quick nod of her head. "I completely forgot about her." "I'm right here." Tenten growled. "And I guess that Gaara did mess up that guy with those crazy eyebrows and he probably did the same to that white-eyed pretty boy." Temari nodded her head thoughtfully. "You mean that guy with the crazy eyebrows and that white-eyed pretty boy?" Kin asked as she pointed towards Rock Lee and Niji Hyuga, who were both sitting on hospital beds, staring at girls. "Your brother is the reason Guy begged me to see what I could do to help his students regain their burning springtime of youth." Tsunade asked as she arched a brow, reminding the others of her presence. "Tsunade-sama." Tenten actually squeaked as she suddenly realized who was accompanying the kunoichi who had eliminated her from the exam. But, what? How, why? No, when and where? Kin asked Temari with an all-too-innocent smile on her face. I think that's supposed to be here and now, Temari said dryly. I thought she was supposed to be the slow one. I was trying to make her feel better, Kin said unconvincingly. This is a most confusion situation, Lee spoke up as he glanced over at Niji. Do you not agree? Niji snorted softly and shook his head. It just shows what kind of ninja they really are. I think that was supposed to be an insult, Kin noted as she looked towards Niji, who simply glared back at her. I think he really sucks at insults, Temari noted with a shrug. Alright, you two, you can dissect them another time, Tsunade cut in as she glanced at the two boys. Right now, I have work to do. Do we at least get a lollipop? Kin asked hopefully. Shizun, please get these two out of here before I give them something that'll get the brat upset, Tsunade said simply, before leveling a look at the two boys in their beds. As Niji and Lee shifted uncomfortably, Shizun gently pushed Kin and Temari out the door, of course, Tsunade-sama. She paused right before she shut the door behind her. Did you want me to get you a lollipop, too? The door shut just in time for the medical clipboard hit it. Chapter 30. Jiraiya wasn't sure which one of the two was more awkward as they stared at each other with slack-jawed amazement. They stood in contrast to one another. Naruto in his red and black, looking almost dashing if not for the look of a stunned slack-jaw. Ino showed that she had the makings of being a beautiful kunoichi in her smooth blue dress, trimmed in gold, if only she learned to keep her emotions in better check. Still, he was wondering if he was going to have to walk over to them both and rap them on their heads to wake them from their stupor, before Naruto recovered and offered a hesitant smile. You look really good, Ino. Ino beamed for a moment and then recovered as she gave an exaggerated look up and down. You don't look so bad yourself, Naruto-kun. I knew you could clean up nice. He chuckled nervously as he scratched the back of his head. So, we're going to dinner? Well, that's what they said, Ino agreed, before frowning lightly as she noticed his empty hands. No flowers. There was a slight disappointment in her voice as grimaced and quickly responded. Well, no, but, have this? And with that, he almost shoved the slim black jewelry box into Ino's hands. Ino blinked in confusion before she carefully opened it up and then her eyes widened at the slim bracelet inside. Oh, wow. You like it? Naruto asked hopefully. It's lovely, she agreed with a soft smile as she lightly lifted her wrist up. Help me put it on? Sure, Naruto agreed, fumbling with the clasps for only a moment, before he was able to secure it about Ino's wrist. Jiraiya and, from another position a ways away, Anko watched as the date progressed. Awkwardness oozing between the two as they talked about their teammates, their classmates, and what they'd been doing during the time they'd been apart. Dinner was simple and relaxed, though Ino had to help Naruto with picking out something appropriate from the restaurant as he tried to hide his awkwardness. Still, there was no venomous hatred, no coldness from the restaurant. Jiraiya had made sure of that when he'd made the boys' reservations. In fact, everything had been surprisingly normal and predictable. Until Naruto walked Ino to her door. Oh, well, here we are, Ino said, with a small smile on her lips as she stood with her back to the door. Yeah, Naruto agreed, nodding his head slowly as he looked back at Ino, suddenly apprehensive as he watched the way her lips curled back from smile to smirk and he shifted uncomfortably. It was, not bad? Not bad? Ino repeated, her eyes narrowing as her smirk became rather fixed upon her face. Well, I've never been on a date before, and I don't really, well, he said with a reflexive scratch on the back of his head before he shrugged his shoulders. Don't really what? Ino said simply, her smile dimming into a slight frown as she stared at him. I know I always used to want Sakura-chan to go on a date with me, but, if that's what a date is. Naruto shrugged helplessly. I think I'd have more fun training with someone than doing a date. Training. Ino repeated, her eyes slowly narrowing into slits. You'd rather be training than on a date with me. On the building nearby, Jiraiya had cradled his forehead in his palm while Anko blinked, then looked on the verge of bursting into laughter. Well, yeah, Naruto agreed with a nod of his head. I mean, with training you're actually doing stuff, instead of just sitting there, eating, or talking. You don't like talking to me? Ino was glaring openly now. Well, it's alright, but wouldn't you rather be doing it while sparring or something? He took a step back lightly at the look she was giving him. Hey, why were you looking at me like that? We just had a date, a nice first date. I don't know why now, but you were actually good company. We had good food, we looked good, we had a good time, she said, stating the words simply as she stared at him. We get back to my door, and you blow it now. When I wanted my damned goodnight kiss, now you screw it all up. Why were you so angry? Naruto asked her in confusion, staring at her, not quite comprehending what she was saying. You just said you were having a good time, now you're upset? You. Ino flushed, staring back at him, her eyes starting to glisten slightly. How could you just ruin it all like that? But, Naruto frowned in confusion. I just told you that I'd rather be training with you. It was a testament to how completely his guard was down, or maybe how much he trusted her, or simply because he wasn't in combat mode, but he did nothing to stop the sudden gut punch Ino threw into his stomach. Nor was he really ready for the impact, as it made him double over slightly. While he stood there, staring at her with wide eyes, she turned around and fled into her home, slamming the door behind him and leaving him holding his stomach in confusion in the middle of the street. From his spot nearby, Inoichi wasn't quite sure how to feel about the turn of events. On one hand, Ino was pissed at the Uzumaki boy. On the other hand, knowing what he did of Naruto, he was fairly certain the boy was simply a combination of clueless and being too damned honest for his own good. It left him more than a little conflicted, as the boy had, in his own way, been trying to compliment his daughter. Though, he had to admit, it wasn't often you got to see Jiraiya of the Sannin beating his head against the wall while Anko watched and struggled desperately not to explode in laughter. Instead of commenting, though, he chose to walk quietly into his home and silently made his way to Ino's bedroom. It was the quiet sobs that he could hear through the door that resolved the question in his own mind. Naruto had made his daughter cry. No matter how clueless he was, he now had to suffer. It was really as simple as that. Quietly, he brought his hand up and knocked upon the door. Princess? When he received no answer and the sobbing continued unabated, he carefully opened up the door. He shut it again when a kunai buried itself an inch from his face in the door frame. He'd work on comforting her in the morning when he didn't have to worry about disarming her. Oh, you! Jiraiya waited as long as he could before he had appeared before Naruto, his eyes blazing, fury burning like the fires of hell itself, before suddenly he fell to his knees and raised his hands imploringly at Naruto. How could you do it? How could you utterly botch it like that? It was a sure thing. All you had to do was not be himself? Anko noted dryly as she appeared, still grinning like a loon and sipping at a saucer of sake. Damn, though, when you screw it up, you do it with gusto, brat. Naruto stared at the two of them, his face completely blank, before he turned and kept walking. Oi! Anko frowned as she watched the boy continue his walk. Where do you think you're going, brat? Home, Naruto said simply, his eyes half glazed over as he steadily put one foot in front of the other. Home? That's it? That's all the response I get when this is the first you've been in my awesome presence after how long? Anko jumped in front of Naruto, arms crossed beneath her breasts. I don't think so. Try again, brat. I'm going home, Naruto repeated tiredly as he tried to sidestep her. I want to go to sleep and hope that the world makes sense again in the morning. Nuh-uh, she said as she grabbed him by the back of his collar and planted her feet firmly in the street with chakra. You won't escape that easily. Damn it, let me go. Naruto growled, finally showing a bit of emotion as he glared back at her and tried to wrench himself out of her grip. What the hell is wrong with you? What the hell is wrong with me? What the hell is wrong with you? Anko snapped back as she finally stopped smiling and glared at Naruto. You're just gonna mope about it? What am I supposed to do, huh? Naruto growled back, I told you, she doesn't like me, she likes Sasuke. And I'm not Sasuke. How many times do I have to tell you? Jiraiya growled out. She likes? Idiot. Anko cut Jiraiya off as she smacked him on the back of his head. How do you expect to get anywhere with a girl if that's the kind of attitude you have? He's not, obviously. Jiraiya agreed with a nod of his head. You have to know that you can do it. I mean, how can you keep on going about your Hokage goal and then just give up on something like this? I know. Anko agreed, not noticing she had dropped Naruto. It's pathetic. And hypocritical. Absolutely. How could he just go back on everything he stands for? Loudmouth brats with brass balls the world over are hanging their heads in shame. Are you just going to stand there and sulk about this? Jiraiya demanded as he turned his attention back to Naruto, only to blink at the note on the ground where Naruto had been. You two need to pay more attention. Took the brat for therapy. You go. P.S. I already sent a shadow clone to the tailor to charge a new outfit for the brat to the super pervert's account to replace this one. Well, that was nice? Wait, my account? Jiraiya demanded in outrage. Hey! Not so funny when it's someone else pulling it on you, is it, you old pervert? Anko noted with a smirk. Oh, shush, Jiraiya grumbled. Aw. Yugugo deposited Naruto unceremoniously on the ground. You know why you're here, yes? Damn it, why is everyone so damned crazy? Naruto glared back at Yugugo. I'm not even armed. Whose fault is that? Yugugo asked simply with a shrug as she lazily cut a slash across his chest. Fuck. Naruto yelped as he jumped back, his eyes widening for a moment before glaring back at her. Damn it. It's not my fault the old pervert took away all my gear. It's your fault for letting him, she answered simply with a sage nod of her head. But, this is a brand new outfit, he asked hopefully, a touch of desperation entering his voice. I already sent a clone to the tailor to have a new one made for you, she said simply. I'm not getting out of this, am I? Naruto asked rhetorically. No, you're not, she agreed before lazily working on making him bleed. Aw. Again? Kin stared as Naruto was dumped on his bed by Yugugo. He was sulking, again, Yugugo responded simply. He did better this time though, almost hit me a couple of times. I actually had to be serious about it. He did a replacement with a door while we were on the mission. When the door was still attached to the wall before he did it, Temari deadpanned. Damn it, I passed up Sake for this? He's been training with you the whole time? HM? No, just the last hour or so, Yugugo said as she lightly flicked him on his unconscious nose. Before that he was on a date Jiraiya-sama and Anko arranged for him. He was sulking after it imploded, after I expressly informed him that he was not allowed to anymore. He was on a date? Kin repeated, her eyes narrowing into slits. Yes, Yugugo responded with a nod before tilting her head to the side. You know, the whole courting thing that a spoil doesn't get to do anymore, as they only get to have their master in their lives? But, Kin let out a slight keening whine. No fair, damn it. I almost died for him. Do I hear whining? Yugugo asked as she turned her head towards Kin and gave her a sweet smile. Whining? No whining here. Kin quickly shook her head. Why would I whine? Sounded like whining to me, Temari noted with an innocent tone ruined by the smirk she wore on her lips. I have to agree, Yugugo agreed with a nod. And you know what I do with whiners, don't you? But, Kin protested before she quickly found herself being hauled out the window by the back of her jacket as she glared at Temari. This is so not fair. I'll get you for this, I swear, sunshine. I think I hear more whining. Temari called back. So do I. Yugugo's voice agreed. Temari waited a moment, letting Kin's cursing voice trail off, before she turned to Naruto and eyed him critically. And damn, it looks like he was actually wearing a decent outfit too. We'll have to see about having him get some more. Nodding her head, she went to work dragging him to the bathroom so she could wash off the blood and dirt that still lingered on his body. Aw. Naruto groaned softly as he woke to what was unfortunately becoming a familiar situation. He was naked again. He was in his bed. And he wasn't the only naked body in it. Damn it, again, he demanded with a groan before blinking as he could feel his hand on something rather warm and soft. My, Naruto-sama, you're finally getting so forward. You will be gentle, won't you? Temari asked as she smirked back at him. You know what? Naruto looked straight back at Temari, staring into her eyes. Screw it. And he squeezed again, purposely this time. Generally, you want to be a bit gentler with most girls. Not all of them like it that rough, Temari noted, her cheeks pinkening slightly as she bit back on her lower lip. Wah? Kin's slurred voice spoke up as she groggily looked up from Naruto's other side before she blinked at the scene in front of her, unable to fully comprehend it. Wait. Now, personally. Temari's eyes widened as she sudden bit back a gasp. Well, yes, that works. Hold it. How come Sunshine is getting it? Kin demanded as she stared in absolute outrage. Damn it. No fair. MMMPH. Kin tried to glare over the pillow shoved into her face before she blinked as she found herself pulled over Naruto's lap. She barked off a muffled eep as she suddenly felt his palm smacking against her rear. Then, she closed her eyes and grinned slightly as she felt him finally giving in and giving her another spanking. It was some time later that Naruto eventually made it into the shower and from there to his kitchen. Waiting for him, Anko was sitting in a seat, holding a bowl of rice and taking a bite. When she saw him, she paused a moment, arching up a brow and tilting her head to the side. For a moment she studied him, her eyes narrowed just slightly, before she swallowed and set the bowl back down on the table. So, Yugugo got you again, huh? Anko paused a moment before munching on a bit more rice. I don't suppose it would do any good to hope that she didn't ruin that outfit? Completely and utterly destroyed, Naruto agreed, perking up slightly with a quick grin. So, You do realize Jiraiya paid for it with your money, right? Anko responded as she hid her mouth behind her bowl and continued to lazily eat her breakfast. And no, nothing you can do about it as it's been completely ruined. Naruto stared at her a moment, jaw hanging, before he groaned and brought his head down onto the table. Damn it. Can't I win at least a little bit? Not until you've earned it, Anko responded simply before pointing her chopsticks at him. For a ninja, you have to go through hell before you can reach heaven, if you survive that long. You're just doing this because it amuses you, Naruto countered back. No, that's just a really nice perk, Anko said cheerfully as she then gestured towards some miso, rice and fish. Now eat up. You'll be needing your energy. Do I want to know why? Naruto asked as he sat down and pulled over a bowl of rice and eyed it warily. And you cooked this? Yes, I can cook a simple breakfast, and no, I didn't even poison it. It'd ruin the fun later on, she said cheerfully. And curse of being a ninja, brat. You always want to know. More than you don't. However unpleasant it is, knowing keeps you alive longer than not. There was a pause as Naruto took a mouthful of rice and chewed it slowly, a look of concentration on his face, before he looked back at Anko as he swallowed then spoke. Why then? Well, because your team is going to get introduced to your spoils, of course. Anko stated with a broad, shark-like grin on her face. He stared back at her before looking at a bowl of miso and staring at it contemplatively. No, you can't drown yourself in a bowl of miso that small, she stated simply as she went back to eating more of her rice. And you can't become Hokage if you die like that. Has anyone ever told you that you're absolutely evil? He stated simply. More than you can possibly imagine, she agreed with a nod and a smirk. Though you have more valid reasons for it than most of them. Damn it. Oh. Ino groaned softly as she awoke to the stabbing light of the sun streaming brightly through her window. For a moment, she clenched her eyes shut, curling back into her sheets to escape. It was only a moment later when she sighed and stretched out as she reluctantly sat up in her bed and stared, vacantly towards the wall. She still hadn't quite escaped the night before. It simply refused to leave her alone. Everything had been going so well. She'd been so close. So close to perfection. So close to a perfect first date. A perfect first kiss. So close, and then it had simply shattered into blades of cold glass. As her knees curled back against her chest, she allowed herself a moment to simply bury her face against them and feel the trickle of tears left from the night past glisten and wet her eyes. Then she pulled back, her eyes red, her hair matted and unkempt. Turning, she looked into the mirror atop her nearby dresser, staring at the horrible mess she appeared to be. Then a flash of brilliance caught her eye and she stared at the simple silver bracelet still adorning her wrist. The bracelet, she was still wearing it. She was still wearing the bracelet Naruto had given her. For a moment she was tempted to simply tear it off, to throw it away. It reminded her of how horribly the date had gone. It was a reminder that he had hurt her worse than she thought he could. But she found she couldn't. Instead, she rolled out of bed and stood up before she quietly walked towards the dresser. She reached down to the clasp and touched against the latch as she involuntarily felt a shiver run down her spine, the phantom touch of Naruto's fingers helping her latch it about her wrist. For a moment, she fiddled with it, biting down on her lower lip, before she frowned steeled her nerves. She was just going to take it off. It's not like she'd never put it back on again. Quietly assured, she opened the latch and carefully set it on a carefully cleared space on the dresser, then walked towards the shower. She needed to clear her head. Training wasn't something she could afford to go into with all these thoughts running through her head. Especially not with Anko and Yugugo involved. She'd figure out what she is going to do about Naruto later. "Oh, how are you doing, princess?" Inoichi asked carefully as he watched his daughter walk downstairs, dressed in a simple pair of black combat pants, a sleeveless purple shirt looking roughly like her typical outfit, with a mesh armor running down her to her wrists. Ino looked at her father for a moment, debating how to answer the question as she recalled the kunai she'd thrown into the door frame she'd had to retrieve after taking her shower, and winced softly. "Sorry about the kunai, Daddy. It happens." Inoichi waved away her apology as he looked at her. "I just wanted to make sure you were doing all right. I didn't really feel much like talking last night," she said simply and nodded her head as she sat down to her seat. "Oh? And why's that?" Ino's mother spoke up as she put down a bowl of miso before Ino, next to a matching bowl of rice and some pickles. "I had a date last night," Ino said simply as she shifted uncomfortably and stared down into her miso as her fingers fidgeted about her chopsticks, letting them nervously roll through her fingers. Ino's mother froze in place before slowly looking at Ino with a blank stare, carefully setting her own bowl down with a firm, solid impact. "Oh? I hadn't heard that." As Inoichi shrank slightly from the sound of subtle accusation in her voice, Ino shrugged her shoulders a bit. I didn't know I was going on it until yesterday afternoon and I was too busy getting ready to come tell you. Too busy getting ready, she repeated as she slowly arched up an elegant, dark brow. And how did you get ready without coming home? Enko-sensei dragged me off for it and helped me get ready for it. I was in boutiques and salons until I went on the actual date, Ino answered, fighting down the urge to flinch beneath her mother's accusing glare. I was completely busy until I got home. And why didn't you tell me about it when you got home then? Ino fidgeted again and looked away her chopsticks, pausing as she clenched her fingers tightly about them. I didn't want to talk to anyone after it. She threw a kunai at me when I tried to check on her, Inoichi agreed in his daughter's defense. He immediately regretted it when his wife turned her attention onto him and carefully arched a brow at him. Oh? So you knew about this? Inoichi froze for a moment and then shrugged helplessly back at his wife. Well, I might possibly have gotten a bit of information on it from work. I thought she'd tell you and I only really saw the end of it. And you didn't come get me? He winced again, glancing towards Ino for support, only to see she was glaring at him as well. You were watching us? Well, I might have happened to catch a peek or two, he answered hedgingly and shrank slightly from the looks. What? She didn't give me a chance to give him a proper speech. Who was it? Ino's mother cut in. Shikamaru? Chuji? Maybe the Aburame boy, very polite that one. No. No. And no. Ino shook her head quickly. It wasn't that Sasuke boy, was it? She asked, her tone as flat as her eyes as she just looked at her daughter. No, it wasn't Sasuke. Ino agreed with a blush on her face and a light glare. It was with Naruto. And he completely ruined it. There was a pause as Ino watched her mother digest those words before she paused a moment, then visibly fought down the urge to groan and palm her face as she closed her eyes, tilted her head back and took a slow, deep breath, before she spoke. What did you do, Ino? Me, she stared at her mother, her mouth hanging open, before she stood up, slamming her hands down on the table. What did I do? It was a great date. It was practically perfect until he ruined it. And how did he ruin it? She asked simply, arching a brow, her tone neither accusatory nor commiserating. He? Ino flushed again, tears lightly glistening in her eyes again. He told me he'd rather be training with me than going on a date with me. Ino watched as her mother very slowly brought her bowl of miso up to her lips, carefully, elegantly took a sip, and then set it down onto the table before her. And you took that as an insult. How is that not an insult? Ino demanded as she stared back at her mother, mouth hanging agape. It is the opposite of romantic. Uzumaki-san's parents' first date involved the utter decimation of 2 squads of Kumonin. Ino's mother said with a quiet force of silk-covered steel as she lifted up her bowl and began to slowly inspect it, as if searching out any visible flaw. Their second involved the near-complete destruction of a training ground. Their third involved them practically tearing each other's clothing apart at the end of a spar and rutting like animals then and there. Ah, I'd almost forgotten that, Inoichi admitted wistfully as he looked off into the distance. Kunaruto's mother, like her son, wasn't exactly known for her subtlety. Indeed, his wife agreed with a slight smile over the bowl. She was a very passionate woman. A shame they didn't live to raise him. As far as he's come without them, imagine how far it would be if he had them. But, Ino stared at her mother, mouth hanging slightly, disbelief written across her features. You did know he's an orphan, didn't you, Ino? Her mother asked patiently before she took a slow sip of her miso. Yes? I mean, I knew he lived on his own. Ino admitted as she shifted uncomfortably. His parents died the day he was born, she agreed as she quietly set the bowl back down on the table with a soft, purposeful click. They died together. If it wasn't so tragic, it would almost be romantic. But, because of it, and because of certain circumstances, he was forced to primarily raise himself. But, how can he? Ino stumbled over her words as she struggled to make sense of what her mother was telling her, against her own notions of how things were supposed to be. Does he like to train? Her mother asked suddenly. Spend all his free time doing it? Slowly, Ino nodded her head, confusion on her face as she looked questioningly back at her mother. Yes? Her mother smiled an odd, nostalgic smile she knew she'd seen before, but she couldn't quite place, before she took another soft sip and then looked out the window. His father was like that. He always had to push himself harder, further, higher than anyone else. She then turned her head and looked back at her daughter, something so important to him, almost vital, wouldn't you say, Ino-chan? And he said he'd rather you were taking part in it with him than on a date. Inoichi made the connection first, looking, for a moment, as if he were on the verge of breaking down into tears as the realization hit him. His daughter took a moment longer, her eyes blinking owlishly back at her mother. Then she collapsed back into her seat and groaned softly as she brought her forehead to the table. I'm an idiot. I'm an idiot. I'm an idiot, Ino repeated as she struck her head against the table. Ino-chan, her mother spoke up in a calm, sweet tone. Yes? Ino paused and looked up. I would suggest an apology instead. She sipped her miso again before cutting her off with a thin smile. After breakfast. Ino's shoulders slumped and she nodded her head. Yes, mother. Inoichi looked like he wanted to pick up where Ino left off, but one look from the corner of his wife's eye was enough warning for him to behave. Unspoken was the or else in that look. One he'd been married long enough to know he didn't want to find out what that or else was.